Diaz was standing in the middle of a massive, epic field that stretched out so far you couldn't even see the end of it. This huge place was finally his turf, but even with that big win, all he saw was endless grass covering every single inch of the land. His mom always told him to protect the people he loves, and that became her final wish before she died. His dad's dying wish was for him to protect the weak, and since he lost his parents at such a young age, he's determined to honor their name by following those final words forever. He said a sad goodbye to their memory and finally moved on. But right when he turned 15, a brutal war broke out between his home and the neighboring lands. To honor his parents, and this brutal war dragged on for 20 long years. By the time it was finally over, she was already 35. Both sides signed a peace treaty and finally stopped all the fight. Peace is finally here so he can chill for a bit, and since he totally carried the army with his insane skills, they officially gave him the title of hero. The king thanked him face to face for all those wins and decided he deserved a massive upgrade, making him a lord and giving him his very own land to rule. He didn't have any school smarts and was only good for fighting, so he was totally confused when they gave him this huge promotion. But then they told him the deal. His new job was to guard the land, keep the people safe, and make sure the king got his tax money. He knew his first move had to be checking out his new land. So even though he wasn't really feeling it, he packed his gear onto a cart and hit the road. He barely had a second to get ready before they hauled him out of the capital, and some official watched him like a hawk the entire trip. They finally reached the middle of the new land and stopped as the official started pointing out exactly where the borders were. All he saw ahead was a never-ending field of grass, so his whole domain was basically just one giant flat plain. The official figured this place was perfect for a guy like Diaz, so now he just had to suck it up and try to make it work. The official named the land plain Natros and the guy Diaz, so everyone's called him Diaz Natros ever since. Diaz was so relieved to finally find some clean water. Back in the war, he had to choke down nasty, muddy water, so this was a huge win for him. But after walking for miles, he wondered if this grass was actually useful, but honestly, the whole place just felt super heavy and totally miserable. He figured he'd sleep on it and really think things through tomorrow. He had to find a way to survive this total wasteland before it was too late. He gave himself a strict 2. He only planned to stay for a bit before dipping out, hoping he could save someone and finally make his parents' last wish come true. Out of nowhere, a voice starts shouting his name and telling him he needs to wake up. He snaps his eyes open to see a girl standing right there, and for a second, he totally thinks she's just a normal person. He spotted a horn sticking out of her head and totally changed his mind about her, so she demanded to know who he was and why he was there. Diaz introduced himself and said he was obviously just sleeping, so the girl asked why he picked this exact spot to crash. He straight up admitted he had nowhere else to crash, so she totally lost it that he was even on the plane, but he just chilly told her he was ordered to live there. She totally roasted him and called him an idiot, but he didn't even deny it, and told her this was his home now. She asked him what his whole purpose was, and he told her his only goal is to survive if things ever get really bad. Right after he spoke, she pulled back her bow and aimed an arrow straight at him, making Diaz freak out and beg her to stop while she warned him to tell the truth if he wanted to live. But he swore he was being totally honest. He's doing this to honor his parents' final wishes and help anyone he can, swearing to protect the weak, because that's the path he's chosen for his life. She called him a liar, but Diaz kept it cool and said he had no reason to fake anything, so she decided to find out once and for all if he was a friend or an enemy. Diaz stood tall and declared he was her protector, swearing that as long as he's around, absolutely no one is going to lay a finger on her. Suddenly, her horn starts glowing out of nowhere, and Diaz is totally shocked to see this weird blue light shining from it. The girl was totally freaking out, crying that the blue fire shouldn't be there and that this whole thing had to be a huge mistake. Out of nowhere, she grabs Diaz's hand and starts dragging him away while he tries to pull back and figure out what she's even doing. The girl told him to just shut up and follow her to her village, but Diaz was pretty sure there was no way a town could exist in this middle-of-nowhere wasteland. He followed her all day until the sun finally started to set. They eventually made it to the village. He was totally blown away because the place looked way more incredible than anything he'd done. The leader spotted the stranger Aruna brought along and immediately wondered if this guy was the reason for that crazy blue light. Aruna confirmed she found him passed out and tried to grill him, but he was being super stubborn and asking total nonsense. And right as she asked if he was a friend or an enemy, this crazy blue light just exploded out of nowhere. The chief asked again if there was any red light, but Aruna insisted it was 100% pure blue, which really caught the chief's attention. She looks right at Diaz, calls him the Blue Man, and asks what his name actually means. He hesitates for a second before introducing himself, and the chief says the name Diaz sounds supers. Diaz told them that since he owns this entire plane now, everyone on it is officially his friend, even the peasants. And when the chief asked why he'd care so much, Diaz just said it was his duty to look out for them. The leader didn't even ask who put him in charge of such a massive mission. Diaz hesitated for a moment but then said it probably came straight from the king himself. Suddenly, Aruna pulls. The chief told her to chill out, so she turned back to Diaz and demanded he spill everything, from the very start to how he even got that order from the king. Diaz was still pretty confused about the whole story, but he opened up anyway, telling them all about his childhood and the rough times after his parents died. After hearing his story, the leader finally understood everything, admitting she never expected to find someone with such an incredible soul unless they were born with a horn. So she dubbed him Diaz the Blue, and officially recognized. The leader gets super serious and asks what Diaz will do if the villagers refuse to follow him, but Diaz just says they can be friends even if they aren't his subjects. Diaz acted all confident and said if he had to, he'd just share this world with them like a good neighbor and help out whenever they needed it, thinking they'd eventually become friends. Diaz started getting suspicious of the chief's weird questions and realized these villagers might not actually be his people, which totally blew his mind since he thought everything on his land belonged to him. The chief was right all along, and she confirmed that these villagers definitely didn't answer to Diaz. To make things worse, they were his king's sworn enemies who had been at war with the kingdom of Diaz for years. They used to be his enemies, but now they're totally down to be friends because she pointed out that Diaz is one of those super rare blue ones who can finally live in peace with them. The leader told him to look up and said he was ready to hear his side of the story. She called herself Moro, the leader of the Oni. Her tribe spent 50 years fighting non-stop wars just to rule this land. But they finally got crushed and were kicked out of their home. He was confused how anyone still lived on the plains after being kicked out. But Moro explained their horns are packed with magic that gives them powers regular people can't even touch. They use this insane fog magic to hide their entire village, letting them move back and live in total secret right under the kingdom's nose. Diaz was totally stunned and didn't know if he should tell his king, but Moro said she only spilled the secret because he was literally glowing with a blue light. She said the soul judgment magic glows red if someone is hostile, but it hasn't reacted at all. Basically, red means you're a dangerous villain. White means you're totally quad. Mora pointed out that most kids his age wouldn't care this much about their parents' final wishes, admitting he'd never met anyone so stubborn yet totally real in his entire life, leaving Diaz wondering if that was even a compliment. The chief wouldn't admit how lucky they were to have this lord, but Diaz saw that even though they were out in the open, they could travel anywhere and live in peace without anyone hunting them down. Moru explains they're totally stuck because they need those meme cattle to survive, and since they only live here, moving isn't an option. She warns DS he has to step up and be. Diaz asked about the old lord, and Moru explained the guy was a total mess who lived far away and just died of some sickness, so the village elder stepped up and offered Diaz everything he needed, from a place to live to their own farm animals, since he had absolutely nothing. The boss kept the village a total secret from everyone in the capital, even the king, so now its safety depends on Diaz keeping his mouth shut, but at least he can count on Arunas. The girl was totally stunned, but Moru explained that surviving the plains takes serious skills, so Aruna has to move in with Diaz to show him the ropes. Since she brought this stranger to the village, his life is now her problem. DS realized this was the big moment where he finally became a lord and started his new life living under the same roof as Arun. He thought about the Memu, these two-horned animals covered in super fluffy wool that people trade for supplies instead of eating them. Aruna explains that the more grass these Memus eat, the faster their fur grows back, which the villagers then trade for food and everything else they need to survive. Diaz was actually shocked, but since he sounded like he didn't get the hype, Aruna got super annoyed and chewed him out for not paying attention, making him scramble to prove he was being totally serious. Diaz realized he was a total beginner who had to learn everything from fixing yurts to looking after Memo. And even though Aruna was stuck there against her will, she was still being a Mei. With everyone finally putting their faith in him, Diaz got an official document that hyped him up to be the best lord possible, so he immediately started plotting how to get way more people to move to his land. He asked Aruna for advice on how to get more people to move to his area, but she just gave him some attitude and said he was trying to do way too much at once. He could tell she was totally annoyed, and since this place doesn't keep track of its people, he had no clue how many were actually living there. Aruna tells him to stop obsessing over the population and check his supplies because he's only got one tent and enough food for a single person. She warned him that if he keeps bringing people in with zero food, they're all going to starve or get sick and die. She told him he had to realize how messed up the situation really. He admitted he was hoping the village would step up if he got more people on his side, but Aruna shut that down real quick and told him to get that idea out of his head. So DS just owned up to his mistake and told her to forget he even brought it up. He knew he had to sort out food and shelter first, but Aruna just called him a clueless leader and tossed him a bag, leaving DS wondering what was actually inside. Aruna explains the bag is full of earth matabi, a special grass that wild animals go crazy for. So if you scatter it around, they'll come charging toward the smell. And while she explains that hunting with a matabi gets them way more than just meat, since they can trade those skins and horns for food or even a yurt to help their territory grow. DS loved the idea and got super hyped, saying he's most confident when hunting because he doesn't even have to think. Aruna's final warning was to keep the wind at his back and only use the matabi far away so the animals wouldn't attack the village. And once DS found the perfect spot, he knew it was go time. Aruna didn't say exactly how much matabi to use, so he didn't waste any time and just dumped the whole bag on the ground. With the work done, all he had to do was wait for the animals to show up. He started wondering how many beasts it would take to trade for a single yurt. Maybe just one would be. DS realized this job was going to take way longer than a day, and out of nowhere, a huge pack of wild animals surrounded him. He was totally blown away and had no clue where they all came from. But he knew if he took them out, he'd reach his goal right then and there, and man, DS was feeling super confident. His strategy was super simple. He just swung that massive axe with everything he had and trusted his gut. And even if it wasn't a fancy style, it totally worked for him. He tried learning the sword and bow, but it was way too confusing since he couldn't read his enemies or time his attacks. And while he didn't want to call himself stupid, that battle axe was a total game changer for him. With this weapon, he didn't even have to worry about a plan anymore. If the enemy had a shield, as the survivors bolted, he realized he'd already taken out half the pack, and it was way easier than he thought since their moves were so basic. He finally saw how massive his haul was, but he had no clue how to get it all back home since he'd jumped into the fight without a plan for carrying. DS knew Aruna was about to call him a brainless lord again, and he definitely couldn't handle her icy stare. Aruna showed up and was totally blown away, telling him that taking down a black buffalo on his very first hunt was a massive achievement for him. DS was totally confused because he didn't even notice a black buffalo in the herd, and when Aruna asked for the score, he realized he'd only taken out about half of them, estimating he'd wrecked around 30 or 40 animals. Aruna stared at the massive haul of animals and was seriously impressed, realizing DS was way cooler than she thought since he didn't even brag about it. Aruna swore she was being totally serious since she'd never met anyone as brave or strong as DS, and she promised to tell all the village boys that the black buffaloes he took down were officially his. Moro gave DS major props for his strength, saying that taking out 30 black buffaloes at once was insanely brave. But this actually made DS realize his own idea of courage was totally different from what the village believed. Moro explains that in his world, being a man is about the whole package. It means working hard, being someone people can trust, and always finding a way to win. When you put it all, DS wanted to see if his brave stunt finally made Aruna like him, and Moro just smirked, saying that since Aruna is the hottest girl in the village, it makes sense she'd want a hero. She even joked that she'd take a shot at him herself if he were a bit younger. DS asked if being a tough guy was the secret to getting girls, and Moro confirmed that for the village women, being manly is the only thing that matters. Looks and smooth talking don't mean a thing. She told him straight up that a pretty face won't feed anyone, and in her tribe, marrying a guy who isn't tough means the whole family is going to starve. DS finally realized that the rules of this world were totally different, but then Moro changed the subject and told him that if he really wanted to marry Aruna, he'd have to pay a bribe. Moro hypes up Aruna as a total beauty and a hard worker who's worth a massive price. So the chief demands every single trophy DS wins in a day as her ransom, leaving DS completely shocked by the sudden deal. Moro laid out the rules they needed to follow to team up, and DS quickly realized that Oni marriage customs were totally different from anything he'd ever seen. He told himself that now wasn't. Moro tried to chill him out by saying Oni can have kids with almost any race, but DS shut him down instantly, saying that wasn't the point at all. Morning rolls around and Aruna greets DS, telling him she's already got breakfast waiting for him. He was hyped to see the food looked amazing, and Aruna got totally flustered but couldn't stop smiling. DS loved the food, And when Aruna asked about hunting, he said they were good for now, but warned that more people meant they'd need a well, a granary, and gear to move water. Aruna explains they need more trade goods to hire craftsmen. So when Diaz suggests hunting black buffalo again, she tells him the village is already stocked up and suggests they start hunting monsters instead. Monsters are the first thing that pop into Diaz's head. He knew these monsters crawled out of dark mist, dungeons, or old ruins, and since they absolutely hated life, they'd go totally berserk and wreck everything in their path. You can't eat them because their meat and blood are straight-up poison, but their skin, claws, and that super valuable demon core near the heart are used for everything. Diaz was pretty worried about the monsters lurking around, but Aruna told him there weren't many and promised to use her magic to track them so he'd stay safe during the hunt. Diaz tried to stop her since he thought hunting was way too dangerous. He told her to just point him in the right direction and stay behind, but Aruna was super confident and said that. The next morning, Diaz says hi to Francois and Francesca, the boy and girl memo he got from the Moru chief. Diaz saw the villagers coming with gear to trade for a buffalo, but he felt super awkward because he hadn't even shaved and looked like a total mess. Aruna walked up and said she was totally set, and Diaz just gave a quick nod, saying he was ready too. The second they laid eyes on Aruna, every guy there just froze. She looked like a totally different person with her new makeup, and even a guy as dense as Diaz figured out exactly what was going on right away. Aruna put the other guys in charge of Mimu so she could spend the entire day hanging out with Diaz. Diaz saw the look on everyone's faces and knew he had to get out of there fast, so he pushed the group to start the monster hunt immediately before things got messy. Diaz remembered that the northern plains were a total hotspot for random monster attacks. This place was crawling with deadly monsters, but Diaz knew that if they could just grab parts from one or two of them, they'd have enough to finally start building a well in the warehouse. Aruna's hyped to track down monsters with her magic, proving she's not just good at chores, and actually packs some seriously insane power. Diaz could tell she was ready and gave her the green light, so Aruna locked in and started chanting her spell right away. She finally tracked down the beast, and it was so massive and scary that it probably chased off every other monster in the area just by being there. Diaz realized these enemies were the real deal, so he decided to scout ahead and told Aruna to find a safe spot to lay low. Aruna wasn't backing down, reminding them that her masking magic could help them hide or escape if things got too dangerous. Diaz realized this girl was seriously tough, and since keeping Aruna safe was his #1 priority, he finally agreed to go with her. They followed the noise, and Aruna's heart dropped the second she realized what they were actually up against. Diaz thought he was looking at a massive turtle, but Aruna told him it was actually a crazy powerful earth dragon. This monster was seriously deadly, and she had no idea why a beast like that was even there. Diaz didn't waste a second and charged straight into the fight, telling Aruna to stay back and hide, but she called him a total idiot for being so reckless since taking on a beast. Diaz swore to himself that he wouldn't let that monster catch them. He started planning his next move. He thought if he aimed for the legs near the neck, the beast might retreat into. He jumps in for a hit, but the shell is way too hard, so he aims for the neck instead, but the monster just hides inside its armor right away. Diaz was totally caught off guard because he never expected the monster to protect its weak spot so perfectly. Aruna was totally freaking out and begging him to run since soloing an earth dragon is basically suicide, but Diaz wasn't backing down without a fight. Even if he knew he'd be, he figured if the first hit didn't work, he'd just swing again, and if that didn't do it, he'd go for a third. He'd learned to fight until his body literally gave out, so Diaz just kept hammering away at that arm. A crack finally formed on his weapon, but Diaz just closed his eyes and commanded it to repair, sending a magic glow over the blade that left Aruna absolutely stunned as she watched it fix itself. Diaz remembers first using this power back in his soldier days, when he swiped that axe from an enemy warrior as a trophy because it looked totally epic and hit like a beast. This axe is super rare because it fixes itself automatically, and Diaz can even trigger the repairs just by using his mind. Hyped up for round 2, he's totally gassed and dripping sweat, but he refuses to quit even though he can't even put a dent in that shell. Twilight was becoming a total nightmare, and they had to get out of there, but he was beating himself up for not being able to take down that beast of a turtle. Diaz saw Aruna shivering from the cold and started to panic, so he went for another strike and finally landed the hit. The armor finally shattered, and Aruna was totally shocked to see that DS actually managed to break through the monster's shell. The dragon bursts out of hiding, starts glowing, and goes for the kill, but Diaz scrambles up from the dirt and hits it right back. That monster scrambled to find a hiding spot once more. Aruna felt the earth dragon's toxic magic fog, making her head spin from a mile away. but she was totally stumped as to why Diaz wasn't affected by it at all. Diaz kept hammering away at the crack and realized the dragon wasn't even fighting back, since it looked like nobody had ever tried to hurt it before. He totally snapped and started swinging wildly like a maniac. It was obvious the beast had completely lost its mind. Diaz realized that if this kept up, he was finally going to take down the ultimate. Right in the middle of a massive attack, Diaz spots Aruna collapsed on the ground and realizes she's in terrible shape, which sends him into a total rage. He realized the monster wasn't even after him. It was going straight for Aruna, and that made him totally snap. Diaz couldn't just stand there after promising to keep her safe, because she wasn't just some girl he knew. She was his friend, and he was ready to take on anyone, no matter. He didn't waste a second, charging straight in and hitting that monster with every bit of power he had. He was totally locked in and more hyped than ever. Every single muscle. He rushed over to Aruna to check on her, leaning down and desperately hoping she'd finally snapped out of it. Still shaking and feeling totally weak, Aruna grabbed him in a tight hug and just let the tears fall as the weight of everything that happened finally hit her. Diaz was totally caught off guard. He had no clue how to handle all these intense feelings. He just whispered her name, trying to figure out what was going on. Aruna kept her eyes glued too. Diaz was totally stunned and couldn't believe his ears, but Aruna just doubled down and said it again with zero hesitation. Right in the middle of the tension, a villager runs up and shouts that Diaz and Aruna have been gone way too long, and now a whole crowd of worried people is heading their way to see what's wrong. They rushed over and were totally floored to see the earth dragon lying there, completely beaten. Their jaws dropped because they couldn't believe a monster that powerful could actually be taken out. Her hug was way more powerful than a dragon's punch. And since Diaz couldn't wiggle free at all, he tried to call her name to snap her out of it, but the village guys were totally floored to see a massive earth dragon taken down, and as soon as they heard Master Diaz was the one who did it, they started freaking out and spreading the news to everyone. Diaz remembered how insane that struggle was, since even with every guy in the village pulling together, it took the entire night just to drag that dragon's body into the center of town by morning. When they show up, Moru is totally shocked because nobody thought one guy could solo such a beast, and she's losing it over how Diaz survived that deadly dragon mist without a scratch. Diaz realized the monster parts were worth a fortune, but since the village was broke, he processed the body for a huge discount and used the cash to build a well, a storage shed, a yurt, and a spot for the leftover loot. Moore agreed, but insisted on keeping some of the loot to trade with the incoming merchants so he could build some solid business connections as a lord, while she started planning their next move. Mora reminds him they need a wedding gift for Aruna and suggests Diaz give her family a piece of the dragon to totally win over her parents. Diaz tried to argue about the wedding gift, but Moru just smirked and told him the wedding was happening whether he liked it or not, because the village wouldn't trust a dragon. In a place this sketchy, fear spreads fast. But after Diaz crushed that monster, he looked like a total legend, and turning down Aruna just made every other girl want him even more. Proving Moru was totally right, the little girl dashed over to Diaz, hugged his leg as hard as she could, and looked up at him with pure love in her eyes. The rest of the girls in the village were staring at him with total respect. Maru says the girls are backing off because they know these guys only pick one wife, and they're 100% sure Aruna is the one. Diaz knew he was totally stuck, so he suggested they just get engaged for now to keep things from moving way too fast. Moro explained that their people didn't even have a word for that, but Aruna was already telling her parents about the wedding. So now Diaz just had to pick a date that made everyone. Right then, Diaz realized where Aruna had vanished, and they officially teamed up right on the spot. He realized she was the whole package. She was gorgeous, super sweet, and handled the house so perfectly that he started thinking getting married might actually be a pretty sweet deal. Realizing he's already 35, he decides it's time to start a family and asks a local about Aruni's age. The guy calls him the Dragon Slayer and says, Diaz was totally shaking inside because he expected her to be young. But the age gap was so massive it felt more like a father and daughter situation. In this kingdom, the law says a girl can't get married until she's 18. That means they've got to wait 3 whole years before they can tie the knot. Diaz knew just calling this a delay would be a total insult to Arunas, so he decided to go all in to prove his loyalty as both a leader and a man. It's been a month since Diaz and Aruna got engaged, and after digging a well and building a warehouse, their lives are finally getting way more comfortable. But one thing was still stuck. His town's population just wouldn't grow. He had some ideas to bring in more people, but he wasn't sure if they'd actually work. He wished new people would just drop straight out of the sky, and even though he acted like it was no big deal, he was actually low-key freaking out inside. Just then, Aruna rushes over with a huge smile and tells him she's pregnant, leaving him so stunned he has to ask her to repeat it just to be sure. She flashed a huge smile and confirmed the news. They're officially having a baby, and they both started celebrating like crazy. Feeling hyped, Diaz grabbed his notes to praise Frances, calling her a good girl and getting super excited because she's officially pregnant. He turned to Francois and thanked him for all the hard work, seeing that nature had already done its thing. He remembered Aruna saying Mimas are actually geniuses who understand everything we say. And since they can learn our language in just a week, they basically chose to live with humans just to get free food and a safe place to stay. Aruna warned him it wasn't that easy because even though Memu are smart, they get super weak and scared when they're pregnant. To help them deal with their anxiety, she told Diaz to stay with the pack as much as possible, especially at night. Since he's the strongest leader and the only one who makes them feel truly, Diaz totally got it, and realized his job was way bigger now, since he had to protect every single creature that trusted him. So he even started sleeping right next to Memo to make sure they felt safe. Aruna kept her cool and told them they had to lug that pregnant meme straight into the yurt. But even though it's a total tradition, the village guys hated it because it looked nasty. Everyone else was totally creeped out because the meme just wouldn't stop staring at them. It was so unsettling that nobody could even relax or find any peace. But Diaz just laughed it off and said he totally saw Frances and Francois as real family, and with babies on the way, he didn't care about any trouble as long as they were safe. Aruna was totally moved by what he said. He wasn't just being supportive, he actually cared about her. She was so hyped to see that her husband was actually this kind and brave. Diaz thought the Memu sounded super weird since every noise they made was exactly the same to him. But Aruna could actually tell their voices apart and even talked back like she understood every word. Aruna was totally caught off guard by what Frances said, and she got super emotional. She got all shy and insisted things with Diaz weren't serious yet, basically telling the animal to stop teasing her and stay out of her business. Suddenly, her horn starts glowing with a green light Diaz has never seen before, and he realizes the barrier is picking up something outside. Aruna quickly warns him that about 10 riders are charging in from the... He saw the magic horn glowing green and knew an invasion was starting, so he realized that whoever was coming from the east could be a group of messengers or even a bunch of scary bandits. If those riders are actually armed, things are about to get dangerous, so he heads out to scout them while telling Aranit to use her magic to hide the entire village from sight. Memo could feel the tension rising, but he told everyone to stay cool and promised he'd be back before they knew it. He was totally confident because there were only 10 of them. And after taking down a whole dragon, these guys were basically nothing. Aruna promised to take care of the house and told Diaz she was counting on him, which totally fired him up. He scanned the area as he walked and spotted 3 riders plus 4 guys on foot, making him realize Aruna must have counted the horses to get 10, and Diaz could tell these dudes were definitely looking for trouble. He was ready to jump them first if they had archers to avoid any damage. But as he got closer, he heard a voice he knew and someone shouted his name with a huge smile. Turns out it was Klaus, his old war buddy. This guy totally looked up to Diaz from the start, even though Diaz came from nothing. Klaus was a ride-or-die ally that Diaz was totally hyped to see him. He was genuinely stoked to run into Klaus and asked what he was even doing there. Klaus didn't hesitate, explaining that he's currently working as a... Diaz froze up, knowing rich nobles don't just show up here for nothing, and he immediately started wondering who these guys were and what they actually wanted from him. Klaus super politely asked Diaz to take them to his mansion, saying he'd really appreciate it since everyone was totally wiped out from the long journey and needed to crash. Diaz agreed right away and told them to follow him back to his place, while Klaus just laughed, totally hyped for what was about to go down. He started getting super hyped thinking about Diaz, already picturing a city full of massive, expensive buildings in his head. They finally arrived, but everyone was super confused to see a basic little tent instead of the massive palace you'd expect for someone that important. Diaz saw that everything was totally hidden except for the yurt, which was actually just supposed to be a practice build. He had to give it to them. The camouflage worked way better than he thought. One of the girls steps up and introduces herself as Diana, the 3rd princess, saying she's stoked to meet the hero, but she's super confused why there's just a tiny tent here instead of a huge mansion, especially since there aren't even any workers around building. But before he could finish, the guy next to him totally snapped and chewed Diaz out for being disrespectful, yelling that he needs to call her Her Highness instead. Diana told them to just drop it and stop interfering so they wouldn't stand out. Then Diaz dropped a bombshell, He didn't actually have any workers or even the supplies to build anything. That, he said it might not look like much, but he built the whole thing solo and got hurt plenty of times while working on it. Diana was totally shocked and asked if he really built it all by himself, wondering where his crew was, but Diaz explained that there wasn't a single carpenter to be found in this empty wasteland. The princess was super suspicious because she knew her dad's will promised Diaz a massive payout, tons of cash to build up his land, and all sorts of legendary hero rewards. Diaz was fuming because despite all the big talk, he hadn't seen a single cent or any help, feeling like a stray dog kicked to the curb. Except there wasn't even a curb to sit on. Klaus stood right there, clenching his fist in total rage because he knew the truth, and seeing this unfair mess absolutely crushed him. Diaz stayed totally chill, changed the subject, and asked Diana what she was even doing in these lands. The princess says war is breaking out again and things are getting way out of hand. So she showed up in person to beg the hero for help. She begged him for help with the war and offered a wild reward. He could marry her, or even pick between her two friends, Priscilla and Marita. Diaz was totally stunned and ticked off, so he shut down any talk of war because he couldn't just leave a pregnant Frances behind, and he found it super weird that the princess was already... Diaz stood his ground and told them he's done with war for good, admitting he can't send even one fighter because he's a lord with absolutely no army or gear. Princess Diana tried to keep things from spiraling, asking Diaz to change his mind and offering him an even bigger reward to stay. Diaz wasn't budging and told them straight up that no reward would change his mind, so if that was the only reason they came, they needed to get off his land right now. One of the guards completely snapped, whipping out his sword and pointing it right at Diaz while yelling that rejecting the princess was a huge insult to the queen herself. Klaus tried to hold him back, but he was already fuming and kept shouting that Diaz got way too cocky after becoming a hero. Diaz wasn't about to wait around, so he swung his battle axe and completely shattered the enemy's sword in a single hit. This guy was so shocked he couldn't even get a single word out. Diaz could feel the killer vibes coming off the guy, but he realized it was all just a big bluff to scare him. So he stood his ground and told them to get off his land immediately. Klaus jumped in and backed him up, telling everyone to get out right now before things got ugly. Because if Diaz got any angrier, it was going to be a total disaster. The guy tried to argue, but Klaus shut him down, saying they'd both get totally wrecked by the hero's insane power if they even tried to fight. The squad realized they were in deep trouble and bolted. But Diaz was low-key panicking because he wrecked the yurt floor and knew Aruna would totally lose it when she saw he had to fix it all over again. Diana stormed off without even trying to hide her rage, realizing this guy wasn't the noble hero she'd heard about at all. He was just a jerk who totally humiliated her in public. Aruna rushes over to Diaz to spill what her magic revealed. Every woman there is glowing red with hate, while only one soldier is blue and the rest are just red or white. She knew one of them would totally lose it, and right on cue, Frances started crying to be there. So Aruna used her transformation magic to bring her along to see the action. Diaz said he was sorry to Frances because he couldn't stay by her side right then. He gave Aaron a head pat and thanked her for the backup. Then he warned her that those glowing red women were the real deal. Aruna's single verdict. Magic proved these guys are a total threat to her and Diaz now that they're officially family. Diaz finally told himself he made the right call by kicking those guys out, figuring Klaus was the only one he could actually trust since he was literally glowing with a blue light. Aruna points out the busted floor needs fixing, so Diaz just sighs and promises he'll get it done. The sun came up and Diaz greeted Frances and Francois with a smile, but you could tell he was actually really worried about them. Aruna chimed in and wished him a good morning too. Right then, her horn starts glowing and she calls out that she found a rule breaker in the east, who's just pacing in circles like he's totally lost. Diaz was totally on guard because that guy didn't look like a traveler at all, so he asked Aruna to come with him. Aruna swore her magic would keep them invisible and told Frances she was done seeing him cry, so she was coming along whether he liked it or not. They got closer and saw the intruder was actually Klaus. He owned up to it, saying he'd gotten totally lost and couldn't find his way back. Diaz realized that when the whole field is in, he thought Klaus was already back at the kingdom with the princess and her squad, so seeing him standing there without any gear was a total shock. Klaus just laughed and explained he got kicked out and had to hand over his gear, and even though Diaz felt totally guilty for kicking the guests out, Klaus promised it was actually his own choice. He had zero interest in going back to the front, especially with a huge war about to break out any second. Klaus decided to use this chaos to find a real friend and finally kickstart a brand. Diaz asked what his big dream was, so Klaus pushed past his nerves and straight up asked to join him as a soldier. He remembered when they were the ultimate team who totally had each other's backs, And even though he'd love to have a partner like that again, he's still second-guessing everything. Aruna basically read his mind and promised he was safe while glowing with a blue light to show she was one of the good guys. And when Klaus finally saw her and Memo together, he was so... Dia gave a warm smile and said it's a long story, but the big news is he just scored a new ally named Klaus, meaning his kingdom finally has its very first citizen. So here's the latest update on the Nitro territory. Diaz is the big boss, leading a crew that includes Aruna, two Memu named Francis and Francois, and the X. Klaus flashes back to the moment he screamed at his commander, begging him not to ditch a village full of women and children, because he never thought his captain would actually run away. The commander cuts him off, insisting they aren't running away, just pulling back to grab some backup. Klaus isn't buying that excuse for a second. He knows that if they bail, all he got back was a cold reply that their lives were in the hands of the gods. And even though he tried to stop the captain, the guy just walked away and left them with a massive choice to make. Diaz watched them finish building New York for Klaus, because even though his buddy was totally fine with a broken-down shack, Diaz wasn't about to let his friend live like that and made... Right then, Aruna shouted for the whole crew to come grab some dinner. A black buffalo was standing right on the table, and after Diaz thanked her for the food, he told Klaus to stop being so shy and just dig in. Klaus took a bite and was totally blown away, saying the meal was fancy enough for a big-shot feudal lord. He says Aruna would be an amazing wife, making her blush like crazy as she quickly points out the massive feast they have to eat. While they're eating, Diaz asks if they can turn those dragon parts into gear for the clouds, and Aruna tells him their craftsman Petro is already busy making some. Every single piece of the dragon is used, from fangs for swords to scales for shields. But Diaz notices that trading these materials in the village is a total ripoff where you lose way more than you get back. He figured he should use the items right away, so while Klaus was distracted, he started listing off the dragon parts he had, leaving Klaus totally stunned and asking if he really managed to take down a... Diaz casually points out it's an earth dragon that looks like a massive turtle. And even though it can't fly or breathe fire, he just smashes through its shell and takes it down solo. He felt like he wasn't good enough to use such epic materials. But Diaz told him he knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted Klaus to be the captain of his army once. Klaus jumped at the offer and swore he'd die for Diaz and his people, showing massive respect to both Diaz and Aruna with total determination. Diaz told him he could stop being so formal, but Klaus refused to back down because he wanted to show respect to everyone, making Diaz smile since his new partner was clearly hyped for the mission. 10 days fly by, and after some insane training, Klaus is finally geared up with a spear and armor made entirely out of dragon parts. These items were so insanely valuable that even the king couldn't afford them. And it was all possible because Diaz put his total trust in Klaus. Klaus kept grinding through his training to prove he deserved everyone's trust. While back in the capital, some seriously shady political drama was already starting to go down. While every noble was busy picking sides for the throne, the lords out in the provinces were doing whatever they wanted because they were way too far away for the king to stop them. While heading to Diaz's land, Klaus saw how evil Lord Kazdex treated the poor villagers and realized the greedy second prince probably swiped Diaz's reward for himself. Princess Diana is a total powerhouse in politics but has zero military backup, so she's probably just trying to charm Diaz into joining her team. This whole mess was about to blow up and shake the entire world, so Klaus stepped up. He knew a new war meant he'd probably die, but he was totally ready to go down with Yi. Just then, Klaus Diaz stepped out of the house. He knew right away that things were getting serious. His bad feeling was totally spot on. Aruna felt a group using magic heading straight. One of the guys was barely hanging on, so Diaz knew he had to get to them before time ran out. And right as he headed toward the strangers, Klaus stepped up and said he was Yi. Diaz stopped him and told Klaus he had to stay and protect Aruna and Memo if things got dangerous, so Aruna could get the fluffy animals to safety while Klaus held the line. Klaus gave a silent nod to show he was on it, but as he watched Aruna use her cloaking magic to make them vanish into thin air, he was totally blown away by how insane her power really was. Diaz and Aruna showed up way earlier than expected, and they weren't alone. They brought a group of grandmas who had been totally dumped by their village. It turns out they kicked the women out just to save food, since the village was starving and falling apart after the big uprising. The Duke of Kazex's second son turned on his own father to steal his title, and now the whole neighboring region is falling into total chaos. Maya was the tough old leader of the exiles, and she used her powers to guide her crew on a massive journey that finally landed them in the lands of Diaz. Diaz was totally hyped, and told Klaus he'd gained 12 new followers in just one day. And while Klaus wasn't surprised since these outcasts were now his to lead, he knew as hell. Diaz was totally blown away by the new settlers since everyone was over 70 and Grandma Maya was 90. So he started wondering if they'd share their secrets for living such a long and healthy life. Klaus tried to snap him back to reality, reminding him those old ladies could drop dead any second. But Diaz was way too hyped about building more yurts to care, leaving Klaus wondering if anyone was even listening to him. Klaus flashed back to a few years ago when his camp was totally surrounded by enemies, and with the village about to be taken, he screamed at his soldiers to stay put and hold their ground. He knew deep down he had to protect everyone, so he stayed behind to fight even though he knew he probably wouldn't make it out alive. Just then, Diaz shows up out of nowhere and rushes over to Klaus, totally relieved he's still alive since everyone else had bailed, and he thought he was all alone, so Klaus asks him where he's been this whole time. Diaz caught the sound of a baby crying, followed it right to a little boy, and handed him over to the people hiding out in the basement. The kid was crying his eyes out, begging him not to leave, so Diaz promised he'd stay right there to keep everyone safe. The fight explodes as Diaz yells at Klaus not to die, and after Klaus swears he'll survive, everything else just becomes a total blur. He barely remembers standing by the shelter with Diaz, swinging his sword with his last bit of strength against a huge crowd of enemies, just knowing he had to be there to back his friend up. He wasn't the strongest fighter, but he helped Diaz take down enemies way faster, and back then it was the best plan they had. Backup finally showed up the next morning, but the enemy had already cleared out, and Diaz was just acting like his usual self. He hadn't changed at all, and even with all his success, he was still a totally honest guy, which made Klaus feel so guilty that he wanted to die just to prove his loyalty. He really wanted to stay close to him because Assad had finally become a powerful lord and a total leader, which is exactly why she decided to stick by his side and stay in his story. Just as Diaz starts rebuilding the yurt, Klaus runs over to help and tells him to slow down so they can work together. But he gets a bit too hyped and almost breaks the whole thing with his crazy strength. A few days after those grandmas moved in, Aruna used his magic to check their souls, and since they all glowed blue, he knew they were totally safe. So, with the village finally growing, it was time to give the place an official name. Aruna suggested the traditional name Iluk, which means the first village, but Klaus tried to name it Dragon Slayer Village to honor his lord, only for Aruna to shut him down with a gentle no. And just like that, the very first village in Diaz was officially born. Everyone was so hyped that they just had to throw a party. It wasn't anything fancy, but the little festival they put. Seeing his people so happy made Diaz feel awesome, and he knew he had to keep grinding for them. But then Aruna showed up for a serious talk about how fast the village was growing. She reminded everyone they needed a solid plan to bring in new settlers, and while Diaz remembered their last talk, they still hadn't found an idea that actually worked. He had one last idea but tossed it aside, and even though Grandma Maya's plan was definitely the quickest way, Diaz just felt like something was seriously wrong with it. Out of nowhere, Grandma Maya shows up and says she heard him calling even though he didn't say a word, leaving him totally blown away by her sharp instincts and crazy strength. Maya jumped back into yesterday's conversation and suggested selling the dragon loot to buy slaves so they could boost their population as fast as possible. This offer hit Diaz like a ton of bricks, making him flash back to the absolute nightmares of the war and those poor, broken slave soldiers he saw suffer. To him, slavery wasn't just some system. It was straight-up violence and non-stop pain. Aruna thought they could just treat the slaves better, but Diaz shut her down, saying that even buying them makes him part of the problem because it just gives those shady traders a reason to go out and grab more people. He straight-up banned slavery on his land, and Maya finally relaxed, admitting she only brought it up to test what kind of person he really was. If Diaz had actually backed the plan, she would have been forced to shut it down. So she's super relieved she doesn't have to do that, especially since she's heard those nightmare stories about the Duke of Kazdex's slaves and was terrified of it happening. Diaz promised that in his country, people aren't just things to be sold or broken, and he'll never let slavery happen on his watch. Aruna was watching him closely and could tell he was totally lost in his own head. Suddenly, Klaus bursts into the room panting and apologizes for barging in, but he's totally confused when he sees Diaz and Aruna in the dark, especially once he spots Maya there too. He tried to back away, shaking as he swore he didn't see a single thing. The next morning, Aruna spotted a merchant heading their way and Diaz jumped into action because he knew these guys were basically walking news stations. These merchants are the key to everything since they bring in new people, supplies, and news to help the village grow. And as Klaus prepped for the meeting, he was dying to know who this mysterious trader from so far away really was. Diaz was totally stunned to see a creature he'd never met before. It wasn't just some random merchant, but a member of the frog race. He looked like a swamp animal, but the merchant introduces himself as Pagan and says he's heard all about Diaz being a legendary dragon hunter. But while he's trying to make a deal, Aruna reveals he's actually from an... He realized this guy was definitely a diver, so Pigeon asked to see the loot from the Earth Dragon. He wanted to check the gear since he heard Diaz took the beast down solo, but right then, Diaz saw Pigeon's soul was white, so he knew he wasn't a threat. And even though the guy only cared about making a profit, Diaz still decided to make the deal. He showed up with a chunk of an Earth Dragon's shell, and Podden was completely blown away by how massive and solid it was. He admitted that when he first heard about the dragon, he thought it'd be way smaller, so he sounded super skeptical when he asked if Diaz actually took that monster down alone. Diaz saw right through him. The merchant basically thought he just found a dead dragon and was lying about being the one who killed it. To prove he wasn't bluffing, he told Klaus to grab the toughest armor they had while he went to snag the axe himself. He came back and proved he could split the whole thing wide open with just one massive hit. Klaus hyped it up as a move that could kill a dragon. And even though Diaz thought the name was super cringe, it totally worked since Pigeon was completely sold on. The merchant was totally hooked and said he'd trade everything he owned for a piece of that shelf, promising to pay a fair price like a legit businessman. He also mentions he's got 2 little girls he couldn't sell to the monsters, so he figures Diaz might want them since he's human. Diaz spotted the girls and saw their eyes were totally blank, making him feel an instant connection since they were probably orphans just like him. He was completely blown away that kids were being sold like items, realizing that Beijing treated them like nothing but slaves. Aruna put her hand on his and told him to chill, while Diaz looked back at her, barely holding it together. Grandma jumped into the talk, telling him his scary face was freaking the girls out. And after a quick reminder to stay clean, she made it clear their village doesn't buy slaves and wants nothing to do with them. Pigeon started making excuses right away. He claimed everyone totally got him wrong. He swore he wasn't some kind of slave trader. He argued that if he hadn't grabbed those, in this village, twins were supposed to be killed the second they were born. But their parents refused and escaped into the forest, where they ended up getting really sick while hiding out. Right before they died, they begged Paige to take the girls, but he straight up refused and told them he wasn't running a charity. The parents begged him with every last penny they had, and he just couldn't say no, promising to find a safe spot for the girls. He's been traveling with them ever since, but their food is almost gone and everyone thinks the girls are cursed, so nobody will take them in. Even though he was losing everything, he kept looking after them and just hoped someone would finally give them a real home. Aruna used her magic horn to check his story, and it turns out Pei Jian was actually telling the truth. The girls' souls started glowing a bright blue, proving they were totally pure and kind. Diaz offered to pay for everything with dragon parts and promised to treat them like family, which got Pagan so hyped that he said yes immediately. The idea of buying kids totally grossed him out, but since they had nowhere else to go, he realized he was actually saving them, and decided the twins were officially part of his family. Pagan was grinning ear to ear as he left Natros, bragging that Master Diaz was the best customer he'd ever had in his entire life. He sold every single thing he brought. While chatting with the giant bear, Pagan showed what he was really thinking. The bear was scared Diaz would challenge the king of beasts, but Pagan just chilled and said Diaz is just a simple guy. He realized that if Diaz kept expanding, he'd hit the northern mountains, a place crawling with monsters but loaded with rare treasure and massive potential. If Diaz grabs them or the Beast King beats him there, trade profits are gonna explode, and Pagan is definitely getting a huge payday as the official trader. With the Pygean deal wrapped up, business was booming and settlers were pouring in, but Diaz still had one huge thing on his mind: the new girls he'd just taken in. He picked them up and realized they were super skinny, like they were only 3 or 4 years old. So he promised they'd finally eat well since Aruna is a great cook and they'd all eat together. Then he introduced himself and asked for their names. I asked what games they usually play together, but then Aruna jumped in and suggested we find out their favorite foods so we can try cooking them. Diaz asked if they were down for some stories or songs before finally asking what he should call them. Diaz realized that if these parents risked everything to save their daughters, then the girls must love them back. So the names their parents gave them are super important and deserve some real respect. Since the girls didn't have names, Diaz decided to help. And even though he looks like a total tough guy, he's actually a pro at naming kids, so he started picking out some super sweet and soft names for them. But the girl totally snapped back, refusing to take new names. So a shocked Diaz just asked them what they were actually called. He needed to know what to call them, so they told him their names were Cine and Icon. Diaz thanked them and told them their names were actually really cool. He made sure to remember exactly who was who right away. It honestly made him feel so good inside. He knew that when kids go through, things usually ended in a total disaster for them, but remembering their parents finally helped these girls start to open up. He says he and Klaus are going to handle the supplies, while Aruna and Grandma Maya help the girls change and cook up some food. Aruna's flashed a big grin and told the girls to follow her, while Maya promised to hook them all up with some steamed potatoes later. Klaus was totally shocked to see how well Diaz handled the kids, but Diaz got pretty sad and admitted that before the war, he basically raised a whole group of orphans and even a tiny baby. When the war broke out, he left the kids with his helper, praying they were safe and knowing they'd eventually find their way back to it. Once the work was wrapped up, Diaz checked the goods, moved them to the warehouse, and said he was totally satisfied before he went right back to flirting with the girls in his smoothest voice. Aruna shut him down and told him he had to clean up first, so Diaz agreed and rushed to get herself ready. Aruna carefully braids Aiken's hair, telling her that once the girls grow up, they'll be able to do it all by themselves. Maya looked at these girls and just knew they were good news even if they weren't human, so she promised to protect them while all the other village grannies totally fell in love with them. Diaz was stoked to see the new clothes fit Sinai and Aiken perfectly. Sinai checked out her new look and said it was gorgeous. Aiken totally agreed with her sister. Diaz just grinned and Aruna finally gave them their names, explaining that in the ancient language, Srinai means beautiful as the moon, and Ikan means sacred moon. She didn't know exactly why their parents chose those names, but she was 100% sure the moon connection was no accident, so Aruna handed each girl a gemstone called a nodi. Akin started shaking when she said her name means sacred moon, and Sinai whispered her own name like she finally realized it meant beautiful as the moon, with tears streaming down both their faces. Suddenly, a memory clicks, and they hear their parents' voices sounding super warm and full of love. They tell them they're loved, and that their happiness is the only thing that matters, asking for just one thing, for Sin and A to live happy lives. Diaz and Aruna didn't just stand there, they rushed over and pulled the girls into a tight hug, letting them cry out all their pain and memories. Just then, two fluffy Mimus crept up, sensing the mood and stopping right next to them with soft eyes and droopy ears to show they really cared. Diaz saw they wanted to help out and Aruna realized they were just trying to comfort the girls since these creatures can actually sense kids. He realized Aruna used an ancient language to name the village, which was wild because he thought only one group of people actually knew. He thinks Sinai and Ikanis's parents might be linked to people from the past, but Aruna isn't sure since that ancient language is basically just a legend now. She admitted she had no clue if anyone in the outside world actually knew about this language. She says the ones aren't just normal people, and way back in the day, their bloodlines probably mixed together. 10 days passed, and Diaz couldn't stop thinking about how Sine and Aijen were still totally crushed over their parents. He saw that even though it hurt, they were finally starting to heal, and their real smiles lit up the whole village. The kids' happy voices filled the streets and made everyone feel like one big family. But the peace broke when Aruna spotted a mysterious rider coming from the east. She warned them that he was moving crazy fast and would be there any second. So Diaz spotted him coming from the east and told everyone to get outside and meet their guest. He asked Aruna, Francis, and Francois to come along, but Aruna told him the guys were actually staying behind in the village. Apparently, they felt super awkward being too far away from. Diaz says he knows they'll be back soon and he's really counting on them, while Sini and Aiken walk up looking totally serious. Sinai begged him to get back home fast. Aiken said they'd be waiting for him, and Diaz promised with total confidence that he'd definitely return. Aruna used her magic to stay hidden and realized the person walking up had a pure white soul, so she knew they weren't a threat. This random guy shows up and bows, apologizing for barging in, but when he calls Diaz Master Diaz, Diaz is totally shocked and demands to know who this stranger actually is. This guy Camelot shows up representing Duke Kazdex, and he says the Duke is already on his way to meet Diaz face to face. He even offered to tag along with his master to Diaz's place. But Diaz decided he'd rather just meet him right there in the village. Camelot totally got it and promised to. Once he left, Diaz realized Eldon Kazdex was the same guy who could spark a massive civil war, and he knew there was no way he'd let someone that dangerous into the village of Ilu. Aruna spotted the carriage heading their way and was totally shocked, asking what the heck was even going on. She says the big guy has a glowing blue soul, and while everyone around him has all sorts of mixed colors, not a single one of them is red. Diaz was totally stunned and asked why the guy's soul was blue. So Aruna explained that the color was way more intense than anything she'd ever seen, except for maybe Diaz himself. Just then, a new guy named Eldon walked up to apologize to Diaz, and Kazdex admitted he was a total fan who'd been inspired by all the legendary stories about him. He's dying to meet up in person to show some major respect, and he even promised he wouldn't do anything to cause trouble or be a total pain. DS insisted he wasn't losing it and apologized for being a jerk to Eldon's rep, but Eldon just played it cool, saying they didn't need to be formal since he was just hyped to finally meet him. He spotted a girl hiding off to the side and was totally shocked by how insane her stealth skills were. He noticed she smelled just as good as Diaz, and then Diaz introduced her as Aruna, revealing that the two of them were actually engaged. Aruna jumped in and claimed she was his wife. Diaz backed her up, and then Eldon asked if she was actually Najin. Aruna explains she's an Oni, and that their leaders are born with horns, but since she's never heard of an Ajin, Eldon tells her they're basically human-like beings like beast folk and mermaids. Aruna agreed that if you look at it this way, it's basically just an application. Out of nowhere, Eldon starts bawling and tackles Diaz in a hug, desperately asking if he and Aruna actually have a kid together. Diaz gets totally freaked out and tells her to relax since they don't even have kids yet, but then Aruna suddenly says she wants 10 of them. Diaz is stunned, but Aruna just reminds him he's already basically raising 2 orphans as secret agents anyway. Yeldon was super hyped to find out Diaz's wife and kids are all Jinns, calling him a total brother since they're exactly the same. Then he finally showed his true colors, and Diaz was absolutely floored to find out that Alden was the source of everything. Yeldon remembers how they used to tell epic hero stories to get everyone hyped for battle, but over time, those legends just turned into fake stage plays that lost their spark. During the speech, he finally hears about a legendary hero named Diaz. They say Diaz did exactly what his parents wanted, taking down bullies to protect the weak. He didn't just talk. Everyone was obsessed with this legend, but Eldon says the shows actually freaked out the nobles so much that they banned them in just a week, making the public lose their minds while the story tablets still spread secretly all the way to the isolated land of Kazdex. The whole story was actually full of lies and totally ignored how noble the fight really was, but Eldon didn't fall for it and kept hunting down people who actually knew Diaz to get the real truth. Everyone from war veterans to battle-hardened merchants and even teachers kept hyping up Diaz, so Eldon got totally hooked on learning everything about him. Tomlot told him to stay calm so he wouldn't overdo it, and Diaz realized that being lugged around like a heavy crate by Eldon must have really messed him up. He realized the whole squad worked like crazy to find him, and seeing how wiped they were, Diaz asked Eldon if he could even move. Kamoat explains that Eldon is a half-weight, a mix of human and Ajian who almost never has the power to transform into a real Ajian. Eldon is part of the elephantine race, meaning he's got a massive, super strong body but a totally kind heart. And Diaz remembers that his dad was the old Lord Angus while his mom was an elephantine slave named Neha. Diaz realized that every time Ellen transforms, it's literally sucking the life out of him. He used to think Eldon shifted just because he was happy, but now he knows it's... Camelot said that even though Eldon is a shrimp compared to other elephants, he's still built like a tank for a human, but his body is so messed up that he only survives because his wives take such good care of him. Diaz thought back to Camelot and realized the way Castexu treated Agine was just straight up insane, and seeing that total unfairness really broke Eldon's heart. Eldon's biggest dream was a world where everyone lived in peace without any walls between them, so he started using his high rank to secretly keep Agines safe. Diaz realized those rumors about Eldon being a player were just a cover-up to hide his real skills, and Aruna finally spoke up about something she'd been dying to say for a long time. She was super confused why the Incas didn't enslave Eldon like the other Ajans, especially since even half-breed kids are usually treated as Edgens, and Camelot confirmed the original plan was to make him a slave just like his mom, Neha. Then he reveals that Ankus actually has a wife named Yania and a son named Yani, who looks just like his dad, but is so rough-looking that it's made his whole life a total nightmare. The Incas treated him like garbage, but when a good-looking human boy named Eldon was born, the local lord suddenly claimed the kid was his son just to grab more power. Diaz realized how twisted this story was, seeing a dad who hated the son that looked like him, but liked the one who didn't, and that total lack of love made the guy even more terrifying. Eldon's secret identity as an Adjin was hidden from everyone while his mom, Neha, stayed close by posing as a servant, but the moment he turned 5, his body transformed and his ears and nose finally showed his true form. That's when it finally clicked that Neha was his mom, and from that moment on, they got way closer and started building a real bond. Eldon's whole mission was to bring back that deep, natural connection between moms and their kids. Diaz remembered hearing rumors about a civil war, But he didn't want to believe things were actually getting that bad, so Camelot stepped in to explain that it wasn't a total disaster and Eldon Sama was just trying to keep his family safe. Jania and her crew snitched on Eldon's secret plan to Enkus, making him so furious that he ordered his army to wipe out Eldon, Neha, Samu, and every single agent, forcing Eldon to jump into a massive battle against them all. Diaz saw that after that total bloodbath, Eldan had completely crushed Enkus's army and was now just straight up claiming to be the new boss of Castex, even though he didn't actually have the right to rule. Eldon finally apologized for being a jerk and mentioned that since Diaz married a woman he just met in Adjan, their kids are officially considered Adjan too. He says Aruna is living her best life and her kids will be just as happy, but Eldon admits he totally misjudged her at first by thinking they shared the same big dream. Diaz promised he's totally down for Eldon's dream, mentioning that back in his village, Adjans were already living together in total peace. He hoped this would catch on in other places too, and he promised to have Eldon's back and help him out as much as he could. Diaz told Eldon his dream was actually legendary and that he should be proud of it. He said being brave is a huge deal, and hearing those words made Eldon totally lose it and start crying. Diaz realized they'd covered a ton of topics, even talking about how much food they both had stashed away in their lands. Eldon warns Diaz that if they don't find a way to get more food, the growing village is going to run out of supplies and be in huge trouble. He warned that winter was definitely coming, and if they didn't start prepping now, they were basically doomed. Making DS realize these weren't just words from a friend, but from a... He jumped straight into action and picked out the best spots to start planting, as DS remembered his old farming days from before the war and promised to show everyone what he's really capable of. DS and Aruna are finally heading back home together. The second they got back, Sane and Akin burst into tears, reminding them they promised to be back right away just like they said. Diaz knew he was super late, but he realized that no matter what he said, it would just sound like a total excuse. Later that night, Aruna finally breathed a sigh of relief because the kids were out cold. And even though she was shocked by their crazy energy and how long they stayed mad, she couldn't help but smile at how happy they looked while sleeping. Diaz watched the kids run around all day and realized he was totally wrong for thinking this peaceful village was just a fake dream. Aiken totally lost it and started crying because Sinai ate her potato, while Sinai started bawling too since Aiken just wouldn't forgive her. Aiken snaps that she's totally done. Sine argues she already said sorry, and even though Diaz tries to fix the vibe by sharing his food, Aiken refuses to even touch his potatoes. Aruna instantly gave up her food to stop the fighting, making Diaz realize these sisters were way too competitive with each other. He remembered that night of crying, and when morning hit, Aruna was shocked to find they both had a fever. Tenny starts mumbling in her sleep, asking if someone nearby is actually calling for her mom. Diaz knew that even when things got rough, he and Aruna were never going to stop looking out for the girls. And after all that trauma, Senai and Ekin finally started getting along and actually smiling again. Aruna hesitated for a bit, but then she told them they should probably read those things at least once. Diaz shut that down immediately, saying they couldn't break their promise and should apologize instead of scolding the kids, since they finally have a family and need to be free to run around and explore. Diaz says it's fine to let this slide for now, but since it'll cause trouble later, he's going to start being way more strict with the girls tomorrow. Right then, Aruna's horn suddenly burst into flames. Aruna felt the intruders and warned everyone that a massive group was charging in from the southeast. He asked if these guys were actually with Eldon, but Aruna was sure he'd already headed home, warning him that these were probably just some shady bandits looking for trouble. Diaz tried to make Aruna stay home and guard the house, but she insisted on coming along because they'd never see the enemies hiding in the pitch-black grass without her magic. She told Cloud to stay and watch the house, so Diaz agreed they'd head out together and he'd count on her power to get them through. Diaz remembered how the Oni world worked, where the rich guys just owned a bunch of memos to make money for them, so they never had to do any real work. The hunters were totally broke and came from the poorest families around. Back then, guys had to pay a massive fee just to get married, so they were desperate for cash. Taking down bandits was the fastest way to get rich quick, even if those criminals hardly ever showed up in their neck of the woods. Diaz thought the whole thing was super sketchy, figuring that if someone refuses to leave a field of nothing but grass, they've definitely got a secret plan. One guy trekking across the empty plains was shocked that the place was totally dead, even complaining that he couldn't see a single tree. The client totally snapped, yelling that he paid way too much for them to just sit around talking, so the guy tried to prove he was ready while still wondering why the heck they had to do this job. The client said this guy, Hero Diaz, is a total beast who wins even in broad daylight, So they have to pull off a surprise attack at night because if he spots them, it's game over. He made it clear that if they spot this LDAN guy, they have to take him out right away since he's supposed to meet Diaz in the meadows. One of the guys asked about the reward, and the boss told them Eldon's head is worth 100 silver, but Diaz is the real prize at 10 gold coins. Hyped up, the guy told his crew this was the biggest score they'd seen in forever, and since it was just one dude, they should finish him off quick and head back to the city to get paid. Right then, a massive flash of red light bursts right in front of him. He freaked out and screamed that arrows were flying and Lyle was dead. Realizing their ambush was totally blown and that enemy archers were attacking from a whole different world, he told everyone to ditch the torches so they wouldn't be easy targets for arrows. Then he yelled for his men to fire everything at that red light. He was totally freaking out inside. He was freaking out because he couldn't see where the attacks were coming from, but he had to admit these guys were total pros for tracking them perfectly in the pitch black. He's freaking out because he just realized they totally underestimated how strong the enemy really is. He thought this was going to be a piece of cake, but he was dead wrong. Now even so, he kept yelling at his guys to stop standing around and start shooting back. He told them to make every shot count since they were only up against one person. If they could just figure. A voice suddenly shouted from the dark, asking if everyone was okay, and he realized it was coming from right in front of him. He yelled for everyone to surround the guy and promised he'd finish him off, while the man stood there in total shock, wondering how his entire crew could have died at the exact same time. He started to realize they weren't just dealing with one guy, so he told the squad to stay sharp because that archer definitely had backup hiding nearby. Even though they had way more guys, he told his squad to get in formation and wait. But then a green flash appeared and he started panicking, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. The guy thought they'd run into a demon and totally freaked out, screaming for the monster to show its face. But right then, Diaz lunged at him. Just before the blow landed, the image of a warrior with blue eyes, heavy armor, and a massive two-handed axe was burned into his brain. And he realized this wasn't just some enemy, he was a total monster worth at least 100 gold coins. The client completely freaks out and bolts, screaming his head off while shaking with rage and fear as he curses everyone out, calling them worthless trash because his guys got wiped out way too fast. The client knew that if he got spotted, he was totally finished. He was about to completely lose his mind. He screamed that it was all Diaz's fault, yelling that his old scars were burning. He didn't hate the hero for staying out of it. He hated him for getting in his way. He blamed the orphans and cursed the day Diaz felt sorry for him, a thought that kept him. Diaz was watching the chaos and was just about to tell his guys with torches to charge, but he didn't even have to because the enemies were acting so reckless that the fight basically finished itself. An arrow barely nicked Aruna's face during the fight, making Diaz go ballistic, but they both walked away safe while the bandits got absolutely wrecked. One guy actually managed to slip away, but Diaz didn't even bother chasing him. He just took all the bandits' weapons, gave them a massive lecture on how stupid they were being, and then kicked them all right off the plains. Arunas was super annoyed and thought kicking them out was way too easy, but Diaz felt it was fair since no one on their side got hurt, though he swore that if they ever came back, he'd show absolutely no mercy. Aruna realized hunting bandits was basically a gold mine since the Elder pays for every capture, and she can sell all their iron gear for extra cash. Diaz couldn't believe these busted weapons were actually worth anything. But Aruna explained that iron is a huge deal on the plains since they melt it down to make all kinds of tools. She said her family grew up totally broke, so she's always dreamed of taking down bandits. Diaz found out that Aruna used to survive by hunting on the plains, and even though catching bandits was the fastest way to get rich, there were so few of them that her dream of a big payday stayed just a dream. Aruna remembered the exact second she felt Diaz getting close, her heart pounding at the sound of a carriage because she thought the bandits were finally showing up. The moment Aruna saw Diaz, she knew he wasn't a bad guy. And Diaz realized she actually thought he was just a poor refugee kicked off a carriage or someone ready to give up and die. The next morning, Aruna went to check on him during her patrol and was totally speechless to find the guy just fast asleep right on the ground. She was going to check his soul just to be safe, but if it turned out blue, it'd be a total waste, especially since she would have already ended him and swiped his. Diaz remembered how Aruna totally switched things up by waking him up to chat. And even she couldn't explain why she didn't just take him out like she originally planned. She knew they had to talk, and even if she couldn't explain why, she'd already made her choice the second she decided to do things different. She didn't regret being with Diaz at all, and even though they had their fair share of drama, she still couldn't stop wondering why she was so drawn to him. Diaz was totally lost by what she said, but then Aruna suddenly kissed him on the cheek and caught him completely off guard. He shouted her name, told her to hold up, and sprinted to catch up so he wouldn't get left behind. He realized he'd chase her down the darkest road ever, knowing he could keep going as long as she was there to light his way. Back at the camp, Aruna was hanging out with two Memu chiefs, Klaus, Maya, and her 12 elders, plus Sinai and Ekin, right in the middle of their. Eldon started stressing out, saying it wasn't just about the growing crowd. The village was actually starving and needed way more food. He warned them that if an emergency hits and they run out of supplies, it's going to be a total disaster. Even though winter feels far away, he reminded everyone that it's. Diaz knew they were totally right about him and realized he had to stop this from happening no matter what. Because if the village ran out of food, Aruna, the kids, and Francis would be. He promised to hunt down as many buffalo as possible for the group, but Eldon warned him that eating nothing but meat would totally ruin their health. Meat alone wasn't going to cut it, so they had to find some veggies, and Diaz was totally on board with starting their own farm right then and there. Eldon clears things up, explaining that the dirt is so heavy and stubborn that everyone who tried to farm it failed, leaving nothing but grass behind. Diaz made it clear you'll never know the result unless you try it yourself, and Eldon just smirked, knowing Diaz was taking a massive gamble. He really respected that about him and promised to help him win no matter what, so Diaz thanked him and swore he'd do everything possible to make it happen. He finally snapped awake, sat up, and wondered if that whole thing was just a crazy dream. Morning rolls around and he says hi to Aruna, who just gives him a super chill good morning back. Meanwhile, the grandma started whispering because Aruna was acting way too happy, and they even joked that she must have had a pretty special night. The clown walks right up to Diaz and asks for a second, showing off a tiny bat he found while he was out on patrol this morning. He thinks this thing was flying with its squad until it got blasted out of the sky, and the rest of the pack just bailed and left it behind. DS took a good look at the mouse and realized he'd never seen anything like it. And since Clouds hadn't seen one either, DS warned him to be wary. The sky was totally clear that morning, so DS and the group ate breakfast outside while he started asking everyone a bunch of questions. He asked if the training was wearing them down, but everyone felt awesome, and he noticed Maya and the grandmas were looking way more energized than before. Aruna's special herbs made all of this possible. They were eating healing food and taking special baths every single day. Even Diaz could feel himself getting way strong. He realized Kajin village was burning through medicine way faster than Aruka, so he asked Aruna where she was getting such a massive stash of herbs. She tells him they pick the herbs or buy them, but they mostly grow their own. And Diaz is blown away because he had no clue Kajin even had a field for that. Aruna explains that since they're always on the move, they grow all their healing herbs in pots so they can just grab them and go. Diaz came up with a big plan to start farming the land and growing their own food so the whole village could finally live a safe and steady life. He asked Aruna to show him how to grow medicinal herbs for his own garden, but she admitted she didn't know the trick and told him to go see the matriarch if he wanted to do it right. Inside the Kaijun matriarch's home, Moru said plowing the fields was a total joke because, for some reason, absolutely nothing grows on this land. She said her ancestors used to have these insane farming tools that could grow anything in this dirt, but it was all lost when the war broke out. Moro promises Diaz that teaching her to grow medicinal herbs is actually way easier than it looks. And even though people say it's a total nightmare, she's down to give it a. She figured training was basically pointless since the trick was super simple. Just take those fertilizer stones and crush them into tiny pieces along with some animal bones. You've got to stir that mix deep into the soil and let it sit for a while before planting your seeds, because if you skip this step, your herbs won't grow at all, or they'll just end up looking totally pathetic. Diaz watched the guy smash a super expensive gem into the dirt and realized that since they were so different, getting help from them was going to be a total nightmare. Moro says trying to grow veggies here is basically impossible, like a total miracle if it actually works. Even if you work the soil and plant seeds every day, you're probably just wasting your. Diaz asks about the people living deep in the woods. Moro explains that since they live so far away from cities, they're total pros at farming and plants. Word on the street is they can turn. She finished by saying if Diaz really mastered this, they could teach everyone else, and her ultimate dream was to build a farm that everyone could use. Diaz was totally down to help, and promised to teach his secrets to the whole village so everyone could have massive mountains of potatoes. Moru pointed out Diaz inside that blue glow and said she's rooting for him, even mentioning that his and Arun's future kids are counting on him to win. She joked that they'd need special herbs to have kids, making Diaz totally blush. But Moro insisted it was a big deal and told him he had to tell Arun. Later on, Diaz got home way earlier than usual, so I went to say hi, and he told me he was back. The girls rushed over and started bugging him to show off the goods he brought back. Diaz showed off the stones and asked for their take, But Cyan was totally lost while Aiken just shrugged and called it super boring. Sanai kicked the pebbles aside. I noticed how many there were, and then we both decided to play and just took off running. Aruna gives Diaz a super friendly welcome and asks about his stones, but a confused Diaz just says he thought they looked cool, even though Aruna can tell right away they don't have a single drop of magic. She explained that real magic stones are packed with energy that mages can just sense, so they can spot a fake instantly, even if it looks perfect. And Diaz had to admit he didn't feel. He asks if Aiken and Sinai have magic, and Aruna tells him they're total geniuses who've already mastered the basics, saying that if they keep grinding, they might even end up way stronger than the matriarch herself. Diaz was totally blown away by the insane talent these two were hiding, and he knew that no matter what, they were destined to become the world's greatest wizards and finally step out into the big world. Sinai suddenly senses something coming and tells everyone to stay sharp, right before Diaz spots a massive swarm of bats and orders everyone to dive into the tent. Klaus didn't waste a single second. He realized this was probably the same pack he fought earlier, and they were definitely back for payback. They might have been small, but there were so many. Diaz jumped into the fight and crushed those mice with just a few hits, making Klaus realize that this guy was way better than him. They both dive right into the fight and start throwing down. Suddenly, a massive bat shows up, and Diaz realizes he's finally looking at the leader of the pack. Aruna cheered him on and used her magic to totally drain the leader's strength. He didn't even blink as he took the leader's head off with one clean strike. Aruna explains these blind bats have crazy hearing, so a sweet voice totally messes with them, and they're so tiny that even a little kid could take them down. Diaz thanked Aruna for saving his skin and told her that her voice was totally amazing, making her blush as she explained she just couldn't ignore such a massive swarm. But when Diaz tried to ask what those monsters were, his ears were ringing so hard he could barely hear a thing. Aruna leaned down and whispered right in his ear, but Diaz couldn't catch a word, and when he tried to ask her what she said, she just stayed totally silent. Right then, he saw that Klaus got caught in the crossfire and was totally knocked out. Diaz was grinning from ear to ear, hyped that he finally finished what he started. It's been 5 whole days since Mori gave him that magic stone, and after grinding it down non-stop, he's finally about to finish the job. With that win in the bag, he finally started working on the Field of Dreams with Aruna, marking out the plots so he could get right to plowing the dirt. Right then, Aruna warns everyone that she senses someone heading their way from the west. Her horn started tingling again, sensing a group of people, a bunch of horses, and something totally weird that wasn't human or animal. Diaz wanted to go solo, but Aruna refused to stay behind because she spotted a mysterious creature lurking among the group heading their way. Diaz felt way more confident and safe whenever Aruna was around, but she sounded super worried as she told him that the people approaching them would be there any second. Diaz grabbed the monocle and got super hyped when he spotted Camelot traveling with Eldon's caravan of servants. Aruna tells him to chill out and stop screaming names in public, but then Diaz spots something weird moving right behind Camelot. He sees these strange white animals he's never even heard of before. Guards were swarming this massive, important-looking cart, and she finally realized this was the source of that weird vibe she had earlier, while Diaz was totally confused why everyone called these pitch-black animals white bulls, so he just decided to call them black bulls to keep things simple. Aruna pointed at the second cart after seeing some creepy shadows moving inside, and she was totally freaked out that they were being spied on, so Diaz decided to head straight for Camelot to see exactly what he was hiding. Inside the car, the animals started swapping stories about their lives, and one guy even admitted he was snatched by slave traders before jumping onto a desert-bound truck just to escape the nightmare. Even after all that chaos, he still hoped to make it back home one day, while the animals decided to pack some beans just in case they ran out of food later. One guy gets totally mad at her for sharing their food, but she says they have too much to carry anyway, while another animal warns that running out of supplies on such a long trip is super dangerous. Everyone started arguing about their food and where the cart was even headed. Suddenly, one of the animals pointed out that they weren't going to the southern desert at all, but were actually moving. They weren't just heading back to the desert, they were actually hunting the legendary Dragon Slayer, thinking that taking down such a beast would finally prove how strong they are and earn them some serious respect. The animals started fighting after one of them admitted he only helped because he thought they were going back to the desert, and now that he knows the real target is a dragon hunter, he feels totally played. The monsters started whispering that the Dragon Slayer was actually stronger than the dragon, and taking him on was basically a death sentence. But the others just ignored the doubts, calling everyone liars who needed to pay and acting like they were way better than the hero who actually killed the dragon. They were on a mission to totally wreck their enemies and bring back supplies and glory to the desert, and they swore they were going all in to make it happen. Camelot brought the carts to a halt, gave Dias and Arun a friendly shout, and told them he had every single thing Eldon promised. The monsters spotted Dias and started freaking out, screaming at the top of their lungs once they realized he was the Dragon Slayer. Dias saw Camelot get back, and even though he was being chill, he told him straight up that he had a massive question to ask. Panic broke out in the carriage, and the animals started screaming because they knew they were toast, but right then, Dias spotted something totally sketchy inside the cart. Suddenly, the beast leaps out of the cart and lunges at Dias, screaming that it's time to kill him, and Dias is completely shocked that these mouse-looking things can actually talk. Just as things got intense, Aruna jumped in and wiped out the attackers in a flash. Then she totally chewed out Dias for being so reckless, but he just coolly asked if taking them. The mice heard her and immediately flipped out, yelling that they didn't even know that guy and were actually terrified of her, before screaming that everyone was just mocking desert folk like a bunch of total jerks. Dias didn't hold back at all, straight up telling Aruna she's the most beautiful girl in the world and swearing he'd never let anyone mess with her. Camelot finally shows up, and he's totally losing it, demanding to know what just happened and why anyone would protect those beasts. So he orders his men to hunt down every single one of those silly mice. The mice stuck in the bag started screaming that backup was on the way and that humans are total backstabbers, trashing Dias as a dragon slayer and blaming him for everything. While he said he'd give the most formal apology ever if it meant making things right. Dias tried to get him to relax, telling him that saying sorry wasn't even a big deal here. Camelot said he had to step up because he was just looking out for his people. Dias asked him to get specific about who these subjects actually were. It turns out Camelot was just talking. Everything finally clicked for him as Camelot explained the difference between Jujins and Ajins, showing that whether someone looks human, half-beast, or like a total animal, everything finally clicked for Dias, as he remembered an old legend from his parents about speech being a gift from God meant only for people, meaning if these mice can talk, they're basically human. It was super obvious these creatures were totally primitive, and Camelot explained they're actually called mice with racing ears. They call themselves desert dwellers, but they definitely aren't the only ones living out there in the sand. Dias was totally shocked since he'd never heard of a desert in Eldon, but Camelot explained that the desert homeland is actually a stretch of land from the southern tower to the far south that the mice call home. Dias remembered sensing slave hunters in the area, and it hit him that Eldon promised the desert people they could go home once they could survive on their own. That's the whole reason they're fighting back so hard. Even when everyone was hating on him and trying to revolt, Eldon still treated them like family and totally had their backs, and Camelot realized that because Eldon was in charge, was the pod. Aruna's letting it slide since Camelot turned blue instead of white, but she warned that if those bright red mice show up again, she's going to go absolutely ballistic. He reminded Camelot they'd already been over this and told him to stop saying sorry so much since he already got the vibe, but he'd take the apology if Camelot really felt like he had to. He admitted mice was a total problem and warned that he wouldn't be nice next time, telling Camelot to stay sharp and make sure the guilty ones got punished. Kamla thanked Dias and promised he totally got it, but then a dog guard reported that the mouse scent was everywhere, making it impossible to track them down. He said the massive pile of spices made searching a total nightmare. So Camelot checked the cart himself, but even after a close look, he didn't find anything sketchy at all. The test is finally over, and the mice are being sent back to Eldon for questioning, because finding out why they attacked is more important than revenge. And that's when Dias suddenly remembers what the guards said about those spices. He was expecting farming gear, but Camelot handed him a letter and apologized, saying the mouse disaster made him forget to explain that the tools are still being prepped and tied to the spice delivery, so he really needs to read that note. Kazde sent a super friendly letter to Dias about those tools they talked about, making it clear they were handing over everything they had. Yeldon promised this would be enough, but he's ready to ship out more if they need it, and he even threw in some of their world-famous spices for Dias and the crew to enjoy. The letter said all those carts and horses were Dias's to keep now, and Eldon hoped they could finally start trading and talking like real allies since their last chat was so inspiring. Eldon said he was actually hyped for their next meeting, and Dias felt so grateful that he silently thanked him for being such a legend. The letter says everything is a total gift, and they don't owe him a dime, since Eldon wants them to just take it all as a sign of their friendship without thinking twice. Camelot mentioned that Eldon felt bad Dias didn't have a barn, because he totally would have given him some horses and cows, so they brought over building supplies just in case. Dias is totally stunned by the new stable, but Camelot tells him to chill because his crew is handling the whole build, making Dias realize he needs to pay Eldon back for all these gifts by Camelot told Diaz and the crew they could just take one of the carts for their journey since it was officially theirs now. He says this is the perfect chance to learn how to drive a carriage, especially since a pro is there to help him master it super fast. Aruna was freaking out with joy and asked Diaz if they actually had horses now, and he just pointed at the 4 horses right in front of them to prove it. Aruna is totally over the moon now that they have 4 horses, while Diaz starts wondering why these animals are such a huge deal to everyone. He realized that for people always in danger, horses were a total must-have for fighting and getting around, and if you had a fast one or a huge stable, it meant you were absolutely loaded. Aruna's family were horse experts but super broke, so they actually had to rent horses from other people, and Diaz could tell she was getting really emotional thinking about her home. Aruna admitted she's dreamed of owning horses since she was a kid. And while she always knew a brave guy like Diaz would make it happen one day, she's totally shocked it's actually coming true this fast. Diaz didn't even get a chance to speak before Aruna started shouting her thanks, calling him her husband, and promising to handle the horses and the carts herself. He tried to get her to chill, but she just kept going, loudly declaring that she was taking over all the work from now on. Suddenly, Aruna squeezed Diaz with the power of 100 horses, and since he'd been through this before, he knew she wasn't letting go anytime soon. Right then, a mouse hiding nearby noticed it had gone totally quiet and figured the hunters finally gave up. So even though she was terrified of getting caught just a second ago, she realized the mouse tried to bolt, but the exit was totally blocked by something heavy, so she started screaming for help, praying that someone would actually hear her and come to the rescue. Sinai showed off the tea leaves she got from Diaz and gave some to Ikena, who thought they smelled absolutely incredible. Sinai stops for a second and wonders if seeds and tea leaves are basically the same thing, and he totally agrees, adding that both her mom and dad were huge tea lovers too. Maya tells Diaz to hold on tight and give the word when he's ready, reassuring him that this white bull is a total pro, so it'll be an easy ride. And even though Diaz is super nervous, he gives the signal and is shocked that everything is actually going perfectly. He spotted a plow and was totally blown away by what it could do, since it digs the dirt and rips out weeds at the same time to get the job done way faster. Grandma Jiruchi explained that once the plowing is finished, you've got to wait a few days before you can actually start planting. Diaz saw the field was split in half, with his side using stone fertilizer and leaves, while the other side used plant ash. And since he remembered Chiruchi's grandma's village doing the same thing, Cherichi remembered how everyone thought this field was a lost cause. So she told them to start digging a massive water tank before they even planted the seeds, which totally caught Diaz off guard since he thought they had plenty of water already. Chiruchi explains that while they're okay for now, the river is super shallow and might dry up this summer. And since the well can't water all the crops, they need to build a massive reservoir to save their future harvests. He promised the reservoir was definitely happening, and Churich hyped him up for being so smart and acting so fast. She rushed over to see if the field was finished, but Diaz told her he needed 2 or 3 more days and asked if that was why they showed up. Simi announced that Aruna made lunch and told them to go get Diaz, but HN said Aruna was already calling him, and Diaz thanked the girls for looking out for him. He could tell she was acting pretty weird. Aishin whispered to ask if the farm work was wearing Diaz out. He told her it was actually a breeze. She mentioned that he'd probably... He says he might be a bit annoyed, but if this is all for nothing, he'll just deal with it, while HN warns that if she and Sinai are keeping secrets, Diaz is... He said he'd be pretty mad if it was actually something bad, but if it's harmless, he's totally cool with it since everyone has their own secrets. Diaz could tell something was super weird since their questions weren't even about him, and when he tried calling them back, they'd already run off to play, leaving him seriously worried about what they were up to. He kept asking what was up but got totally ghosted, and even though Aruna and the whole village tried to get answers, those 2 girls just wouldn't say a single word. Diaz was getting seriously paranoid about a secret, but after watching the girls like a hawk and seeing nothing weird, he figured it was just a kid thing and finally stopped stressing over it. It's been 3 days since they plowed the fields, and Aruna's already showing off these super fast-growing Yamosi herb seeds that could start sprouting as early as tomorrow. This was the perfect chance to see if the soil was actually good. So Diaz thanked her and waited for tomorrow to roll around. Klaus runs up to announce the Kemlata group finished the stable, and Diaz is totally blown away because they only started 3 days ago. He figured the secret to their insane building speed was just using pre-made parts that were ready to be snapped together on the spot. This setup was a total game changer because it's so easy to build or change depending on how many animals they have. And Diaz even told the nearby villages they should start using it too. He thanked Camelot for the backup, but Camelot played it cool and said they were just following Eldan's orders. Dia then offered him a special gift if he was on. The second Dias brought up the Earth Dragon loot, he accidentally terrified everyone. So Camelot just gave a nervous smile and turned it down since that massive gift was way too much for them to handle. One guy got super suspicious and asked what the catch was, thinking Diaz was being shady. So Diaz apologized for the rush while realizing they just saw the gift as a valuable storage tool to make money off of. The next morning, Camelot wrapped everything up and got ready to head out, thanking Diaz for the help, but Diaz insisted he was the one who should be grateful since Camelot's team did all the heavy lifting. He remembered how they couldn't even say hi at first, but after slowly getting to know each other, Akin and Sini started crying because they hated having to say goodbye. Aruna told them to stop crying and promised they could play with the horses once they chilled out, even saying that if they didn't stop, the horses might start crying too. Diaz wondered about the gender and checked for any growth, but when Aruna pointed out the lack of results, he just shrugged it off, saying he didn't expect it to work instantly and they probably just needed to wait longer after plowing before giving it another shot. The next day rolled around and still nothing had changed, so Diaz figured he just needed more fertilizer and decided to toss in a bit extra. It's day 3 and still nothing is popping up, so he figures he just needs way more fertilizer and decides to whip up a massive batch. By day 4, nothing was growing, so Diaz decided to go totally overboard and triple the fertilizer, but Aruna finally snapped and told him to give it a rest. She explained that dumping more stuff wouldn't help because this land was just a lost cause. Diaz agreed she was probably right, saying that even if you fail and waste your time, you shouldn't give up. Just take that energy and use it for something else. While Iken and Cyan watched him, Sine whispered to her friend asking what they should do, but Iken had no idea how to help Diaz and started calling out to her mom in her head. Out of nowhere, someone screams for help. Honestly, I should have seen that coming. Senna picks up on it too. Neither of them recognize who it is. Senna's sure it is. Trapped in the storage room, she desperately begged to be let out, explaining she'd been stuck there for a whole week and was barely clinging to life without any water. She totally regretted not asking the Dragon Slayer for backup and kept shouting at the top of her lungs, just hoping someone would hear her. Sinai realized someone was definitely calling out, and it was pretty obvious the voice was coming from the storage room where that mouse girl was trapped inside a chest, screaming that she couldn't get the lid. Sinai promised they'd get help but admitted she couldn't do it alone, while Iken warned that moving the bags would make everything spill everywhere, and a super worried Misha apologized and begged them to stop before someone got hurt, suggesting they just call the adults instead. Sani explains the adults are way too busy with work to call, making the mouse worry the girls might get hurt, but she agrees to wait just a little longer. The girls stuck it out until the very end, and after they hauled away the last heavy piece, the mouse told them she was super grateful for everything they did. She explained how tough it was being shut out and called them her true heroes. Then she introduced herself and asked the lady's name while I just smiled and told the mouse his glasses looked awesome. Misha says thanks and mentions her glasses and book are both handmade, making Senai super curious about who she really is and if she's a guy or a girl. Misha reveals she's actually Emma from the Racing Mice tribe, and Jaraboa backs her up, confirming she's a woman. Aruna's freaking out and begging Diaz to stop, but Diaz just says he's thinking about switching spots, so Aruna snaps that he's starting to look like a slave, and Sinai had to find out why Emu was locked away, and it's pretty clear she was being punished for something serious. Emma explained this wasn't a punishment and her story was super long, but it wasn't anything bad. Basically, her friends got busted trying to jump Diaz Samu, and she just happened to be standing there with zero part in the fight. Since she looked just like the prisoners, she panicked, thinking they'd blame her for the attack on Diaz Sami, so she bolted and dove into the first chest she saw to hide. They piled heavy stuff on the chest to trap her inside, and after hearing her side of the story, Senai started wondering if she was actually an enemy who hated Diaz's guts. Emma explained she hadn't even talked to Diaz yet, so she wasn't his friend or his enemy, but then Senai told her they needed to talk about something super important. They had to keep this conversation totally top secret so Diaz wouldn't find out, but Emma suggested they find someone they actually trust more than her. Sani explained that nobody in the village can be trusted because there are barely any people left, and the ones who are still around, like Aruna, Francis, or Francois, would totally snitch to Diaz. So Ima nodded along, knowing exactly how serious this was. Sani told me Diaz worked that field every single day with zero luck. So I explained that nothing would ever grow there since the land is just too weak. She said they actually know how to fix this dead land, but it's a power humans shouldn't touch because her parents warned that people would just get greedy and abuse it. So we have to keep it a total secret. Their parents made them swear to keep their powers hidden from everyone, and even though it was the final promise the sisters ever made, Sign said they were still 100% down to help Diaz. Ekin explains that since Emma isn't human, she can actually master this power, and they're down to teach her. So Emma gets super interested and asks for more details until Ekin asks if she's finally starting to get it. Emma told them she needed a minute to process everything, and as she thought out loud, she realized Sinai and Ekin were basically the forest's guardians, which they totally confirmed by saying their people live there just to protect and study the woods. Ima explained that these people don't just live in the forest, they protect it until they actually become part of it. And for their race, the word become has a H. In agreed and explained that when forest people die, their strength and memories flow into seeds that get planted in special spots to grow the woods, making Emma realize they give these seeds to the people they love so they can all become the forest together. If you get these seeds, you've got to protect them and help them grow until they turn into a massive new forest. Once that seed sprouts into a tree, it basically becomes a tombstone you can. She realized the tree was basically a giant family tree tied to its people by blood, learning that the villagers live there to protect these living books, while the twin sisters use their magic to make plants grow instantly. Once Emma finally got what was going on, she asked if she was right for the job, and Sinai was super hyped, calling her a total genius and the perfect fit. Emma figured the twins were still too young to grow a whole forest, so they just used a small barrier to help the fruit grow, knowing that practicing every single day would make their powers skyrocket. Even though the barrier was tiny, it could actually block out diseases, making it a total game changer. Emma knew that if the rest of the world found out about this magic, things would get really. She straight up questioned staying with Diaz because she wanted to keep their powers a secret, and Sini admitted they were so scared at first that they almost ran away to keep their promise to their parents. When they finally met Diaz, his hands were super soft and his voice was so kind it reminded them of their parents, making him seem like a really warm guy, even though he smelled pretty bad. Aiken backed her sister up, saying that even though Diaz smells pretty bad, he's way nicer than that weird frog guy they met, which is exactly why they decided to stay with him and the friendly villagers. They finally felt like they could trust him with their secret, knowing he wouldn't do anything shady with the info, and Emma told them she totally got why they were doing this. She realized the sisters were just trying to keep their promise to their parents while still helping Diaz, so they needed a way to work together without breaking the rules, and Emma finally explained that the land was way too weak to grow anything without help from the forest people. Sinai explains that the ground here literally sucks up all the energy, and since any magic they add just vanishes instantly, they have to build a magic barrier to stop it. Ichin says a barrier will fix everything, while Emma wonders what's sucking the life out of the soil, knowing that if they find the cause, they finally have a shot at winning. Scene admitted they're totally stumped and don't really get what's happening, but they've got a hunch that some good kid is actually the cause of it all. Senet warns them about a creature that's turning the whole land into a desert, and Ikon realizes that if it doesn't stop, Francis and everyone else will have absolutely nothing left to eat. The girls told Emma their guess, but they sounded so unsure, like they thought someone was causing this on purpose even though Emma knew that was basically impossible. She realized the crops were failing because the soil was trash, and the environment was working against them. So while it's not turning into a desert, it's definitely a terrible spot for farming. Since this could be a monster's gross miasma or some weird disease, she had to find a way to pop a magic barrier without getting caught. Ima thinks they can hide the barrier from Diaz, but Sene says that's impossible since he's always out in the field, and H and N points out they just crash as soon as work is done. Emma thinks they should sneak out at midnight while everyone's passed out, but Sine shuts her down since they're sleeping too, and they wouldn't even have time to wake up. Ima offered to wake the girls herself, promising that even though she doesn't look like it, she's a pro at navigating in the dark and will definitely get them home if they just show her the way. The girls were totally down and knew talking to Emma was the right move, while Emma realized they were actually freaking out and felt glad she let them finish. Then she told everyone it was time to talk about the plan, but they had to stay cool so nobody would get suspicious. The girls all agreed and kept telling themselves they were just out for a night. When night finally hit, she was just glad to still be breathing, and that's when she spotted a tiny hole the twins had made for her to crawl through. She suddenly spots the dragon hunter and knows she has to stay completely hidden, while also noticing that Diaz really does stink from all that farm work, just like the girls said. Emo woke the girls up, introduced herself, and told them to hurry to the field to help Diaz before the sun came up and they ran out of time. The girls woke up and started freaking out about how dark and scary it was, while Emma just wondered how they even managed to go to the bathroom. The girls said they usually walk with DS and Aruna, who always hold their hands or carry them, And that's when Emma realized they didn't feel nearly as safe or chill with. Aishin points out her item belonged to their mom while Sini has their dad's, and they both feel like holding these seeds keeps them in a great mood, almost like their parents are right there helping them out. Their parents were obsessed with black tea, so the girls would hold these seeds and have full-on conversations with them just to feel close, making Emma realize these seeds were giving them the strength to keep fighting. I'll just tell Amy to hang on for a bit. She stepped aside to check out the field Diaz had been working so hard on, and to her, everything looked totally normal with zero issues. While that's going on, the girls start chanting their spells, and a bright light wraps around them before slowly sinking into the ground, making Emma realize just how beautiful the whole scene looks. The light just soaked into the ground, and with the ritual finished, the girls said the barrier was finally set, and they could go crash in the yurt. Emma was shocked they were already heading back so soon, and that's when it hit her. Her job there was officially done. Stuck in a pile of girls, she tried to leave nicely so she wouldn't get caught being late, but they were totally passed out and wouldn't let go, making Emo freak out. Over in the city of Melangal, a bunch of beastmen were hanging out at a bar gossiping about how Eldon Sama is heading to the royal capital to meet the king and finally become a lord. Eldon is handing over the magic stone to whoever slays the earth dragon, and everyone knows the king will be thrilled, while the beastmen are hyped that Kazdex is finally going to be safe and quiet. They noticed everyone was avoiding the half-humans, which felt super sketchy, but then someone mentioned the dragon hunter actually has a half-human wife he's totally in love with, and he was totally blown away to find out his wife had a horn and even joked that she might be descended from rhino people. One of the beastmen joked about how a human could actually fall in love with a rhino person. Word spread about the dragon killer's village looking for new people, promising free food and a home to any race except for criminals. And the dog tribe was totally down for it. Then the talk shifted to a crazy attack by long-eared mice. But it turns out the guy behind it claimed to represent a race of ape people that literally nobody there had ever heard of. More groups started popping up, all claiming they were being egged on by a tall guy completely hidden under a black cloak. The guy in black was fuming because the beast wouldn't fall for his gold bribe, realizing he could only trick weaklings who weren't even good at playing their part. He was super annoyed that he ran out of poison, but he swore that one way or another, Diaz was a dead man. Over in the eastern kingdom of Sans Serif, the knights were freaking out because people were ditching Diana Somas's squad, and one guard even said their power was officially dead. The talk shifted to Maeza-sama's group losing Duke Kazdex, the guy who ran the Western Trade Zone, and who's actually going to take the throne next. Richard Sama is... The group was debating Duke Kazdex's loyalty when a knight revealed the Duke actually died from a sickness, leaving his second son in charge, who luckily isn't with the Mezus faction. But with rumors that the older brother died too, everyone's whispering that a deadly plague is wiping out the nobility. The whole political future is riding on the second son's next move, and since he's already tight with Diaz from the neighboring land, he's taking over as the Lord of Netrosov's Lukes, a creepy place everyone swears is cursed. People said those fields were cursed and would just burst into flames if you tried to build anything, but some thought it was a total lie, and that Diaz teaming up with the Duke's second son. Someone said they'd never actually met Diaz, but heard he's either a total saint or has zero morals, right before the conversation was cut short. The guard pulled his buddy aside and dropped a total bombshell. Diana Sama took almost every soldier and ditched the capital. A knight saw her heading out with 200 soldiers and a ton of supplies, making everyone think a war was about to break out. Another guard thought 200 people was way too small for a real war, but they still had to go find out what was actually happening. Iruna woke up and realized that Sinai and Aishin had totally swapped spots in her dream. He was totally confused by the weird move, but Emma was already in a great mood and gave him a quiet little good morning. Diaz reported that things were getting super tense in Iluk village that morning, starting with Iruna totally losing it, because Sinai and Aikion were caught sleeping with a weird, long-eared mouse that could be carrying some deadly disease. He was totally fuming as he announced that the girls and that long-eared mouse, who's an Aima from the jumping mouse tribe, were getting punished with a mandatory soak in a healing bath. The dove watching nearby finally realized that this exact moment was the reason for all those screams he heard earlier. D was low-key freaking out that it might happen again, but Aruna told him not to worry since Eam has bright blue skin. Dove was totally shocked to hear about the blue skin. Diaz even shared a story about how seeds he planted just one day ago were already popping out of the ground. He saw the seeds sprouting like normal, but he was totally shocked to see a perfect circle right in the middle of it all. Even though the soil and fertilizer were totally different from his grandma's place, the plants in this circle just ignored the rules and grew like crazy. The dove joked that the story was epic and mentioned the local birds are super noisy, probably because of all the sprouts in the field. Diaz gets all curious and asks if he can actually talk to birds, but the dove just smirks and says he's not magical and that Diaz is being totally weird. Then Diaz brings up he finished cleaning the warehouse, but the thought of eating beans that mice had been crawling all over totally grossed him out. He thought it was a total waste to just toss them, and the dove agreed, saying it'd be super dumb to throw away such yummy beans. Even with all the drama, Diaz realized the biggest thing that happened that morning was a totally random visit. Out of nowhere, a pigeon named Jalant introduces himself as the head of mail delivery for Eldon Samu, and Diaz is completely blown away. He wasn't expecting company at all, and immediately wondered what that loud noise was, thinking something huge must have gone down. Jalab came clean and said things were actually getting pretty crazy. He admitted he totally blanked on a super important mission letter that needed to be handled right away. He handed the paper over and told Diaz. Diaz knew he had to rip that letter open right now, and it was packed with 3 big updates. First, the jumping mice apologized for the recent mess and warned that a traitor was pushing them into. The third letter was the most important because it had a special seal, and it said way more dog people showed up for recruitment than expected. So Diaz had to decide right now if they could join the village. Diaz turned to Jalant and asked what a small breed even was, because even though he's seen tons of dogs, he's never heard of that kind before. Jalen breaks it down, explaining that there are actually 2 types of dog people. The big ones who are super smart, strong, and look almost human, the kind Diaz has probably met. And then there are the small ones. These things look just like their ancient ancestors, but they're way weaker and super clumsy, crawling around on all 4s and having tons of babies that grow up in a flash. Gallant says the little guys overheard the big species talking about the village, and once they saw ads for free food and a place to stay, the whole crowd just decided to move in. Diaz promised that if the village accepts the little guy, he'll make it official immediately, and told Gallant to hang tight. Gallant was totally down, and when Diaz said anyone could eat the pea, Klaus gave the green light, and since they were desperate for backup, Maya saw the whole place get way more hype, which totally boosted her mood. Chiruchi apologized for being distracted by the soil, but said she's totally down if Diaz is, and when he checked with the other grandmas later, every single one of them was super chill and agreed with the plan. Diaz walks into the yurt and meets Rona, who quickly says she's not mad but is just worried about everyone because there's a mouse inside that could be a major problem. Right after Diaz spoke, the girls started geeking out over dogs and totally forgot what they were even talking about. Aruna admitted that teaching was impossible in a place this crazy, and when Diaz asked if the girls said anything big, she told him they were just stuck in their own heads and still hadn't explained why they were sleeping with that mouse. He told everyone that if the girls were keeping secrets, they definitely had a good reason, and even though he didn't know what they were hiding, he was sure they weren't trying to hurt anyone, so he said they should just wait for them to come clean on their own. Aruna says she's down but sounds super unsure. And Diaz remembers that Emma's soul was actually glowing a bright blue when he checked it out. She introduced herself as a long-eared jumping mouse. And even though Aruna warned them to be careful, the girls became instant besties with Ima, making Diaz realize she was totally different from the mean. Later on, Diaz walks up to Ima to ask what she's doing there, and she gets all awkward, telling him it's a pretty long story. Zolant zoomed off with a letter for Eldon, and Diaz is sure it'll get there right as the sun sets today. The hand-delivered letter confirmed the Dog Nation was officially in, but it came with a catch. Plus, Diaz mentioned that Emma had arrived and was planning to stick around the village for a while. Turns out Emma actually chose to stay in Eluk village herself, so she opened up to Diaz about her family drama and told him straight up she wanted to live there, which made Diaz ask her why she... Emma explained she wants to stay close to Sane and Ai-hen because seeing them grow up is so inspiring, and she made sure to mention that even though she looks young, she's actually super T. Emma was super hyped to help the village by teaching Senai and Aikina, promising to work her tail off if they'd just let her stay there for good. Diaz reminded her that he decided to introduce her to the rest of the village and went around asking everyone for their thoughts, and while most people were totally cool with it, Aruna was the only one who had a major problem. After hearing that, Aruna started second-guessing if the mouse should even be in the village, getting all moody and suspicious while Emma just kept her cool and stayed totally calm. She claimed she was a pure desert representative and not some gross rodent, and after Diaz watched her deny it with total confidence, Aruna finally let her stay as long as she promised to keep things clean. The Mouse People's rep, Ima Juraboa, just officially joined Iluk village as their newest member. Diaz headed back to the warehouse to check the supplies, but he was totally shocked to see that a bunch of packages had vanished. He spotted a hidden wine barrel right in the middle of the warehouse, and when he saw it move, he got super nervous and knew he had to go check it out. Emma rushed up to Diaz, totally hyped, as she heard everyone in the kitchen prepping food and drinks, convinced they were throwing a massive welcome party just for her. Diaz caught her hype and told them to hurry up and join in, smiling to himself when he saw Sign and her sister still tossing walnuts into their food like they always do. Emma was dying to know what the grandmas were whipping up since it looked so strange, and after Diaz noticed some sugar jars and guessed it was a dessert, Emma stepped up and asked if she could give it a try. Diaz watched the whole thing go down and was honestly pretty annoyed that they made these huge plans behind his back without saying a single word to him. Aruna saw his face and smugly asked if he was shocked, and when Diaz admitted he was totally blown away and asked how she pulled it off, she proudly explained that things had been going so well lately that Grandma Maya suggested they throw a massive party. Diaz was super busy, so the crew just started getting ready without asking him, and while Aruna tried to warn him, he was way too focused on a letter in his tent. But once he hid the wine without telling anyone, she straight up called him out for being wrong. Diaz remembered the kingdom's law says no drinking until you're 18, since alcohol is basically poison for kids, and you need to be old enough to actually control yourself. Diaz didn't know the Oni laws, but since Aruni was only 15 and already drinking, he hid the wine even though he knew she'd be super mad. Aruna hears what he's thinking and quickly tells him she's not mad, explaining she knows Diaz was just worried about her. They've been together so long that they totally get each other now, and she admits that making this huge feast without asking was just her own way of getting a little payback. She just wants them to handle the big stuff as a team now that they're married, because she's worried Diaz will stop asking for her input, and she told him straight up that as a couple, they need to share everything. Dee said sorry and promised he'd keep that same energy from now on. He tried to talk about wine, but Aruna cut him off right away, claiming that alcohol isn't bad for you and is actually super healthy. These united people all drink komis, a super healthy drink used as medicine, and families with horses even give it to their toddlers the moment they stop nursing. Diaz totally freaked out when he heard that, shouting that giving kids alcohol is super dangerous and could actually end up killing them. Aruna stood her ground, explaining that where she's from, this stuff never caused any trouble. In fact, the people who didn't drink it were the ones who ended up getting sick. Maya saw them totally vibing and hyped up how well they were getting along, but then she got a bit annoyed and told them to quit the yapping and help get ready, since they could talk about wine after the party. Diaz tried to protest, but Maya cut him off, shouting that they found a box of wine in the pantry, and it was time to party with the dog tribe, exactly like Aruna planned. Maya said Aruna realized the dog people's arrival meant Diaz could finally stop drinking, so she's throwing a party right away, even though she can't resist wine herself. He finally realized Aruna was just being her honest, stubborn self. And since he totally forgot about their different cultures and didn't talk to her first, he decided to just let it slide this time. He knew that every time a new species joined Iluk, the whole culture would change, so he promised to personally handle making all the new rules. He's the Lord, so it's his job to protect the village and make the big calls, no matter who tries to stop it. The neutral lands are buzzing with Aruna, Sinai, Ichen, Tumimu, Klaus, and Maya, who just welcomed newcomers Ima, Jeroboa, 4 horses, and 2. While the group is having breakfast, Diaz spots a weird white drink, and the girl explains it's kumis, a fermented drink made from the mare's milk she grabbed from the village since. One guy wonders if the drink is even alcoholic, but Diaz says you'd have to chug a ton to feel anything, so it's safe for kids and actually super healthy for your strength. Diaz realizes the whole mix-up happened because he thought kumis was super strong booze while Aruna just saw it as a healthy drink. So they decide that once things settle down, they really need to sit down and talk about their different cultures and pasts. The crew noticed the village vibe was way better, and it was clearly rubbing off on everyone since people were finally starting to chat and get along naturally. The girls were super hyped about their massive haul, showing off their full baskets and giving a huge thanks to Diaz Thanksinia and Ihan while being genuinely happy for them. The girls were dying to have their own field to plow, and the guy was totally down, promising to prep a small spot for them next time. After brainstorming the perfect location, they finished up there. Diaz's grandma Celia pulled him aside with a big idea she'd been cooking up, and they scheduled a meeting for that very night to talk it over. Ramoselia worried the group was getting way too big to talk things out, so she suggested picking leaders to speak for everyone to Diaz to stop any drama. And by that night's meeting, everyone loved the idea and started planning how to make it work. After the big meeting, They decided Diaz stays the boss and takes all the heat, but he'll listen to reps like Placide for security, Arona for the family, and Grandma Maya for the... The crew decides the dog community has to pick a rep to go in their place, and if they need more people, they'll just follow the rules until the meeting finally wraps up late at night. Aruna spots the guests arriving and shakes Diaz awake, who's totally confused about why anyone is there so early. Aruna realized she totally missed how close the group had gotten, but she told everyone to keep moving and she'd explain it all as they went. As the heroes looked ahead, everyone spotted a massive army of monsters charging straight for the village. There were dog warriors and even a giant snake monster in the mix. One guy was totally shocked because he couldn't believe it. The girl explains that this beast is Anaconda Rook, and he's a total monster. The guy is blown away because he's never heard of human dogs taming something that scary. Everyone freaked out when the monster devoured one of the dogmen, and since they were totally unarmed and defenseless, panic took over until Diaz suddenly charged straight at the beast, ignoring the girl's screams to stop as he ended up face-to-face with the monster. Diaz dives straight into the fight against this massive screaming snake monster, landing a huge blow that knocks it back just in time to snatch the poor animal right out of its mouth. He kept the pressure on and lunged forward, snatching the victim right out of the beast's jaws before using his insane strength to shove the snake monster back and land a massive hit that sent it crashing to the ground. Everyone finally starts waking up, and AR realizes they got lucky because that snake hand wasn't even venomous. The dogman is just hyped to be alive since he thought he was a goner, but Aruna looks totally ashamed, admitting the whole mess was her fault for forgetting her bow and arrows. The girl gave a sweet smile and thanked them for the rescue, explaining how a massive snake almost ate them before the locals stepped in to save the day. And after Aruna introduced herself and her husband Diaz, she explains that they don't just look different, they all have totally unique personalities too. The dark-haired ones are the Tibetan Mastiffs, a clan that's super brave and takes massive. Canis explained that clan names are a huge deal for dog people and told everyone to memorize them. Then Aruna scanned her soul and found a light blue aura proving she's actually cool, while the little guys had bright blue auras showing they're totally pure-hearted. And since Canis mentioned these small folks get super stressed without work, she insisted on finding them jobs and asked if that would be a problem. He figured the horses could help build a reservoir and watch the livestock, while the rest would train as soldiers for night patrols, sparring with Klaus, and jumping into real fights if things got messy. Diaz told them all about the new job offers. The dogkin leaders were totally hyped to hear it. They started freaking out so much that everyone else had to try and settle them down. Diaz introduced himself as the big boss of the land, and as he and Aruna sat down to chat, all three clans started buzzing with excitement. Canis was totally blown away by how chill. Marf, a total powerhouse from the Tibetan breed, stepped up and said his clan was ready to fight, but when he acted all formal, Diaz just smiled and told him to chill and keep it casual. Then the Besenji leader, Serdeo, spoke up saying they were itching to start building things like reservoirs. So Diaz welcomed them, but made sure to tell everyone to take good care of his own elders, Graham and Amai. The Shep clan leader has a massive name, but he just goes by Shep, and he was totally down to handle the horses with his crew. He even asked if the village had a height. Diaz told Shep there weren't any sheep in the village but put him in charge of the horses instead. And after Shep agreed, Aruna introduced herself as Diaz's wife to the mast. The Shep clan has 30 members, Basaga has 25, and they've got 23 massive dogs ready to go. Diaz wanted to bring everyone in slowly so nobody. Diaz thanked Klaus for his patrol shift and introduced him to Canis, the big boss of the dog people. And even though Klaus was totally shocked, he kept it chill and said hello while Canis and the soldier are staring at each other with literal flowers and glitter in the air. And while Aruna catches the romantic vibe instantly, Diaz is just standing there completely clueless. In Obaka, everyone hits up the grandmas for advice on what to do. The girls and the adults head out to find special stones, roots, and leaves to help things grow. Each of these, it's been 10 days since the dog people moved into Iluk, and they're already helping out at the well while the girls use their parents' magic stone secrets to start farming their own land. Canis thought these human dogs would be a total disaster, but they're actually crushing it by handling horses and tools like pros. The Clouds are already starting group training, and Diaz and Canis are just watching with big smiles, hyped that their plan is working perfectly. Suddenly, one of the Mastiffs blurs forward with insane speed, smashing the target before charging straight at Klaus, who's totally shocked to realize just how much power is behind a real attack. One of the massive dogs slams Klaus to the dirt, but he actually praises them for being so quick. He's super proud of their progress, but don't get it twisted. This guy is a legendary war vet nicknamed Klaus the Beheader for taking out enemy generals, and he's easily one of the strongest fighters around. DS isn't sure how to explain why he's turning people into dog soldiers, so he decides to stop talking and just let Canis see the results for herself. DS brought up those talking human dogs with crazy powers during the war meetings, thinking the adults could actually be awesome allies. He figured the plane was totally safe now, and if anyone else showed up, they'd just be some weak, small-time thieves. Princess Diana III leads her army into the deepest part of the Saint Seraph royal tomb, warning her soldiers to keep their hands off the ancient coffins and only grab the treasure they need for the war. Princess Diana just went totally rogue and announced her insane plan to take over everything. She's going to use an ancient scepter to wipe out Dias, crush her own siblings, and use dragon scales and treasure. Diana is absolutely fuming that Dias went behind her back and rejected her, so she whips out her secret weapon, the royal seal, claiming that anyone with a saint's name has to obey her every word, and now she's going to force him to help her whether he likes it or not. The princess calls Diaz a traitor for killing innocent people in the war and vows to expose his lies to Richard, while a watcher mocks her for being dumber than a wild animal and says that idiots in charge are the most dangerous people of all. He sees his big opening and plans to jump Diana the second she attacks Diaz, wanting to prove he's way better than the parents who dumped him and finally become a legendary hero. Prince Richard rolls up with his elite squad and spots the spy he sent to watch Princess Diana coming back. Richard looks at the mess and sees Diana totally broke the rules by raiding the ancient king's tomb. He decides to stay out of it, though, because he's way too scared of getting into a yacht. He breaks down Diaz's crazy nicknames like Hero Patriot and Bloody Axe that show his different sides, but things get intense when the king orders him to completely wipe. Even in the middle of a brutal war, Diaz refused to hurt innocent people, and since his loyal crew followed his lead, they never looted or caused chaos even when they were operating on their. His name was actually Dobrojitsevets, but everyone butchered it so badly he ended up with the accidental nickname No Balls. While he was hanging around, he caught some rich noble kids. We get these flashbacks showing just how insane and scary the war actually was. It was pure chaos, and seeing people get hurt was basically a normal thing. One of the rich noble kids caught smuggling tries. Diaz couldn't just stand there and watch that mess, so he stepped in and absolutely crushed those spoiled nobles. Because of that, the guards hauled him straight to jail. After that mess with the noble, Diaz straight up told everyone that if you don't protect the weak, you aren't a real noble. And since even the king agreed, they just dropped the bomb. Later on, we find out Diaz is terrifying not because he's mean, but because he doesn't follow any rules or care about status, making him a total wildcard that scares everyone. The council debated if they should keep spying on Diana and how to handle Diaz after his messy history with the royals. And even though some thought he wouldn't dare start a fight, they decided to. The group starts gossiping about why Diaz is stuck at the border, and while some think he was kicked out, it turns out the king actually handpicked him for a super important mission because everyone says Diaz spent 20 years fixing the king's huge mistakes and saving the country from war, but because he did it all with no money or help, people think his brother or some secret force was actually helping him behind the scenes. One girl drops a total logic bomb by asking which royal Diaz actually messed with, and as she shuts down every single option, the whole room gets super awkward. The records tell us about this super cocky kid who thought he was untouchable, but after leading his squad into a total disaster just to show off, he got surrounded and was seconds away from death until a mysterious warrior jumped in and saved him. He flashes back to when he was a cocky brat in a huge mess, and even though he was actually royalty, the guy who saved him didn't care and totally roasted him for being reckless. Then that same man spent months protecting him and being the toughest teacher he ever had. One person remembers how Diaz turned Richard into a totally honest, hard-working guy who treats everyone the same, while someone else watches the country fall apart and realizes they have to step in before these trash leaders ruin everything. The prince orders his squad to hunt Diana down and snatch that royal seal before she can meet Diaz. And while his assistant is freaking out over the massive budget, he's told the cash. The prince thinks it's totally messed up that a hero who survived brutal wars might die just from being hungry, so he orders his men to go warn Diaz about it right now. Back at the house, Diaz is just chilling and eating lunch while the girls start roasting him for having another milk mustache. She's totally losing it because everyone keeps backstabbing her, even Prinia, and she's furious that no one understands she's actually doing the right thing, especially since being a dim. Diana grips her scepter artifact and decides right then and there that she's taking over the whole country. Diaz suddenly freezes like he saw something terrifying, but he plays it cool and tells the girl her food is just super delicious, and even though she's a bit confused, she just lets it go. One guy totally froze up while the other jumped into action and took down the dog. Then he rushed over with a medkit to save the wounded, as the girl watched him in total awe of his bravery. He was torn apart because he's human, and Canis is the dog tribe's eldest daughter, but even with all those strict rules holding them back, a massive spark is growing between them that gives them both hope. Caradio gives the command. A dog pulls up the wooden board, and water starts flooding the tank, making everyone go crazy with joy because their village finally has the water it needs to survive. Our main guy sees the pond is finally finished in this heat and gives all the credit to the dog people, especially since the crops are booming and the fruit trees are already budding. But just as he's getting ready to fill it up and call the horse buyers, he's totally shocked to find some random person trying to claim his property as their own. Diaz admits he's not the best rider, so he kept Bayers for himself because he didn't want a thief horse going to someone who couldn't handle it. And Diaz admits he's a total noob at riding, and his horse is usually out of control, but the animal actually listens to him so they can make it work. Diaz and the buyers watch the kids call him and Arunak mom and dad, while the village rests. And as the buyers walk up, Diaz just casually asks if the horse needs a... Diaz gets a frantic message from Eldon via a bird. And Grant says he needs an answer right now because Diana just rolled up to Eldon's land with a massive army, forcing Eldon to... She straight up says she's there to end Diaz and take his land. And while Eldon tries to play it cool and say no, Diana pulls out a royal order that proves she's... Diana showed off a document with the royal seal, but the whole thing was actually a total fake. It ordered the entire army and all their gear to be handed over to her so she could crush Diaz. Even with Diana pressuring him and throwing documents in his face, Eladon stays totally chill and says he needs to talk to his team first. But he secretly thinks she's just a foolish... One guy starts thinking ahead and tells everyone to be careful with how they feel, while Alden refuses to ever hurt his best friend Diaz, even if it costs him big time. And since Diaz, Eldon is trying to get everyone on the same page, but the meeting is a total disaster. Half the room wants Diana gone and that fake royal decree destroyed, while the others are worried about Eldon. One guy starts giving his own opinion on a letter he got from Canis, but right then a delivery bird bursts into the room and scares everyone, making the rabbit jump as the bird crashes onto... The tension is through the roof and everyone's totally lost, so they ask the scout to read the letter out loud, and after a big sigh, the bird reveals that Diaz is actually teaming up with Diana just like the royal letter said, leaving the whole council completely baffled. As soon as Diaz's letter was read out loud, the entire hall was left in total shock. She turns to Klaus and tells him straight up that he's the one who wanted to talk to her. Klaus knows he might not survive tomorrow's battle with Diaz, so he finally stops hiding his feelings and tells Canis-san he truly loves her, even though everyone already saw it. Once Klaus confesses, Canis breaks down in tears and admits she's loved him since the very first day. And even though she's the dog tribe's eldest daughter and forbidden from dating outsiders, she doesn't care about the rules anymore, leaving Klaus totally choked up as he tells her he feels the same way. Right after confessing their love, Klaus and Canis share a massive hug while the girls watch in total shock, whispering that they must be fighting until the woman steps in to tell them they've got it all wrong. Canis is crying her eyes out as she says goodbye, swearing she'll wait for Klaus in his home village no matter what, while Klaus stays quiet with a look of pure grit and sadness as the sun rises over a field covered in bodies. One warrior checks the damage through his telescope while the other looks totally stressed, realizing that the real war is only just getting started. It's been 5 days since Eldon's letter showed up, and now the big moment is finally here. Everything is hitting its breaking point, and Diana just showed up leading 50 people. Eldon's got 1,000 troops with 200 of them barely armed, just like his letter said, while Murph is showing up with 10 battle-ready mastiffs. Klaus decked out every mastiff in custom gear like combat masks, dragon fangs, and cloaks made from tough earth dragon skin. This armor is so strong it can even tank a full... If things get dangerous, the village has to hide Aruna with camouflage magic, and while Diaz is focused on keeping everyone safe, he's stressed that Eldon is... Diaz's main goal is keeping the village safe, even if he's feeling shaky about attacking Diana, so the plan is to use Eimer's traps to split the enemy army, lure them into an ambush, and then launch a massive surprise attack to take Diana down as the main target. He's gearing up for a huge mission they're calling Removal. The heroes get together to figure out their game plan for the attack. They actually know where all the traps are thanks to running through the fields and fixing up their home finally made them feel like they belonged. but they knew they'd have to ditch everything if danger showed up, even after putting in so much work. Diaz looks at the field and starts stressing out, realizing this place isn't just dirt. It's basically family, and he's got to protect it no matter what. Right in front of the army is this massive, old-school bell tower, and even though it's totally outdated, they're using it to blast out orders so the enemy can't spot. A massive bell starts ringing, signaling that the whole army is coming. One of the scouts knows exactly what that sound means. Those non-stop rings mean a full-scale attack is happening. Right in the middle of the chaos, Diaz is screaming at his guys to hold the line and stay sharp, and his voice is the only thing keeping the whole team from falling apart. Diaz screams over the noise, ordering his men to hold the line and stay sharp so the whole squad doesn't fall apart in the chaos. Right before the massive battle, Eldon's main force of 1,000 warriors lined up with Diana's 50 fighters and 200 mercenaries, while Diaz stood on the other side with a tiny team of only 12 people. The soldiers were totally on edge, standing in a tight battle line. You couldn't even see their faces behind those cold steel helmets. They were clutching their weapons so hard their knuckles were probably... The army suddenly froze, leaving the enemy totally confused. Soldiers started whispering and their lines were falling apart. Diaz saw that only the middle guys moved while the sides just stayed put. The battlefield was a total mess, but Eldon was just chilling at a table sipping tea. One of his officers started panicking, screaming about the orders to break through the enemy lines, but Eldon just gave him a smirk and said he was busy with his drink, leaving the guy completely speechless. One of the commanders is absolutely fuming because Eldon won't lift a finger, but Eldon just keeps chilling with his tea, saying his dad taught him a true noble never skips tea time. And he's convinced that sending just a few elite fighters is plenty, since he's already given the army everything they need to win. Even with a fight breaking out, Eldon is just chilling with his tea, telling everyone to wait until he's done before giving orders, then finishes his cup and asks for a refill, while the other guy watches and starts getting a really weird vibe, especially since nobody else would even touch their case. One of the mercs was shocked that Diaz was the real target and didn't even want to stop eating to help, but the captain immediately ordered a retreat, warning that attacking a war hero like Diaz would turn the entire national army against them, since even the Duke wouldn't dare mess with him. The mercenary gave the money back, said his goodbyes, and just walked away, leaving the commanders in a total panic. One officer was gasping for air as he tried to order an attack. When Diana's soldiers started closing in, Diaz couldn't believe how messy and weak they looked, and even though he almost let them leave, he decided to take them out first by dist. When Aruna screams her battle cry, she declares that even if Diaz says no fighting, she's still backing up her husband. So she rallies the Iluk Women's Association to jump into the fray and help him out in their own wild way. The old lady stared down at the magic circle to see if the ritual actually worked. She still had questions about that echo creature, but this was plenty for now. Right then, a beast man told, "The elders are totally relieved the ritual worked and the muses were right again," while Eldon watches through his binoculars and asks Camelot if he's figured out the enemy's fighting style yet. Diaz is absolutely cracked, landing heavy hits with perfect aim that demand respect, and despite his size, his strength and accuracy are totally insane. Klaus holds down the back, shutting down flankers and reading the heroes are totally stunned by the outcome, and one of them admits those dogs were way tougher than they looked, because even though they're small and clumsy, they fought like natural-born killers. Klaus grips his weapon tight, remembering his promise to make it back in one piece, and even with the world falling apart around him, he's totally locked in on the enemies ahead. But he doesn't realize someone is sneaking up from behind, and only his friend sees the danger. Klaus heard Diaz call out and charged in, throwing a punch without even thinking. Then Diaz pointed down at a snake hiding right by his foot. That's when Klaus finally realized he was... Diana tried to seize control by shouting that she was the boss, but when she tried to spark up that legendary scepter, the thing stayed totally dead, and she completely lost it when she realized everyone. Suddenly, Diana feels this weird shock as something whizzes past her, and before she can even blink, an arrow slams into her and knocks her straight off her horse, leaving everyone else totally lost in hunting for the shooter. Aruna gave the order to swipe Diana's horse and staff while invisible, then lead her straight to the eastern forest of Eldon to shut down her magic and get her out of the fight. Diaz's partner was lurking in the trees, trying to spook Diana and force her deeper into the woods. It would have been way faster to just take her out, but she wanted to mess. Aruna really wanted to finish them off, but she held back because she knew he totally hates killing, so she just scared the guys into surrendering and took Diana prisoner. Two mercenaries suddenly snatched Diana, and one is hyped she's still alive since they just happened to find her before the Diaz meeting. So now they're taking her and the seal to their boss while the second guy shows up and roasts his partner for getting distracted by food again. Out of nowhere, arrows started flying at the mercenaries, putting them on high alert as one guy panicked because he didn't know who was attacking, and he was terrified it might be Diaz. One of the guys starts panicking and yelling at the shadows, swearing they aren't Diaz's enemies and are actually working for his old student Richard, even waving a bag of gold and promising to return the girl if they just stop shooting, because apparently Diaz is better off without her. He tossed a bag of coins at the mysterious guys chasing them to try and calm things down, then panicked and told his crew to run, so they'd know he wasn't looking for a fight. She noticed their auras weren't that dark and realized they were actually connected to the kids Diaz used to look after, so she decided to spare them and let Richard deal with Diana while she headed. To thank Diaz for all his hard work, she imagined singing him a song or letting him get some sleep while she proudly took over and handled everything herself. She was totally lost in her daydreams about a special way to thank Diaz, and after teasing him that she'd handle everything, she got so flustered that she started rushing ahead to. One of the beaten soldiers owned up to it and begged for mercy, while Diaz calmly explained they were already tired and that heavy armor just made everything worse. The enemy soldiers knew they were cooked and totally gave up, with one guy raising a spear to announce a meal while the others bowed down, and Diaz just watched them all with a stone-cold face. The enemy soldiers finally gave up and dropped their weapons, and while everyone walked away alive and unhurt, our hero was super annoyed that Diana escaped before he could face her. Right after the battle, one of Diaz's teammates totally loses it because he ditched his post to charge ahead, yelling that he should have just set traps if he did. Eldon marched straight into Diaz's camp to surrender and talk about the prisoners, admitting they totally messed up by invading illegally, and since Diana ditched them, they've got no leader left and just want to put their weapons down to stop the fighting. Diaz accepts the truce because he can see these guys know they're totally cooked. Eldon tries to act like they didn't actually lose just so he doesn't look like a failure to the Tupwood. Diaz isn't sure how this truce actually helps Eldon, but he's still willing to put his name on it, while Eldon admits he's still figuring out his next move but plans to use the stolen seal in Diana's drama to play the victim card with the king. Finally ending the talk with a deal on paybacks and a promise to help each other out. Aruna suddenly pops up and reveals she spiked the patriarch's breakfast with healing herbs and stimulants, which explains why DS is hyped for battle and why everyone is calling her a legendary knight. Diaz finally realizes why nobody's tired after that insane fight. It's all because of those crazy herbs Aruna gave Moore for a power boost, but she even threw in some fertility meds that left everyone super confused, and now it's obvious Moore is playing matchmaker by making her Diaz's nanny just to force them together. Aruna says while she was chasing Diana, she met a guy claiming to be a messenger for Richard, a kid Diaz supposedly raised, so she let him take over, but now Diaz is suspicious and I'm starting to think this Richard kid isn't even real. Diaz had been dying to talk to Aruna for ages, but after getting interrupted, they just split up, traded their prisoners to Eldon for a reward, and finally headed back home to Iluk, where the village women helped gather all the loot just like Aruna asked. Diaz thought he was just heading to a boring meeting, but Aruna and the dog tribe ladies totally blindsided him with their new women's association. When he asked why she kept him in, one of the dogs drags over a staff that totally grabs Diaz's eye, and when he looks closer, he finds a pearl packed with magic right in the middle, making him super hyped to test out what this thing can actually do. Aruna tried to fire up the staff, but even though it started glowing, nothing actually happened, making her think the stone inside was just a regular rock with zero magic. The moment Diaz lifts the staff, it feels just like his heavy battle axe, and he realizes Aruna must have pumped her magic into it because this boring old rock is suddenly surging with insane energy. A massive fire dragon spirals out of Diaz's staff and hits the sky, proving this artifact is hiding some serious secret power. Everyone loses it when the magic staff suddenly kicks in, blasting a massive pillar of fire into the air that scares the life out of them. Aruna realizes this power is just like one of Diaz's famous weapons. While the rest of the crew tries to figure out how it even happened, Aruna decides to keep the magic staff, leaving everyone totally shocked and worried, while the rest of the crew heads home to a massive, happy welcome. With the battle against Diana finally over, the crew takes a breather to test out that mysterious staff, only to realize that Diaz is the only one who can actually handle its power. Diaz had this crazy unique staff, but he was terrible at explaining it, telling everyone to just swing it like an axe to make fire. And since nobody believed him, Aruna used her magic to help him blast some flames. Now, this legendary weapon is basically just a glorified lighter they use for everyday chores. A month later, summer hits and the whole capital is buzzing with crazy rumors. Everyone's talking about Diana getting busted for stealing the royal seal and trying to start a rebellion. Prince Richard was the... Once the secret plot was busted, the king stripped Diana of her status and locked her in a temple, while Prince Richard became the ultimate MVP for exposing her, taking over the biggest factions and getting... Eldon became a total legend across the kingdom, and since the king felt bad about the drama with Diana, he gave him a 3-year tax break, letting Eldon use his smarts to walk away as the only real winner. That 3-year tax break from the king gave him a massive edge in the West and totally wrecked the old system, meaning Richard can't touch Castex while he's backing the Duke. Richard was absolutely fuming after letting the Duke of Castex crush him so easily, but while he was sulking, the whole kingdom was buzzing about how the hero Diaz survived that cursed wasteland using nothing but his insane sacred axe. Insane stories started spreading about Diaz, saying he soloed a massive earth dragon, married a beautiful girl, and gathered hundreds of people to build his own village from scratch. The crazy rumors about DS turned out to be 100% real, so the king rewarded him with a duke title, a new name, and the same massive tax breaks as Eldon, making him a total legend across the entire kingdom of Sansari. Word of DS's wild adventures even reached the western lands, spreading like wildfire until everyone in the kingdom was talking about him. The hard work is finally over and peace is back, so while tomorrow is definitely going to be a mess, right now it's just about getting ready for summer and crashing with the fam. Once Diaz got all settled in, Aruna finally got the chance to look after him. Aruna sat down right next to Diaz, looking super nervous but clearly caring a lot about him. She had this look in her eyes like she was finally ready to take charge. She leaned over. Aruna gently rested her hand on Diaz's head to show she had his back, and since he was totally exhausted, they both decided to finally call it a day. While Diana and Diaz were busy brawling on the battlefield, Francis and Francois took off west from the village of Enro. Normally, these dogs can read each other perfectly, but this time they're totally clueless about why the animal is freaking out. Francis and Francois totally jumped when a massive roar shook the whole ground, scaring the animals and making the dogs freak out like the sound was coming straight for them, so Francis decided it was definitely time to head back home. The sheep thanked the dogs and told them to head back to the village, but the mastiffs were so confused by that weirdly powerful voice that they just forgot the whole thing once they heard Diaz won his fight. She brushed the white horse and asked if it finally liked the saddle, while a guy watched nearby, realizing that the previous rider Aisha was actually Diana. Aruna named the horse Aisha because her coat looked like moonlight, and since horses can be super loyal to their old owners, they decided to just take care of her and let her settle in instead of forcing a new rider on her right away. Aruna's horn suddenly glowed green, meaning her magic picked up someone nearby, but he remembered her powers only sense movement and can't tell exactly who's coming. Suddenly, one of the dogs starts freaking out to warn Diaz that someone's coming, so he picks up the pup to calm it down while wondering who's there. But the girl thinks it's just a pagan Dew, a nasty, slimy creature with a giant mouth. Diaz was just wondering if the merchant Podin Dew actually brought the extra people he asked for when a guarded cart appeared on the horizon, and Podin jumped out to announce he'd brought everyone and was hyped to finally meet the legendary Diaz he'd heard so many rumors about. The new guy introduces himself as Ray Pagan, explaining that he's delivering these goods for his big brother and bragging that their family has been filthy rich for generations thanks to their massive trade empire. Patient Ray explained he's finally taken over for his sick brother, but after Diaz asked to bring more people to the estate, even Diaz noticed things were getting super weird. Ray explained that his brother dodged the slave trade since he knew Diaz hated it, but finding a different way was a total nightmare because beastmen wouldn't leave their homes, so they only ended up with the ones called the bloodless. Anyone who loses their beast powers is called a bloodless, looking and acting just like a normal human with zero super strength. Eventually, the bloodless completely vanished from the tribe, and generations later, kids started being born with what they call weak blood. The new Beastman King actually cares about the bloodless, which is a total 180 from the old ruler who treated them like garbage. These people are constantly hunted and just want to... He explained that he needed to check the place out himself before bringing anyone else in, just to make sure it was legit. Even though he really wanted to help everyone, he knew he had to be super gipwin. The guy decided sending everyone to Eldon was the best move. The girl was totally down for it, and even the frog realized there really is a lord nearby who helps out demigods and beast. The frog was shouting with tons of energy, making one guy realize that all their relatives were actually super similar. Pichinri then suggested building a trading post between their base and the Beastman Kingdom. Todd apologized for snapping and admitted he was just super nervous, but then he told everyone to start the real bidding because it was finally time to get serious. The merchant is hyped to sell these fancy pearl bowls and boxes, but a totally confused DS has to tell him that everything is way too expensive. Aruna slapped her bag of gold with a huge grin, telling them to pack up every cool item that could fit inside, while a shocked DS asked if she was really sure since these fancy things. Aruna breaks it down, saying gold isn't everything, and if they don't buy stuff, the traders will just bail on them. Plus, they're totally loaded anyway, so keeping the boat. The merchant quickly showed off a shiny gemstone necklace, telling them it was perfect for Diaz's wife since they had enough cash to buy pretty much anything they want. Aruna saw right through the merchant's lies, but stayed totally chill, calling out the fake gems on the necklace and demanding a barrel of booze instead, while joking they had enough cash to buy out all. Aruna saw the merchant was finally being real with her, so she decided to keep the deal going. The guy started panicking about losing money and asked to change the price. Aruna stayed. The guy watched everything go down and decided to let Aruni handle the talking, while their dog started scratching at the birdcage, wondering how those birds even got stuck in there. The dog accidentally lets the geese loose and they start chasing him while he barks like crazy, making such a huge scene that a random guy stops in shock and Grandma Maya runs out wondering why the birds are even out of their cage. Grandma Maya says geese are the ultimate package since they grow fast, live long, taste great, and are mean enough to be bodyguards. So seeing how healthy they look, she calls them birds of blessing because their meat and eggs are a total lifesaver. The guy says he wants to buy the geese, but as soon as the seller gives a price for 6 of them, the girl demands a 20% discount, and the man can tell this argument is going to take forever. The merchant agreed and said he had more gear, mentioned how a new heir hadn't been picked yet, and then pulled out some super expensive items that he swore were worth every penny. The merchant pulls out a super weird outfit called the Let's Get Pregnant suit and tells the girl it'll help her have a baby, but she's totally weirded out because after a massive shouting match, the shopping spree finally wrapped up. They started with almost nothing, but after some crazy bargaining, the pile of gear exploded. Aruna snagged Our hero thought the market fight ended in a tie, but looking at everyone's faces, something big was definitely going down. Aruna totally flexed her pro-trading skills to take over the deal. Aru instantly caught Pagan trying to rip everyone off with those crazy high prices. Even after spotting the scam, she stayed totally calm and just asked for a better deal without starting a... The hero listed off their massive haul of 6 geese, groceries, and even some cool paintings, while AR did their usual thing and insisted on getting a whole barrel of alcohol. The workers started hauling the gear to the warehouse, and our MC jumped in to give them a hand. While the heroes are hauling the boxes, the girl tries to help but gets totally distracted by a pile of old clothes, finding belly dancing outfits, acrobat gear, and even men's suits, which makes her realize those rich noble guys are actually super creepy. She started picturing herself in all kinds of outfits, from super skimpy looks to stuff that was covered up but still totally spicy, and as soon as she realized what she was doing, she turned bright. Aruna started picturing guys in super skimpy clothes, but once she realized what was actually going on, she was totally shook. Once the shopping was finished, Dillis thanked everyone and they all showed him some real love back. Once the delivery is done, he notices Aruna's face is bright red and asks if she's okay, but she totally panics and insists she's fine even though she's clearly a nervous wreck. The glowing frog asked if Diaz had any more favors, so he requested gear for the dog tribe and asked if they could spend their gold and silver coins, which the creature totally agreed to handle. It promised to bring something way better next time as it left, which really ticked Arna off and she snapped at him to shut up. As soon as the pagans took off, Diaz realized they were totally swamped since they still had to build a chicken coop and haul water from the river, especially with that frog lake creature telling everyone they better be ready. Right then, the villagers rushed over to Diaz, shouting his name with huge smiles on their faces. As Diaz walked over, the puppies were super hyped to see him and said they gave it their all. So he thanked them for helping Grandma Maya, but after seeing how filthy they were, the grandmas thanked Diaz for the geese since they needed feathers for winter, and they said his coop plan was perfect while the puppies helped out. But since the coop was way too small, they actually used me as a little house, making Diaz realize they really did a ton for him. Diaz gave the pups a huge thank you and decided the whole village deserved a reward, whether they fought on the front lines or stayed back to guard the base. He told everyone to go get washed up and meet in the square, mentioning he'd never actually done a big award ceremony like this before with Diana, and the puppies were totally down for the plan. With the whole crowd gathered in the square, he shouted that the dog people were total legends in the fight against Diana, giving 2 coins to the warriors and 1 coin to everyone else. Once the gold was handed out, the villagers and dogs were all cheering for Diaz, with one pup even promising to keep his treasure safe. But just as Diaz thought the job was done, a dog walked up and asked if he could drill a hole right through his coin, which totally caught Diaz off guard. One of the dogs asked to punch a hole in the gold coin, and the rest of the pack was totally down. But Diaz was just standing there confused, wondering why they'd even do that. The dog was super hyped and said he wanted to wear Diaz's coin on a string around his neck forever. Diaz told them the coin was for buying stuff they needed, not for show, and he was actually pretty blown away by how sincere they were being. Diaz tried to explain that they needed those gold coins to buy stuff, but the dogs totally lost it, crying and shouting that they were never giving up their precious rewards. Diaz was totally stumped because he'd been paying the dog people in gold and silver, but instead of spending the cash, they were just using the coins to decorate their tents, which made him. Diaz realized the dogs were keeping their gold coins as souvenirs instead of spending them, which totally stressed him out since he'd already ordered their supplies. So he asked one of the pups if gold and silver even mattered to them at all. The shy pup admitted he doesn't care about the money. He just loves them because Diaz gave them to him personally, and he's a sucker for shiny things, even if he isn't actually attached to the coins themselves. Diaz asked the dog if he'd start using gold as cash if he got a special custom gift instead of a coin, and the dog totally agreed, saying he'd way rather have the keepsake anyway. Diaz started thinking that a special souvenir might be way better than a gold coin, especially if it was something everyone wanted. He was really just testing his luck, but he started wondering what kind of item could actually be as valuable as gold. One of the girls suggested Diaz turn the teeth and bones from his kills into necklaces, and the dog tribe was totally hyped to wear them as a way to remember their hunt. The girl wrapped things up and said Diaz would hand-deliver their necklaces once they were ready, and he just gave her a confident smile. Aruna thanks him and asks for a special necklace to remember the moment, and after Diaz agrees to make it, she smiles and says they should still pay the dogs for their hard work. When they asked if Senhai, Ikan, and Amur were in the auditorium the whole time, he told them 2 of those guys were actually just studying with him. The girls are super hyped to get those necklaces too. But Diaz brings up that black AG monster Aruna mentioned, asking if they know anything real about it and making sure they realize their jewelry is literally made from the bones of the animal they're eating. The girls just looked at each other totally confused and decided they didn't even want the beads anymore, while Diaz realized that using that stuff for a prize was a total fail. Aruna says the dog people don't care about fancy jewels because they only value feelings. So Diaz suggests turning gem scraps into a special handmade gift. Diaz asked if he could make something cool with the supplies, but Aruna told him not to worry since she's a pro at the small stuff and would help him out. So he thanked her and decided to give it a shot. Diaz finally admitted he's always been an open book, and he was totally shocked when Aruna read his mind without him saying a word, wondering if she used some secret trick from her pagan deals, while the girls cracked up and Aruna just gave a mysterious smile. Diaz felt like he could finally read everyone's minds, so he stayed super chill while his hands carefully carved away at something. He felt like he totally crushed it, and right then, Aruna showed up shocked that he was already done and asking to see the final results. Aruna says the amulets are perfect and the dog tribe is going to be hyped, but Diaz is starting to sweat because if one takes 3 whole days, making them for everyone is going to take forever. Aruna told Diaz that if he keeps grinding this hard, he'll finish the job in a heartbeat, but she warned him to slow down and focus on the details instead of just rushing through it. Arna then remembered she had something to say and asked Diaz to show her how to make komaboda. Yuna asked Diaz to teach her how to build a kamabod, which is basically a stone stove, and even though Diaz was surprised, he realized it was a genius move since they were totally low on tools and helped just like Amber warned. She suggested building a roof over the whole kitchen once the stove was done to make cooking way faster, and while Diaz was totally on board, he was pretty worried about where they'd actually find the materials for. They're planning to hit Grant up with a letter for supplies the second he arrives, and Arane even thinks they should try to buy the barn roof from the traders. Diaz asks if everything is cool, and since Candace is heading home after checking on the dog tribe, Arna decides to send a message back with her. She realized Klaus was going to have to handle a ton of work all by himself. They decided to build a huge yurt for Klaus and finish all the prep before Canis got back, while making sure Diaz stayed on his grind. Aruna claims there's no news, but then she drops the tea that Klaus and Canis have liked each other forever, leaving everyone stunned when she reveals Canis is heading home to tell her dad the big secret. She was totally shocked he hadn't noticed the obvious yet, explaining that clowns and canes are always flirting while they eat, but he just looked confused and asked what she meant by food. Our hero didn't care one bit about the drama between Klaus and Canis, because he was way too busy stuffing his face, while the other guy mentioned it looked like a wedding was in the works, and that Canis was definitely staying there for good. She thinks if Klaus and Canis keep getting closer, they'll have kids in no time, and she told the hero he's got to hear their whole story straight from the source. Our hero was happy for them, but he was still pretty shocked. He nodded along, finally accepting that they were actually a thing. Aruna excitedly told everyone she grabbed the gift. Aruna's beaming because she loves the gift way more than she expected, but our hero is low-key losing it, thinking he needs to find another wedding present and having zero clue what his next move is. While making decorations for the estate, our hero realizes his beads are looking way better than before. Remembering Aruna's promise that mastering just one meant he'd be a pro at every technique, and a bunch of little girls started begging for beads too. And even though he wanted to say no, he eventually caved and promised to make them jewelry. So they all ran off cheering but left the door. Right then, someone else slammed the door open and shouted for Diaz. This guy burst into the house totally freaking out about some huge news, but the other dude just tells him to chill and explain, while outside a girl with a basket and her confused dog are just staring, because they have no clue what's going on either. Canis told Klaus not to worry about a gift, but Klaus still wanted to bring something, so he asked Diaz for ideas. Diaz realized he was actually looking for an engagement gift for Canis's parents, and Klaus even brought up the wedding gift Diaz gave Arunas's parents to get some real advice. Diaz said he didn't have much of a choice and told Klaus to give the dragon parts to Kane's parents, and even though Klaus was worried they'd think it was a weird gift, Diaz explained they were actually hyped and valued it as much as 30 black buffaloes, so Klaus decided he'd just find a way to make it work too. He told her to chill and not rush the gift for the girl's parents because even if they liked the black buffalo, she had to be totally sure. Diaz reminded him that Klaus finally decided to get Kunis's parents a hunting trophy. But when he asked for an opinion, Diaz wasn't sure they'd even like black buffalo meat and warned him. Diaz tells Klaus that if he hunts some black buffaloes, he can trade them in the village for this special memu wool that makes an awesome gift. And Klaus is super hyped because he knows exactly what he needs to do. Diaz mentioned that camelots are packed with high-quality memory wool, and the newlyweds would be stoked to get it. Klaus was super happy because even though it was a side effect of his work, he knew he had to master fighting while on the hunt, and thanked Diaz for having his back. 5 days flew by, and Diaz was totally crushing his work, feeling relieved that he'd finally gotten the hang of things and would be done in just a few days. But then the girls burst. She apologized for crashing their lesson to drop some huge news, and Canis excitedly told Diaz her parents finally said yes to her moving in, promising to be the best Clausen family member ever while asking him to look out for her. Diaz told her they still had a ton of work left, but he really needed her to handle Klaus, and Canis was totally down for it until her friend reminded her she had something else. She explains that her dad is busy being a lord, and since Elon, Sama, and Camelot are off at the capital, they're going to be gone for a bit. Diaz explained the wedding was still a bit away since Klaus and Kinney had to hunt a black buffalo and head to Kazdek first, so he asked everyone to just be patient since he didn't know how long they'd be gone. Suddenly, Diaz realizes he forgot something and tells everyone to hold on, but then one of the girls gets super hyped and says she's heading out right now, making Diaz ask if she's... Klaus spent 5 days hunting black buffaloes but only caught 2, and even though he was failing, he stubbornly refused any help or hunting dogs because he wanted to use Magabi powder to catch them with his own hands. Klaus ditched the Modabi powder and the dog tribe's help to hunt solo, wandering the massive plains and taking on black buffaloes with nothing but his own raw power. Candace was happy Klaus gave her parents a gift, but she was still low-key stressing over his moves, while the guy next to her realized Klaus pulled it off alone without any help, and seeing her act weird, he finally asked her what was up. Canis was low-key flattered by Klaus, but she was mostly terrified by how reckless he was being. So she decided that if he wouldn't listen, she'd use a special move meant for stubborn guys to finally show him where he messed up. The girl next to her remembered her mom saying this trick actually works, and that she'd even used it herself once. Aruna was worried, but seeing how stressed he was, she told him it was no big deal while secretly deciding she'd use her special technique to protect him if things got crazy. The guy admits he's actually terrified of that move Aruna mentioned and begs her to keep it tucked away, saying that if she ever slaps him, he'll just trust he deserved it. Aruna asked Diaz if he'd picked out a gift for Klaus and Canis since the girls were throwing a huge feast, And even though Diaz was totally clueless about what to give, Aruna told him to chill because she already had something ready for the big ceremony. Diaz realized he needed a killer gift or he was going to look like a total joke. After that talk with Canis, Klaus did a total 180 and finally stopped turning down help from everyone else. Canis teamed up with the dog tribe and started using Matabi powder, which totally leveled up his hunting game. They totally crushed it and caught all the black buffaloes they needed in just 3 days. Since things were finally going great, they decided to head over to Canis's parents. But our hero was totally freaking out because he didn't have the gift ready, so he ditched the beads to search for anything else, and just as time was running out, he remembered he still had to learn a lesson from hunting that black buffalo. He knew if he didn't finish in 3 days, Aruna would still throw that massive feast, so with zero time to talk to her, he rushed to the Oni leader Moru for our hero realized he was totally stuck and had to go find more. He remembered how she always gave him the best tips, so she was the first person he thought of. Back when Moro admitted he was totally blowing her mind and promised to give him some tips if she could help. His mom told him to get some high-quality wool bedding for the wedding, since it'd be super useful now that the two of them are finally living together. He was a bit confused about how Bedlin fit into the newlyweds' private life, but he quickly caught on and realized it was actually a genius gift idea. Moro was totally caught off guard by the hero and Aruna's relationship since he's usually so quiet. But she suggested some bed sheets as a gift, and after thanking her, the hero admitted he's already dreaming of the day Aruna is holding their baby. Moru offers him some special embroidered bedding meant to bless a couple with a baby, and the hero takes the gift, thinking the patterned pillow looks super stylish. The hero asked what the plants were, and he found out they were actually special herbs meant to help someone get pregnant. A few days later, the builders showed up with supplies from the capital, and in just 3 days they had a furnace and a kitchen totally finished. Since they had extra hands, they even knocked out a bathroom and a barn for the geese, getting the whole place ready in no time. The job was finally finished, and the hero was super hyped with how perfect everything turned out. To show his thanks, he handed out 10 gold coins to every single worker. He was actually pretty. Klaus and his squad loaded up the van and finally made it back home, where all the kids and adults were super hyped and relieved to see them. While the group stops to warm up, an old man thanks the kid for the tea and for looking after him, but the girl just says their foster parents raised them to never leave an old person hanging. She finally admitted she's dying to see her dad right away, and it totally sounds like she's saying Diaz is the guy. Diaz nervously asked Irina if his new outfit looked weird, but she just smiled and told him he looked great while fixing his clothes, and with everyone finally ready, the big ceremony officially kicked off. It's finally wedding day for Klaus and Kins, and as they stand side by side, Klaus looks super nervous while Kins is just chilling with her arms crossed and a cute blush. This guy announced he was running the whole ceremony, and even though it was mostly a standard kingdom wedding, Klaus asked to mix in some dog people customs, and Canis was totally down since he wanted to include stuff from his own village too. The host explained that since nobody can survive on their own, humans created families so they could finally learn to love someone besides themselves. He remembered being raised to never make a mistake, with those holy words still stuck in his head as the priest explained why Saint Dio's blessing is a must-have for the wedding and hyped up. Diaz thought about all the times he'd given speeches, like praying for soldiers on the battlefield or blessing people at weddings and births. He realized Klaus must have really been listening to him since Klaus, the priest, laid it out straight for everyone. Love your neighbors, respect yourself, and just enjoy life without hurting others, stealing land, or judging people for where they come from, because even if people forget these basics, they're still the most important rules to live by. The priest tells the crowd the epic story of Saint Dia, a guy who learned the world's secrets in the Holy Land and helped the first king become a total legend. After the kingdom was done, the guy welcomed everyone to a fresh start and told them it was time to party, sing, and dance. Everyone cheered and started hugging each other, totally hyped for the celebration. Then, plates. The hosts shouted that the food was finally ready and told everyone to dig in. So the villagers and even the animals dove right in to kick off the massive celebration. The guests sat down at tables loaded with food, and while one guy was trying to decide what to grab, he noticed the bread was packed with nuts and saw Senya and Ekon totally. He told them the nut bread was actually fire, and the girls were so hyped they started jumping for joy until he told them to settle down and be polite, making them chill out and listen. He's standing with the girls by a table stacked with food, and everyone's hyped to finally dig in. The girls are laughing and trading looks. Then someone decides it's time to. The dog people hyped up the groom by tossing him into the air and counting out loud. which is actually a wild ritual to welcome him to the village. It's their way of letting everyone know he's officially married, and rumor has it this tradition keeps the couple from cheating or running into any relationship drama. Right at the wedding, a pack of stray dogs suddenly launches the groom into the air and starts hugging him to banish jealousy and call out everyone who's still single. Narodets was laughing his head off while the puppies swarmed him with hugs, and the whole crew just watched with big smiles, totally loving how happy he looked. The guy thanked the whole crowd and promised he and Canis would build a super happy family in the village, while the girl vowed she'd do whatever it takes to make sure she and Klaus found their happy ending. The whole village started cheering for the newlyweds. Even the animals joined the party, and the couple shared a look that showed they were totally hyped and ready for anything. The whole village threw a massive party where the older ladies clapped to the beat, the girls sang together, and the beast children had a blast dance. Aruna walks right up to Diaz and asks him to dance. And even though he's super awkward and says he's a bad dancer, she tells him her tribe doesn't have any fancy rules, and they'll totally be fine winging it together. Diaz and Aruna start slow dancing, and she leans her head right on his chest while he holds her hand and waist. He looks around and is shocked to see everyone else dancing to the beat, while the girl leans right into him, closing her eyes with a peaceful smile like she totally trusts him. As the party vibes finally started to fade, Diaz realized it was getting super late and grabbed his stuff to head out after such a wild day. Diaz grabbed everyone's attention to hand out necklaces as a reward for the fight, telling them to stay calm since there were plenty for everyone, and while Klaus and the others suggested waiting for the ceremony, Diaz explained he'd been trying to do this since the battle ended, but just couldn't find a moment because everyone was so busy. The creatures were totally obsessed with the necklaces Diaz gave them, bragging that they got them straight from him. The old lady was super touched, the animal-eared girls were all smiles, and the little girl with glasses was so shocked she got one too, thanking him with everything she had. Diaz hands her a necklace to prove she really belongs in this land, and she's totally shocked that it's actually for her. Right after, Sini and Ihan show up. One hero thanked them and was totally shocked to get rare halite, making another hero wonder if it was actually found nearby. But then Diaz remembered his own gift and lugged over a huge pile of bedlanon for them to take. Diaz handed out some totally weird underwear that shocked everyone. But one hero actually loved the gift and said he didn't even know how to thank him. The older lady gives Diaz props for his great taste, while another explains that the patterns on the blankets are actually special prayers for a safe birth and a healthy baby. So Diaz grabs the gear and heads back to the yurt. The elders told the younger crowd to handle the rest of the questions and sent everyone home. But after a long talk about bedlanon, one guy decided he wasn't going to rush to finish everything before the sun went down. The ceremony wrapped up way faster than anyone expected, and even the guy in charge was shocked by how quick it went, but then he got dragged into doing more work even though he totally wasn't. Deep in the woods, a pack of beast men tell their leader Hugo they found some tracks, and while one guy wants to just raid the cart, Hugo knows it's heading to a... Hugus stood in the middle of the cave with his crew and yelled that the strong deserve to rule the weak, while his followers cheered him on, totally sure their leader would wreck anyone who tried to stop them. As the cart rolls down the road, the kids start stressing that they're lost, but someone promises they're on the right track while a nearby beast locks eyes on them, ready to throw down if they turn out to be bandits. Spring is officially over and summer is here, but our hero's life has totally flipped. He's actually gotten used to the daily grind of chores now. He spends all his time. Our hero realized Francois is going to be a mom soon, so she's basically glued to her yurt, and he finally sees she's not a bad person. She just really loves to slack off. Arune thought Mimu was acting totally out of character, but Francis didn't buy it and headed to the meadow every day to bring back the softest grass for Surpassed. Our hero finally realized he wanted to be close to Francois, so after finishing his training and chores, he tried to spend time with her until someone suddenly called out and totally ruined the moment. Word got out that some guests just arrived with a bunch of meme sheep, and the villagers were quick to explain they weren't bandits but peaceful visitors with 6 memes. So Fransu decided. Franz reminds him that since the guests have 6 memos, the Lord has to meet them himself. She says anyone who treats those memos right deserves respect, and another guy totally backs her up. When Diaz couldn't believe his eyes when he saw his old crew all grown up and calling him family, and after a happy reunion, he found out the rest of the gang was doing awesome. Some were running their own shops while others had already settled down and got married. Ellie spots Diaz and sprints over yelling, "Dad!" But Diaz is so out of it he calls her Erica, forcing her to correct him while someone nearby nervously asks if he's actually okay. Eric said he was all good and thanked him, making Diaz think kids are super sweet. even though Eric looked totally terrifying. Suddenly, Uncle Ben pops up and totally shocks DS, who thought he was dead. But Ben just gets mad that DS is still a total blockhead after all this time. Aruna was totally blown away to see DS had kids, admitting he had absolutely no idea they even existed or when it happened. Right then, she shocks everyone by claiming she's his wife, and when someone argues she's too young and it's against the law, she just snaps back that she couldn't care less about the royal rules. The girls apologized for being so rude, but just as the man started telling Aruni about the kids, a massive surge of energy cut him off, and someone yelled out to see who was there. Hughes and his crew tried to sneak in but got spotted, so he started venting about how sick he was of the killing and told those greedy guys to just give up. Hugo tried to talk to the guys he was fighting, but they had already vanished into thin air. The travelers explained they used stealth magic to stay hidden and warned everyone to get out fast, while one of the girls revealed that Hugo C was actually a traitor knight who went into hiding after his own squad almost killed him. One of the girls says she's got a plan, but the henchmen report that the coast is clear and they should probably bail, which makes Hugo super annoyed as he complains about being a... Diaz drops his name and offers a crazy deal. If he loses, he'll serve Ugo, but if he wins, the whole gang has to surrender. Ugo is shocked to see who he's actually facing and starts thinking it over while his crew screams that it's a total trap. Diaz mocked Hughes, telling him to ditch the sword and fight fair unless he was scared. So Hughes threw his weapon down and barked that he'd show everyone who's really in charge. Diaz dared Hugo to drop his sword and fight fair so he wouldn't look like a coward, and Hugo just smirked, threw the weapon away, and said he'd show him who really runs the show. Hughes totally lost it and started swinging like crazy, but Diaz stayed focused, dodged the flurry, and landed a massive counter that left Hughes wondering what the heck just happened. Mid-fight, Hughes is totally out of breath and can't believe a beast like Diaz is just chilling in the middle of nowhere, acting like some random lord. Diaz just stays cool. Diaz digs deep for his last bit of energy and starts unloading massive hits, pushing himself to the limit to prove he's got the heart and the rage to win this fight. He squeezed his fist tight and refused to back down, raining down blows with everything he had because he knew that only pure guts would get him the win. As soon as the hero showed off his insane power, the bad guys were completely frozen. One guy even admitted he's the real deal before the rest scrambled away in fear. Back home, his family was losing it with joy. One girl shouted that she got goosebumps seeing him save them, while another bragged that her husband is just built different like that. The girls decided to stop fighting over Diaz, and everyone was totally on board. When one girl asks to see her mom, they explain they're all orphans who call their foster parents dad to show love, and even though things are getting dangerous, they swear they won't. One of the girls shouted that Diaz would have totally won if the fight was just a test of raw strength. Even though Diaz was an orphan, he worked his tail off and lived life to the max, making everyone totally look up to him. People said he was basically the most loved guy around, and before long, word on the street is that Diaz took in all those orphans and built a guild where they look out for each other while learning how to read, write, and make an honest living. She said that thanks to Diaz, the orphans finally chilled out, the town started respecting them, and they even landed solid jobs to turn their lives around. He said Diaz started as his leader, then became his big brother, and finally a dad who turned them all into a real family. Diaz then brought up a guy she calls Uncle Ben, a temple priest who was actually her brother's father and taught her everything growing up. He totally vanished one day, and even though her parents swear he's dead, she's positive he's still out there somewhere. The girls were super curious, asking what Diaz's parents were like and if he looked just like them. Someone tried to say Diaz's parents were super nice and just did chores at a temple, but Uncle Ben shut that talk down fast, telling them to stop lying to the kids because his parents were actually the powerful chief priests. Everyone was totally shocked to find out Diaz's parents were the temple's head priests, and when they begged for the full story, he was down to tell them everything. He explained that Saint Dia once refused to bow to the king and built his own temple to teach the people. And since the first king actually respected his vision, the saint left behind his knowledge and holy relics so everyone could rebuild the country and bring peace back to the land. He said that after Saint D died, they built temples where priests taught God's rules, but the whole thing was a total mystery and nobody even knew what God looked like. He says massive temples were built in the capital and in every direction. And since Diaz's parents were the head priests of the Western one, they were basically top-tier elites. But everyone is totally shocked, complaining that the Great Temple is just a hangout for randoms now. And they even admit this temple drama has been a huge mess since way before the narrator was even. Our heroes remembered how the priests totally split into two groups over the old and new ways. Their dads and uncles stuck with the old ways, but the new side was just way more powerful. After the guy was totally losing it after finding out the MC had been eating people all day. So he started digging for info on the first family and tracked down the high priest's only son. He was totally ready to chew the hero out, but after seeing his chill life and happy family, he realized the guy was actually winning at life. The guy says if this is all for real, their ancestors can finally chill in peace. Then he tells her to look after her husband because the dude is definitely going to be a handful, asks her to just call him uncle, and she says she's honestly just honored to be his wife. This lady starts screaming that he was supposed to marry Ellie 20 years ago, reminding him of a childhood promise to give her a ring, while a super confused Diaz gets snapped at by the girl next to him who reveals she's actually Ellie. Ellie screams at him for being a total traitor, but he awkwardly tries to explain that he always wanted to buy her a ring once he got the cash, and while the guys argue over, the girl excitedly tells her dad that the new girls are officially sisters, and his wife is super sweet. But the new girls are totally confused and keep asking if they're really the big sisters now, all while someone else is screaming in the background for attention. Meanwhile, the village was buzzing as soldiers worked hard for the elder, logging every new building and person moving into town. A month after that epic showdown with Diana in the capital, things are finally settling down, but an official noticed some weird new groups popping up. It turns out Prince Misa is way more into stacking cash than rebuilding his squad. And while the other factions look quiet, there's some shady business going on that means everyone needs to stay on high alert. Back at the capital, they're deciding Diana's fate. And since she isn't even sorry, she's being shipped off to the temple while the guy in charge explains he's only backing Prince Richard because of his fame and ties to Diaz, even though he had his doubts at first. Richard was actually way more chill and well-behaved than anyone thought, and the guy was totally sure the other dude would take care of the mice. Back at the capital, an advisor drops a bombshell that Prince Misa might be secretly working with the Empire, and even though they don't have hard proof yet, it's looking. After 5 days in Elok, a local girl tells Isa and the gang they look amazing in their royal gear, but the girls admit that even though the outfits are fancy, everyone was totally vibing in the village. Aruna and Eric were getting along great, and one broad-shouldered woman realized dresses just weren't her style, making her super jealous of how. One woman starts screaming that she'll never accept this girl as her dad's bride because she's way too young and immature, but the girl stays totally chill, admitting she's inexperienced while promising her love for Diaz is the real deal, leaving the woman wondering if her insults even hurt the girl's feelings. She told her she totally understood and didn't blame her at all, saying they both just love Diaz and need to stick together, which left her stunned by the kindness. Now they're basically. Ire told his brother they were heading back to the city since everything seemed totally safe, and he even hooked him up with some cool gifts. Her brother totally got it and said their choice made perfect sense. Everyone has their own lives and jobs to get back to, so heading to the city was the right move. He told them any parent. Diaz tells Eri he's finally a man, but warns him that if he ditches his duties to stay here, he'll beat him half to death. Eri admits he's way too old for that, but his brother reminds him that no matter how many years go by, he'll always be their dad, ready to scold them and look out for them forever. Diaz knew he couldn't love Eric back that way. If he gave in, he wouldn't be a father to him anymore. He realized all the other kids needed him too, so Eric screamed for his dad, sprinted over and just started sobbing. His dad pulled him into a massive hug. He remembered the village elders saying that kind people like Eric always attract good vibes and happiness. 2 more girls were begging for head pats, and another girl rushed over to see what all the noise was about, but the guy just hugged them and told everyone to stop pushing and wait their turn. An old man watching the whole scene asked if they were saying their goodbyes to Diaz, reminding them they'd be back in the city the day after tomorrow anyway. The girls were freaking out that everyone was leaving, but the guy told them to chill because he and Maya were staying, and the old man promised they'd all meet again so they shouldn't cry. He told everyone he was staying in the village for good to raise sheep and keep that guy from acting like a total idiot, since he thought their whole journey was a waste of time and had zero plans to ever go back to the temple, even when someone asked if Uncle Ben was really done with that place forever. One of the women decided she was staying in the village too, explaining that since she'd already given away everything in her shop, she had absolutely nothing to go back to. She realized the village. He was really hoping the village would start popping with new neighbors, but then he spotted 6 sheep-looking creatures and wondered what they were even doing there. Everyone remembered how they were living their best lives until the kingdom's army dragged them away to a total nightmare. But when Mia found out they were scheduled to be executed, they made a run. They still hadn't settled on a leader, and one guy even admitted he had no clue Francis was the one who was actually supposed to take charge. The crew noticed a new guy leading the pack and had to pick which of the two candidates would run the village. But since the rules were super strict, they couldn't just give each group their own leader and had to follow the village's old-school traditions instead. Trial between Tumia, which was to determine the new leader. It's a bit ambiguous if Tumia is the person or the place. Usually, in these recaps, it's one guy watching thought it sounded like a crazy powerful song as Mia and the others faced off, shouting these bold sounds that felt like they were building to something big. And he realized they were actually singing about the herd's future to show off their plans, which is exactly how Mia picks her new leader. The observer realized the Mayas were singing to show the whole herd how much they cared about their future, proving that picking a leader wasn't about who had the prettiest voice, but about how much heart and soul each Mia put into their song so the group could feel which candidate was actually ready to lead. Watching the scene, he wondered how to pick a leader that the whole crowd would actually respect and start following. He was shocked that Francois didn't just blindly back her husband Francis, but he soon realized she knew that being a good husband and being a strong leader are two totally different things. So she was looking for a real boss who could protect their kids' future and help her husband survive their tough life in the flock. And as the herd sang, the crowd realized just how intense things were getting. And someone even pointed out that picking the right leader would change their whole future forever. The sheep kept singing even though they were totally exhausted and the sun was going down. But while Francois and the group still couldn't pick a leader, some of the sheep were so tired they just went completely silent. Right by the ram with the huge horns, one guy starts walking forward, and everyone sees Francois finally jump into the action to join the group. Francis starts blasting this epic choir music, and everyone watching realized things weren't going to change anytime soon. They figured it'd be super awkward if his wife suddenly jumped in to help him. Everyone was staring, totally hooked on the action. It was obvious the ram wasn't backing down yet. Even when no one could hear him over the noise, he gave it his absolute all. Everyone noticed the choir went quiet as all eyes landed right on Francis. He realized right then that the whole group was actually singing just for him. The girls watching were hyped because they knew this. The crowd went totally wild, chanting Francis's name and calling him their leader while they celebrated his massive win. Everyone was blown away because they'd never seen sheep act that smart. And as one girl noticed he'd pulled it off, Francis just stepped back with a smirk, watching his plan finally pay off. Once the chaos settled and the sheep were all back together, the heroes realized someone was missing. And just as the horned girl started looking for that big fat ram Maya, he suddenly broke away from the rest. Diaz thought the sheep were total legends for singing with their rival after such a crazy fight, while Francis noticed the ram never gave up and didn't even hold a grudge against his friends. He actually really liked how the meet was set up, and even though he lost, he wasn't even mad at his friends for not picking him since they were probably just rookies, so Francis decided to name his sheep and thought Azim or Tanmaz would be perfect for his ram. Diaz thought the name Zerbalto sounded epic, and since the ram seemed to love it, he officially gave him the name while the girls cheered and one even said she loved her dad for being so cool. The sheep are all cheering as the man finally rejoins the group, and when his daughter asks where he's been, he just casually says he was in the bathroom, but Aruna gets, after the party for Francis's big win, everyone headed over to the open field right by the massive tent. Right in the middle of the party, our guy tries to name the rest of the sheep, but he's shocked to find out they're actually all girls and Zerbalt's wives. The wives were totally stressed that Francis becoming the boss would ruin their marriages, but they quickly realized he was actually a way better guy than Zerbalt and started respecting how real he was, hoping his big win would totally flip their lives around as they watched him sing and wondered what was actually going on in his head. Believe it or not, they actually had 8 lovers now, and Francis was stepping up as their new leader. Eldon just got back from the capital and was heading to Lord Kazdik's estate when he ran into this guy named Yuha, who had a huge smirk and bragged about being the strongest, most handsome, and most elite soldier in the whole kingdom. Eldon didn't trust this guy claiming to be Diaz's ally at all, and Yuha acting like a fake hero during the questioning was even more suspicious, especially since Eldon just found Yuha claims he's a secret hero who fought right next to Diaz. So Eldon agrees to meet him, but when he's asked about his past, Yuha claimed he worked with Diaz, but they always fought over girls and drinks. Though Eldon suspected it was all an act for a secret goal, since Yuha only stopped being lazy once he saw how rich the city looked. Yuha knew building a playground in the city was insanely expensive, but seeing it happen changed everything for the town's growth. And since he believes culture starts with kids playing, he decided to join Eldon's side for good. Yuha knew he'd be ignored if he just walked up, so he used a sneaky trick to meet Eldon and called it a total win, even though Eldon warned him it hit. Yuha grins and brings up how Diaz got him for free to end the war, then asks Eldon what his price tag is, leaving Eldon feeling super awkward since he just paid a massive fee for Yuha's help, even if he's telling himself it's only temporary. It's been a whole week since Ari and Isak packed up and left the village of Ilu. One hero wondered if the guild even got their SOS, but the letter was actually about starting trade, which is a total win, and he remembered his dad saying those bloodless beastmen who randomly lost their wild side were supposed to show up any second. Our hero was busy cooking up his next big move. He was stressed because the kingdom didn't even recognize the bloodless, but they were still trying to trade there. To fix this mess, Nachin was whipping up some soulless goose eggs for dinner, and instead of her usual soup, she's trying them boiled because she heard they taste awesome. He was totally jealous of her power to sense souls inside eggs, especially since it reminded him of the time Aru Natyan used that same magic to find out his soul was actually female. Scene and Khan thought the baby chicks were adorable following their parents, but Diaz got so obsessed that he started chasing them himself, leaving everyone totally confused. He knew he'd totally crash if he didn't take a breather, but he figured if raising chicks is like raising kids, then Diaz is basically a pro dad. Unatin thought it was. Aruna asks Tian how he shows off his manly side, and he tells her the whole story is actually pretty short. Aruna's family was super poor, so as the oldest she had to step up and handle hunting and patrolling, and while she was totally used to the hard work, people actually teased her for. Aruna laughed and said she has zero regrets since this job led her to Diaz, but then someone else asked why their family is still so broke. Aruna says her family was dirt poor because of one guy she calls a total parasite. It's all in the past now, but back then, her family went through absolute hell. She mentioned, Arunus explained how her brother totally wrecked the family's finances by blowing money on girls in debt. But thanks to Diaz, they aren't starving anymore, and the interviewer was just glad she felt safe enough to talk about it. Arunus was super grateful to Diaz and Mora, explaining that the Oni chief Mora is a total sweetheart who set her up with Diaz just to help her out, and she even hooked Diaz up with two rare animals named Francis and Franz. The heroine couldn't bring herself to hate Aruna since they were both orphans, and one of the girls even said Aruna is like a princess waiting for her fated person to suddenly show up and save her. One girl was totally lost in a daydream, picturing him as a hero on a white horse, while another girl just grinned and said her dad was actually super brave. Our girl totally spaced on the eggs because she was talking too much, but the other woman realized she couldn't hate her anymore and showed her how to cook them one last time before the heroine finally lost. During their break, one of the girls noticed dinner was finally served, and while everyone was chilling, Arantan grabbed her bow and headed to the clearing. She told the others to back off because she, Nat Tyan, was totally locked in, hitting the target perfectly every single day after finishing her chores, and she never missed a practice session, which really impressed a woman watching nearby, who then called out, the lady was dying to know why that short bow was so powerful. Aruna explained it was all about the special materials and how they put it together. Honestly, their bows were nothing like the ones from. Aruna breaks down how their bows are made, explaining they use hard bone on the side that squeezes and stretchy animal tendons on the side that pulls, while making the grip and string points super tough. Aruna explains that their bows were perfected over years for horse archery, and since every bow is custom-made for the shooter's size and strength, no two are ever the same. So, she tried to pull the bow back, but it wouldn't even budge, and she yelled that it was way too stiff for anyone to handle. Aruna calmly explains that this bow is actually made from an earth dragon and needs a magic charge to work, which is why Diaz is the only one who can get it ready so fast. She explains that high-rank monsters and dragons have crazy tough armor and muscles powered by magic, and when the other girl hears about the earth dragon, she's totally stunned and can't believe it's real. Aruna explains that you have to flow magic through your body to make the bow flexible, and when you finally let go, all that energy releases with insane power. He was totally blown away and thought it sounded impossible since you have to draw a horse, aim and charge the shot with magic all at once, but she promised that with enough practice, it's actually way easier than it looks. Only 5 days into their training, Celia and Aiken were already sniping birds right out of the sky while riding at full speed. Aruna explains that her tribe is basically born with bows, so she tells Ellie that shooting from horseback is a total game changer. She's hyped about how these kids are already dead accurate by using the wind to guide their arrows, but the talk gets cut short when someone starts yelling for her. Aruna and the others jumped when they heard a strange voice, and while someone shouted about Oni honor, Aruna realized who it was and low-key wished the monsters had eaten him, but the guy just started screaming that he was there to save her and blamed the Lord for getting too close while he was away. The hero remembered Aruna's weird tribe rules where the youngest kid is the boss and the older siblings just help out until they move away. And even though he saw them all getting engaged, he didn't really sweat it because he totally thought there were only 6 people in her family until now. Diaz was just calling the kids back for dinner when a terrified puppy ran up to warn him that Aruna was already attacking some weird horned guy who had appeared out of nowhere. Diaz saw the chaos and panicked, asking what was going on. So Billy told him a stranger showed up who was likely Aruna's brother, all while Aruna was busy beating him up despite his excuses. He was totally blindsided when Aruna's older brother showed up because he didn't even know the guy existed, which shocked Eri since she thought he'd at least heard of. Aruna's brother was practically begging her to listen, and Diaz warned her that she really didn't want Sonny and Ikon catching her looking like a total wreck. Aruna was totally terrified, so 2 girls came over to see what was going on. Diaz knew that even hearing certain names was way too painful for her right now. Shaking all over, Aruna's brother is totally losing it, screaming that Diaz corrupted his sweet sister and turned her into a monster. But Diaz is just confused about the sweet part while realizing the 2 siblings look so much alike that Aruna would be his twin if she were a guy. Diaz could tell things were totally awkward between Aruna and her brother Zorg because even though Zorg really loved her, she looked down on him for not being manly enough. But Zorg finally makes it back home only to find out Aruna married some old lord, and he's so convinced his family sold her off for cash that he loses his mind and storms out to go rescue her without listening to a single word. Zorg tried to get through to Aruna, but he totally blew it when she snapped at him, leaving him stuck in a mess he didn't see coming while the crowd started staring, and that watching woman looked completely stunned. She asks Zorg if he's jealous of her dad, but he shuts her down saying he's just shocked Aruna has a boyfriend since he wanted her for himself, and then Zorg hangs his head and tells Aruna he's sorry for everything. But she shuts him down, saying it's way too late since he ignored his family and even the chief when they begged him to stop. Zorg immediately tried to talk his way out of it. He claimed the girl said she was sick and promised to pay him back later. He couldn't figure out why her soul rating was showing up. He couldn't believe a bad guy got a blue rating instead of red. But Aruna explained that since it's just magic, it's actually pretty easy to trick. She warns that certain spells can totally rig the test, and if someone is stronger than the person checking them, they can easily fake their power level or mess up the results. The crew reveals that Asa is a total magic pro who can't be brainwashed, unlike her brother who got completely played by a magic expert, proving you have to be careful since people can literally... Zord realized he was totally wrong about that corrupt lord, but he was so stunned he couldn't even find the words to apologize. After that, he and Arna went completely silent, and she even made sure the whole case was officially closed. She just told him they needed to grab dinner before the sun went down, deciding right then and there to never stress about the sky ever again. The group told him it was getting super late and he should just crash there, but he insisted he was a pro at night travel and they shouldn't sweat it. Then they warned him about the Yi. Everyone was super stressed, but the next morning as they headed out, one guy saw the nice weather and decided to bring Zort along just to be safe. Zort was totally annoyed and told everyone to leave him alone since he didn't get why they were so obsessed with him, but his friend just smiled and said he had to look out. Zord looks at the package and notices the bow was tied specifically for his body. And even though Aruna said she was going to trash the prototype, the way it's wrapped in nice fabric shows she put a ton of heart into it and definitely still sees him as her brother. Zort just waved his hand to drop the whole thing, but then he noticed Diaz looking super weird and asked why he was turning blue, making the other guy realize that since Diaz was born without, Diaz admitted he's always been like this, and Zort was totally baffled, asking if he didn't feel like a total loser. Diaz started thinking back to when he was just a kid. He remembered how all the other kids were out there having fun and getting better at magic, while he couldn't even cast a single spell. Diaz took a long look at his life and decided to stop being jealous of everyone else. He realized it was a waste of time to want things he couldn't have, so he put, Zord felt like a total loser because everyone hated him for things he couldn't help, and he was sure they were all laughing behind his back. But since A.R. Yuna, 5 massive wind dragons suddenly filled the sky, leaving the heroes totally stunned. One guy was freaking out because he could barely handle one of these monsters, let alone 5, and he felt like the universe was... One hero warns that wind dragons go straight for the eyes and ears to blind their prey, and since they're too light for a one-hit kill, they just slowly wear you out until, The heroes realized their weapon was totally useless and were shocked by its power, especially after learning the bow was made from an earth dragon and needed special arrows, but one guy just decided to deal with that whole mess later. One hero lands a perfect shot that goes right through the guy, and he excitedly tells his buddy that he just took one of them down. As soon as one of them got wrecked, the rest started moving way faster, and the hero realized they were finally getting serious. One of the giant bugs suddenly zooms straight at him, so he locks in and gets ready to fight the second he sees it coming. The heroes realized the enemies were getting way faster, but Tens and Collected managed to block a nasty hit from a dragonfly monster just as everyone realized Windia Ragnan's big attack was finally starting. His chest got ripped wide open, and while he's reeling from the pain, these freaky bug-looking monsters suddenly appear in the sky and start zooming straight for him. The guy starts freaking out because Aruna made those clothes just for him, but suddenly monsters fill the sky and someone tries to speak but freezes as a massive horned beast dives straight toward them. Even after a massive hit that literally shook the earth, our hero didn't have a single scratch on him, and he realized his eyes were already tracking the enemy's speed perfectly. One guy freaks out and yells for his buddy to run, but our MC stays totally chill, admits the monster is actually kind of strong, and then completely wrecks that giant bug to show off his insane power. The crew wondered why the dragonflies suddenly backed off, with one guy saying they'd be in deep trouble if the swarm kept coming, while another figured the bugs were just too scared of getting wrecked. But then the first hero pointed out that since these things are dragons, they could just stay in the air and roast everyone with fire. The squad was confused why the dragons weren't sniping them with fire, but it turns out their flames are trash at long range, and since the smell of blood is keeping them hooked, they know. The squad was stuck trying to figure out how to hit those flying enemies that wouldn't land, and while one guy felt bad for slacking and promised to step up, another suggested just chucking a battle axe at the dragon. The others thought it was a total long shot, but he insisted it would at least keep the monsters distracted. "Just trust me," one hero shouts before grabbing his battle axe and charging ahead, leaving his friend stunned as he hurls the weapon high into the sky to snipe those flying monsters. One warrior lets out a huge roar and hurls his battle axe straight into the clouds at the enemy, leaving his buddy totally stunned by how high that thing actually flew. He launched that axe perfectly into the sky and nailed a flying target, leaving the crowd totally hyped, while one guy just stood there in shock calling him a lucky idiot because he couldn't believe he actually pulled it off. Suddenly, giant flying bugs swarmed the heroes from every direction, and as someone shouted a warning, the whole team geared up for a fight while one warrior charged straight at them with his eyes wide and full. Diaz goes absolutely wild on the bug, crushing it with a massive hit that shows off his insane strength. He's totally locked in and won't let anything stop him. Right then, another hero. One fighter was in huge trouble after a bug snatched him up and stung him, but his partner stayed totally calm and saved him with one perfect strike. Most people are lucky to see one wind dragon a year, but they just found 5 at once. And after saving his friend, he knew he was finally becoming a real hunter who would change everyone. He couldn't wrap his head around this messy situation since dragon hunting was supposed to be way more professional. So when his partner started tossing the bodies around like trash, he totally snapped and told him to be careful with their expensive loot, leaving DS wondering why he was acting so crazy. He admits Aruna made him the man he is today, and since she does all his chores, he's too grateful to ever talk back, but his friend points out that's one guy thinks everything about Diaz is super sus, but then Arna rushes in panicking over his injury, and while Diaz says his ruined clothes don't matter, the others tell him he needs eye. Aruna bragged that she knew her husband was a total beast, and that taking down those wind dragons was totally worth the cost, while another guy hyped himself up by telling her he used her bow and arrows to take one out too. Aruna thanked him for the delivery and said half the loot was his since they both took down those dragons. But when her brother spoke up, she got annoyed and snapped at him to see. Diaz tells Ironus to go easy on Zorg since he's just desperate for someone to notice his courage. But she thinks if he actually cared about his family, he'd go. Even though Zort's wind dragon was way weaker than the green one, he still jumped into the fight. And between his crazy bravery and those expensive boots he brought, Aruna was secretly super impressed, which is probably why she's being so nice to Diaz now. Aruna flashed a grin and called for a party. And soon the whole village was vibing around the fire with music playing and everyone ready to celebrate. The whole village was having a total blast at the festival. Diaz could see that everyone was just vibing and having the best time. Like always, Aruna was the life of the party, getting the... Diaz realized the party was about way more than just beating the dragon, and Aruna gave him a warm smile because she felt it too. But then he stood up and told everyone he was just heading to the bath. Diaz spotted a lone sheep and was totally confused since Francis and Francois were supposed to be at the party, so he asked if it was lost or moving in. But he was suspicious because he'd never seen this sheep before. Diaz tried to figure out what the sheep was saying, but he had to admit his Ba language was pretty trash. He suggested they head to the town square so everyone could hear her out. Diaz was completely shook when the sheep actually started talking. And before he could even process it, the sheep just walked up and handed him a small bag, leaving him totally confused and whispering about what the heck it was. The ram tells Diaz he's a total beast for taking down that human-form dragon twice, explaining he's just following his master's orders by giving him 3 Sanjivani. DS was feeling super dizzy and couldn't stop thinking about that word Sanjivani. But then A.R. Una showed up and asked if he was okay or just hungry since he was nowhere near the bathroom. He tried to explain he'd been talking to Aram, but she just figured he was totally wiped out from fighting those wind dragons and told him he needed to go crash for the day. Diaz was totally tripping and thought he was just dreaming, but the second he gripped that bag, he realized this was 100% real. The big shots met up to figure out how to rebuild the empire, but they were totally stuck until someone suggested a risky plan that could seriously backfire on Diaz. Una checks in on Diaz, who admits he's been feeling totally wiped out since that wild fight with the wind dragons. So she orders him to just relax for the day. Diaz tries to argue. During the meeting, they plotted to take Diaz out by using his own haters, especially Mace's angry crew. But the plan was to kill the assassins afterward so nobody would ever know the truth. The officers were arguing about how to handle Diaz when one reminded the general that Diaz was his father's rival. But the general admitted that since Diaz was their boss, he didn't think anyone would. One guy shouts that his dad was totally broken by Diaz's strategy and almost gave up on life after being forced to use dirty traps. But the general reminds him that Diaz actually saved his father's neck even after he almost ruined the whole plan. The squad finally reaches the lake and someone starts hyping up how gorgeous it looks. But Diaz realizes that even if the changing water levels make it a bad spot to live, it's still a witness remembers how Diaz fought his dad totally fair, charging straight in with everything he had. And even though his dad died in that final clash, he kept his dignity, while Diaz looked like a true, loyal friend. Diaz told them Arun gave him a day off to just chill, so he let the group take the crazy steep route, leaving everyone shocked and wondering if he was actually okay while they noticed how freezing the water was. The group is stressing over the kingdom falling apart, noting that Princess Isabel is the only one actually making moves. They're ready to wipe out the Mace faction if they get in Diaz's way. The girls were screaming with excitement as they and their dogs dove straight into the water. The guys are basically telling Maisie to stop wasting time and just take the throne. But while some are whining about the budget and others say it's all under control, there's a way. The squad was finally having a chill day, with one guy fishing while a girl watched, another dude feeding a dog nearby, and some sheep just vibing by the water. One guy is totally fuming because he's not getting paid enough for his help in the war, so he's planning to take down Kadesk for being disrespectful. Another guy says, Richard noticed the Empire and Mace making secret moves while Asnari Yisak kept busy, which totally shocked his companion who realized Mace was likely in on it too. Richard warned that the stuff you don't see is what really matters, explaining that they won't just lose instantly, but they'll never actually win if they stay stuck with the West while the Empire keeps getting strong. One girl cheered because she finally finished a Runahorn. Her friend totally agreed it felt the same, and another girl just chilled in the cold water after diving through the sand to cool off in the evening breeze. One guy warns that it's not over yet, and when another is told he has to watch over the miners and help them out, he starts stressing about how much work he's doing. This guy is totally hyped because he just snagged a massive fish, and while the girl is cheering Klaus on to do even better, another dude is just standing there watching them and thinking, he said they're heading to Diacedon at the crack of dawn and to get everything ready. But the old man told Eldon and Sama to take it slow since they just finished resting up. One guy asks if anyone caught a fish, but Uncle Ben just laughs and calls him a total fool. Then another man explains he's pulling the hook way too early and needs to wait. One guy is super hyped to get to Damacedono village right now, but the second guy is stuck with way too much work to go even though he wants to, and the third guy just doesn't. He's freaking out about how bad his master is doing. It's killing him that he's totally helpless and has to just sit there while his master suffers. Then he remembers, when dinner was ready, the girl called everyone over and said the food would help Diaz get his strength back, while the kids asked if he caught any fish, and the others wondered if that weird leaf he found was actually super valuable. Our hero walks into the tent totally expecting another boring lecture, But the chief actually admits he's changed his mind because taking down those 3 wind dragons was such a legendary move, so he hands over a special gift as a huge thank you. Diaz takes a bite of the berries and says they taste totally bland, asking if they're from the Mori tree, but the girl is shocked because she picked them herself. Then an elf explains that Diaz is so insanely strong that his body barely reacts to anything. So he's got to let them know if he starts feeling even a little bit weird. He hands over a dagger covered in rings, explaining it's basically a pass to become the next chief. But since they're totally broke, he's stuck in 3rd place as just a candidate for now. She reminds him that they're family and don't need to apologize. And even though he's caught off guard, he totally agrees and thanks her for being right. The chief tells him there's zero shame in taking out 3 dragons, since it just proves he's strong and brave enough to become an awesome leader. The young fighter balled up his fist and yelled that this is just the chief's true nature, while the leader just stood there looking totally chill. The rest of the group was totally hyped about what just happened and started chatting about heading home since the sun was already setting. When they asked Diaz if he got some rest, he just smiled and said it's been ages since he actually relaxed, thanked them, and promised to get back to the grind tomorrow. Suddenly, Diaz just drops cold and everyone around him is totally freaking out. Diaz finally wakes up in bed after passing out, finding a super worried Arna and the kids waiting for him. Arna is so relieved he's awake, explaining that he had a crazy... Diaz got messed up pretty bad during a fight with some wind dragons. It looks like a nasty infection is what's actually killing him. Some poison probably got into his blood from a plant or a... Aru is totally crushed by guilt, admitting she completely missed how bad he was doing before sending him on that long mission, and now she's taking all the blame. The woman tried to stop the girl from blaming herself, explaining that if he'd collapsed at work it would have been way worse. But since they caught it early, he's actually okay. And now she's tearfully begging the girl to finally get some sleep after she stayed up all night taking care of him. 2 girls brought some medicine to the sick guy, and even though he felt way too weak to even take a sip, he saw how hard they were trying and pushed himself to thank them and drink the potion. The guy couldn't believe how good the drink tasted. It was super sweet and refreshing, making it easy to chug even though he was totally wiped out. Most medicine smells gross, and Diaz felt his eyes getting heavy as the medicine finally kicked in, and even though he tried to stay quiet for the girls, he just couldn't fight the exhaustion anymore. They whispered good night. When Diaz woke up, he felt surprisingly great because his fever was totally gone and he actually felt stronger than usual. His wound wasn't fully closed yet, but it looked like it was healing fast. Vina told Diaz to stop stressing her out and joked that he's only bouncing back so fast because he's built different, asking if he took some secret medicine. But Diaz said he hadn't eaten a thing and was actually shocked by how fast his wound was closing up. The squad is wondering how Diaz healed so fast until they realize Senojan Azian gave him a potion, and someone feels like a total fail for not checking what he was given. News just hit that Duke Kazadex is arriving soon, but since Diaz is actually feeling way better, someone sprinted to tell the worried villagers that their leader is totally fine. Runa was still stressing over Diaz and told him to speak up if he felt sick, but as he thanked her, a flashy carriage pulled up and a guy stepped out, apologizing for being late because he was totally swamped with work. Eldon catches up with his old pals and says sorry for dropping in out of nowhere, but they tell him he's welcome anytime. He admits his mom basically forced him into this trip just to see. Eldon explains he's there on official business and needs to stay for a few days to ask Diaz some questions, so Diaz tells him he can stay as long as he wants, letting the group camp out and even promising to provide plenty of food. Eldon asks for one last favor to visit Diaz village, and he says it with so much heart that everyone in the room is left totally stunned. The hero admits he's been dying to see this village forever, and couldn't even sleep until he finally visited, so he takes Eldon for a quick stroll. But when someone shouts a huge thank, one guy explains that nobody has a clue why these crop circles show up, but the villagers eventually just stopped caring and accepted it as part of life, right before we see a peaceful moment of someone petting a cow and enjoying the quiet farm vibes. One guy points out how awesome the animals look with their cute faces and soft fur, and his friend totally agrees they look super healthy and happy as the group keeps wandering around. He spun around in total shock because that horse looked exactly like a royal mare. But even though he was low-key panicking, he kept his mouth shut and told everyone he didn't see anything weird before walking away and deciding to just pretend the whole thing never happened. Diaz notices Sanai and Akan are super worried about the place, and he remembers it used to be a tiny field, but it's grown so much that he has no clue what's why. The animals are all super hyped to be living in the village, so I give them a respectful bow as one of them thanks Eldan, who's just stoked to see everyone having a blast. A guy walks up to tell Diaz that Skylia is finally finished, but right after saying thanks, Diaz gets all dizzy and drops to his knees, telling a worried Aruna he's probably just exhausted since his heart feels totally fine. They kept sipping the drink, and one guy mentioned it tasted just like super strong black tea and was unlike anything he'd ever had, which the elf girls totally confirmed. But just as he thanked them for the mood boost, Diaz and Arunas suddenly stepped in to stop them. Diaz apologized in case the girls gave Eldon something sketchy, but Eldon told him not to worry because he drank it on purpose, knowing his super smell would have caught any. The crew kept talking about that mysterious herb in their drink, and one of them got super hyped, thinking it was the legendary San Giovanni from the time of the gods, but Eldon shut him down, saying it's probably just a normal plant with a similar name since the real one doesn't even exist. He remembered praying for the legendary San Giovanni, even though it was just a myth no one had ever found. But this medicine felt so incredible that it basically became the real thing, and they figured whoever gave it to Diasami could call it that because of the insane feelings it gave him. The girls said they totally had the green light to do it. He could tell they were just trying to look out for him, and they honestly just wanted to make him feel better. While Artius was catching some Z's, the girls asked to use his leaves, so he gave them the green light to brew a healing potion before they all broke it down with Ima and Grandma Maya. Our hero says the girls are totally off the hook since he gave them the green light. He reminds them they promised to only touch those sketchy herbs when Arunas is there to keep things safe. Finally, Diaz knows that even though Sanea and Akin look happy, they're actually hurting from losing their parents to a sickness, so he thanks them for their help and says he's feeling much better now, which earns him a big warm smile from the girl. He pulls the two girls into a tight hug, feeling like a total failure for not being able to save everyone. But he still manages to smile just to find some comfort in their warmth. After all that drama, he was finally happy because those deep bonds with his friends made him feel totally warm inside. He pulled everyone into a big hug, realizing their bond was totally unbreakable and that they were way more than just relatives. They were a real family. The next morning, Eldon is making these super weird noises in bed like something crazy is happening to him. And while a guy nearby wonders if it's from some pills he took, Diaz suddenly feels Eldon is suddenly bursting with energy, and while Kamalat says he's totally fine, everyone else is shocked that yesterday's medicine worked so well because he usually feels like trash without his daily dose. But today he's sprinting around like a beast without even taking it while everyone watches in disbelief. Everyone's huddling up to talk about Eldon's condition, with one guy saying he just pushed himself way too hard and ran out of breath. The sickness is finally backing off, but the crew started gossiping about Eldon's health, with one guy saying he just overdid it and ran out of breath. And even though the worst is over, he's still not awed. Right in the middle of the clearing, there's this massive tent where everyone's meeting up. And once a hero calls them over, a man and a woman head straight to the table where the others are waiting. The group sat down to handle some serious business, starting with the king's message. And one guy was so hyped about the San Giovanni they shared that he couldn't even find the words. One guy explains that the San Giovanni situation is a total mess because the medicine is all gone and only seeds are left, and he swears he's not trying to make a quick buck off anyone. The crew realizes San Giovanni is almost impossible to handle without turning evil, but one guy argues they aren't the ones who used it and the hay ruined the seeds anyway, so he thinks they should let the people who actually took the medicine decide what happens next, since they were just trying to help. The crew decides to just forget the San Giovanni even exists, since they have no clue why it's wilting. So they leave the big decision to Sani and Aiken, and promise to back them up without needing any credit. One guy warned that if word got out about the San Giovanni, it would cause total chaos, so he begged everyone to keep it a secret. But another guy pointed out it could save a dying man and wondered if they should really stay quiet. They realized they couldn't save everyone even with the San Giovanni, and since it was way too much for one person to handle, they decided to trust Sani and Ichin's good hearts. Dia figured that if someone was meant to be saved, destiny would just lead them straight to Sinai and Icon. And even if the kids totally messed up, the adults would just shrug and say it was all part of fate's plan. Eldon told Kamalos to warn all the villages to keep their mouths shut, ASAP. And after Kamalos promised to handle it, the meeting got back on track with a messenger sharing the king's word. Diaz was totally blown away when they offered to make him a duke. And while everyone else stood around looking super awkward, he tried to tell them he was just a regular guy without a family name. Someone points out that since Diaz owns stuff, he needs a last name, and while everyone's shocked he never used one, he suddenly remembers it's Natris, which totally blows his own mind. They kept arguing about the Diaz name, but he admitted he hadn't even thought about it since he was rushed onto a plane. So someone reminded him the king's word is final. One guy explains that Diaz is officially a duke now, giving him a new last name and 3 years of total protection. Plus, he's got the king's sealed papers and orders to prove it. With the king about to lose his crown after a bunch of mess-ups, everyone thinks he gave Diaz that title just to have a powerful ally who can actually stand up to the royal family. At the meeting, they were stressing over the money for Diaz. But when someone tried to stall because of past losses, Diaz shut them down and said he didn't need their cash, or Diaz realized that if he'd shown up with royal gold and a crew, she might have never met Aru and everything would be different. But one guy said he's glad. The hero promised to protect the village and build a future right alongside everyone else. The crew talked about how they need to stand on their own 2 feet, and even though they're thankful for Eldon, they know they've got to handle business themselves, Diaz explained. The guy told Diaz he totally got him, but said he was wrong about 2 things. Their friendship wasn't just a one-way street, and Diaz was actually the reason they won so many battles. He explains that these government loans are basically a status symbol for nobles, and since more loans mean more voting power, he'll use his influence to back Diaz during the budget vote so nobody loses. During the meeting, they realize the state loan doesn't even need to be paid back and won't cost the king a single cent. Someone pointed out that this help isn't exactly a she got super emotional complaining about how trashed the road to Ilutz was, and while the guy she was talking to was shocked, everyone else pointed out that even the Duke of Casadika's carriage barely made it through, proving the road definitely needs a fix. One guy suggests building a massive road from Iluk to the city since the old path is a total nightmare, and everyone else jumps on board because they know a road means more growth and resources, so they take out a government loan since they're totally broke. Eldon was all for building the road since it'd make moving supplies and visiting way easier, and soon everyone was pitching in ideas for guard posts and rest stops that looked just like a pro-Death Stranding build. The group rushed off to find a spot for their project, and while they grabbed the tea promised in the letter, they started talking about Yuha. He's a nightmare to work with, but his lessons are pure gold. And even though he's super messy, the guys are chatting about Duke, and while one loves his peaceful vibes, the other is shocked a military scientist could hate war. But Duke thinks fighting is a total waste of time, and if humans don't stop, the monsters will definitely wipe them out. He believed that stopping a war with words was the ultimate move, so he joined the Royal Council to push for peace, but they called him a failure and kicked him out. Now, someone just got a letter saying they need a last name to get any answers. The crew finds out they can pick a brand new last name to pass down for generations, and while everyone else is hyped to share the same name, one guy gets so stressed by the big decision that he completely blanks, making his friends laugh at him for being such a chicken. Diaz knew picking a family name was a massive deal because it wouldn't just represent his family. It would be the name of his entire territory. And getting a title like this was a super rare honor he had to get right. Diaz sat at the table struggling to pick a last name, but since his brain was totally blank, he wished someone else would just do it for him. And right then, Uncle Ben walked in and apologized for the interruption. Uncle Ben finally picked a new name after checking with Arn, Un-O-Y, Sun, Sun-Nay, and Ian. And since he told them not to argue, a shocked Diaz demanded to hear the name before it was officially signed off. The old man reminded Diaz to stop being so formal since he'd finally earned his respect as a man. Then he officially wrote down the name Mayabadal because it was the perfect fit for both Diaz and the land he ruled. He asked what the name Miyabadal meant, and the old man explained it's for a hero who protects Mia, using an old word for brave, and he even said the name Diaz Miyabadal sounds super cool. I asked why they chose the name Mia, and it turns out it's to make friends with the local tribe since it means hero who protects Maya, which is a huge upgrade from the old name that literally meant unnecessary. He started wondering if that last name had some secret meaning. Then they told him using the name Mia Badao for the fabric was a genius move since it connects the brand to the town. The old man dreamed of building a legendary temple and asked Diaz to keep the family name alive until it was finished, especially since the whole village already looked up to the uncle for his wise advice and knew he. The old man explained that the temple was for Meha since she's God's messenger, and because that Arab Sanji Kavani is a gift from the heavens, if she really speaks. The old man knew they had a massive journey ahead, so he told everyone he'd stick around as their mentor for a bit. He promised to become a true gentleman for the sake of their parents. She asked if his new last name was official, and Diaz told her he just needed to hand the papers to the king before the massive party tonight, where Eldan and the crew would celebrate his new title. Diaz asked if they had anything like last names, but the woman was totally lost since they don't use surnames, though she did suggest naming the plane Mia Badal before the other girls jumped in to explain the whole father name thing. The girls were super hyped to explain how they take turns using the names Senya and Ikun as Diaz's kids, So Diaz told them these are called patronymics to show who you're hoy. They talked about how giving kids a last name makes them official heirs, but you have to act like a total royal to pull it off. So the woman wondered if she could snag a noble name and if Sinai and Aiken could actually be next in line. He was totally cool with them using the last name, but he insisted the girls make the choice themselves since being a fancy noble is way too stressful for kids, while the woman just smirked and said they'd eventually realize how much of a pain it really is. A guest at the party tells Diaz he's having a blast, but later he notices the kids of Sinai-chan and Ihan-chan staring at him, and Kamlot's like they've spotted something. Dia explained that Sin and I were so happy because Eldon and Kamlot's were finally getting over their sickness, and since we lost our own parents to that same disease, seeing others recover really hits home. The hero owned up to being totally clueless about the tiny species and thanked everyone for the help, thinking this spot was actually perfect for them, while the other guy realized he's still a total rookie. Feldon realized that money and words weren't enough to thank them for this new future, and even though he'd always dreamed of ending all the hate, he never thought he'd live to see it. But seeing everyone finally smiling together gave him the fire to spread that peace to the whole world. The hero reached out to Diaz for help, dropping the official act to admit he just couldn't do this alone, and Diaz promised he'd do whatever it takes to have his back. The heroes met up for another lesson on how nobles work, and one guy admitted he was still totally lost. Their teacher explained that the whole system was built to run the country and keep everyone competing, showing them the ranks from low-level barons all the way up to the big-shot dukes. The lesson breaks down how the nobles work, showing the hero that a duke is the top rank with the massive power to buy, sell, or develop land however they want to get rich and stay in control. Right in the middle of class, the hero decides to get practical, pointing at the map and offering to sell his land for a fair price. Not as a thank you, but for his own secret reasons. During the chat, someone noticed Diaz's wood came from Arunak, but when they asked where the village got it, they started to suspect it was actually stolen. Once it was obvious the wood was taken without asking, the girl apologized for staying quiet and offered to sell them what they needed to fix the mess. But Diaz just wanted to be paid back and even talked about buying the land himself to skip all the annoying rules. Diaz gets why they need the forest, but being a duke is a total balancing act since he can't just sell land where people live, and since the girl has no clue what it costs, he starts figuring out a price that works for everyone. Diaz offered to pay with loot from 2.5 wind dragons, which totally shocked the guys, but one of them admitted that while it was a super weird move, the value was way more than enough. At the LDAN meeting, he tried to talk business by calling it training, but Diaz felt totally out of his league and let LA take over, who ended up scoring all the timber they needed for the payment. Eldon headed home feeling totally satisfied after wrapping up his training and deals. And while Laura felt bad for keeping the forest a secret, Diaz told her it was no big deal since he did. Diaz promised he'd play fair and settle the land dispute with the ogres once and for all. Life in the village went back to normal, but that peace was just a total fake out. Prepping for winter means grabbing salt, hunting, and storing food, but there are big rules to follow. Don't mess with other villages, stay safe, and wait for the migratory birds to arrive. These two girls were begging to get into the forest, but the guy told them the paperwork wasn't finished yet, even though they were totally desperate to return to the place where they used to live with their families. Everyone was hyped when she said she finally got the okay to enter the forest, but she warned them they had to move fast before fall arrived since they'd be harvesting every day and totally needed Maya's help. Aruna hyped everyone up by announcing they're hitting the forest every day starting tomorrow, and while the squad is pumped for the harvest, the adults are getting serious about prepping for the winter. One of the adults warns them that the forest isn't just full of food. It's also packed with poison plants, creepy bugs, and monsters, so they have to follow the rules, but he's still confident the girls can handle themselves out there. Diaz shows Aruni which mushrooms are actually safe to eat, explaining he learned to survive as a war orphan, which totally shocks her since she says the kingdom's eastern forests are full of them, making him realize you really need to know your stuff to find food in the wild. The guy in that photo is actually a great mentor for anyone with a pregnant dog, and as a former priest, he's using his wisdom to help Francie right as she's about to give birth. The crew is busy gathering mushrooms when one guy reveals he's a survival expert from his days as a war orphan, leaving the girl totally shocked as they decide whether to fry, boil, or dry. Our girl starts using purification magic to figure out which mushrooms are safe to eat, but her friend thinks she's being way too paranoid and stops her right before she touches a toxic one. He explains, she suddenly realized Diaz was actually super reliable, and even though she used to think she knew more, she totally respected him now while the girls kept looking for food and found a nut tree. As the kids gathered nuts, An adult noticed they only took about 30% of them, and he was totally shocked that Sini and Lycan already knew the secret rule about not over-harvesting before winter. One of the girls explains that taking too much ruins the forest and starves the animals, which eventually hurts humans too, so the kids follow the rules while the adults clean up and only take what they... She explains that today was just a quick lesson on the rules, but they've still got a massive to-do list like gathering firewood and hunting older animals while making sure to leave the females alone during breeding season so they don't waste the young meat. As they get ready for winter, the guy says the forest is loaded with food if you work for it, even mentioning a special powder to lure animals for anyone who knows how to track, which makes the girl call him a real man since surviving the cold is basically impossible without someone strong around. She finally breathes a huge sigh of relief, admitting she used to lose sleep worrying about running out of food, but now she's calling this her best winter ever, thanks to her husband. Even this guy was determined to live up to the hype and not crack under the pressure, all while his teammates were busy gathering supplies in the forest. Diaz was checking out his pile of potatoes and wondering if he should save some for later when two girls walked up, totally shocked that he actually found them, so he, being a nice guy, invited. The girls explain it's not about the taste, but how tough the plants are, so they eat the weak ones and replant the strong ones to get a massive harvest later. The girls said that if you cram too many potatoes in one spot, they'll just get weak, so you've got to spread them out to get a massive harvest where they grow as tough as trees. Diaz remembered the girls talking about trees and figured they'd grow way better if they weren't so crowded. Then they explained that you need just the right amount of space for sunlight too. Diaz saw tons of mushrooms in the woods, but they tasted totally gross. The girls told him the forest was so crowded that the good trees couldn't grow, and all the healing herbs were disappearing. Diaz, our hero, literally burst out laughing when he heard Sinai and Icon were being called teachers just for picking which trees to cut. And while the girls were totally shocked by the title, the adults cheered. Aruna spots these weird mushrooms that look like they just popped up, but she's totally caught off guard when one starts shifting and blasts her with a cloud of spores as she tries to defend herself. The hero screamed in pure shock, calling out for Aruna as she lay there, totally still, next to a massive, creepy mushroom monster that had everyone losing their minds. The girls scream at Diaz to stay back from that crazy new magic gas mushroom, because its powder is super dangerous, but right as it starts spraying spores everywhere, he just charges straight in. Diaz charges the mushroom and rips through the spore cloud with a massive swing, but the monster fights back by pumping out even more gas, so he stays locked in and delivers one final blow too. Once the battle wraps up, the squad rushes over to check on Aruna, and thank goodness she's totally fine. So they explain they were just jumped by a crazy magic gas mushroom that was blasting poison powder everywhere. Diaz panics and asks if the mushroom is poisonous, but he's told she'll be fine even if she feels gross for a bit, just as AR finally wakes up and whispers his name. Still dazed from the poison, Yuna tells Diaz he looks just like a prince on a white horse, and a shocked Diaz can't believe she actually sees him like that. ARU starts tripping on the poison powder and calling Diaz a total legend, while everyone else realizes the stuff just makes you hallucinate and act crazy. Aruna is still totally losing it from the powder, acting super weird and rambling that she isn't even royalty, while the other girls sing a creepy song about a jealous king of leaves. This mysterious guy hears an old song and is totally shocked someone else knows it, thinking it must be magic, but the girl tells him it's not, so they decide to worry about it later. Diaz asks if these are the same mushrooms from yesterday, and after the girl confirms she fried them with salt just like he said, everyone starts loving the taste, but Aruna is still acting super nervous. The next day, he's back in the yurt staring hard at his maps and farm plans, and while his sheep are just chilling nearby, one of them lets out a little sound like it's actually asking what's wrong. Our MC was thinking over a deal from some outsiders to build a brand new road. She wanted to link the east and west, so all the big trade would have to go right through her. He wanted to upgrade the whole village and make life better for everyone, but he refused to hurt Mia's sheep or ruin the fields where they hung out. He knew those pastures were special, and Diaz was so stuck in his own head that he totally misread the sheep, thinking they were telling him to put himself first, so he decided the intersections were actually fine and started plotting his... Our hero was stressing about running out of cash, but the sheep acted like everything was totally fine as long as they had a plan, quickly distracting him with talk about a meeting and a big dinner. They told Diaz to be super careful with that rare map, and while one council member was down with his plan, he warned that Aruna and the others still needed to have their say. Diaz asked if Zort told everyone that thanks to a friend, he finally tried Aruna's cooking and was shocked at how tasty mushrooms could be, especially since he can now tell the safe ones from the poisonous ones. Meanwhile, Diaz admitted he still hadn't caught up with Chief Moru, and while everyone was stunned by how fast Zort showed up, the dog explained the chief had ordered him to find Diaz as soon as possible. Aaron's brother gave him major props for everything he's achieved. He finally got a last name, became a duke, and now he's busy building roads and leveling up. The crew started mapping out a road going west to east and then north to south. But since one tribe might get mad if they just start building, they're trying to get permission first, even though it's going to be a struggle, because they want to keep the peace despite all the tension. They keep talking, and one guy admits he's totally stuck on the road situation because he can't figure out who owns the land. So his buddy tells him to stop overthinking and just say what he wants directly. One hero suggested splitting the land right down the middle between the village and the tribe, but the other guy realized that sharing the center would make it a total nightmare to build any new roads going north or across the map. Diaz explained that the land isn't actually split into 4 zones, so everyone should just use the roads freely to avoid any drama, while he and his pigeon squad fly overhead to map the area and mark the borders with white stakes. One hero double-checked if everyone was down with the plan, and even though Aruna was totally on board, he worried the locals would think one tribe was hogging half the land, leading someone else to ask if they'd already started beefing. The hero admitted he didn't have a better plan, so he just split the land right down the middle, giving one half to the tribe as long as the kingdom stands and keeping the rest. Zord says if he were the boss, he'd sign the deal in a heartbeat, and the others agree that since fighting the kingdom is a death sentence, getting half the land is. One guy thinks Aruna played the long game since her kids inheriting the land means her family takes over, and it turns out she and Diaz actually agreed to this right after the wedding. He finally realized Aruna shared everything because she'd planned this whole setup from the start to link their tribes together, so he asked about the Duke and the laws to make sure he could. One guy swears he's got this and is going to take down the old lady, while the other is hyped because everything is going exactly as planned. And then we jump over to Malangal City in the Western Cascades. A bunch of hooded figures met up in secret to settle a debt, and right after the bag of coins changed hands, a long-haired blonde guy named Miza Sama showed up and everyone treated him like a total boss. Deep in an alley, Prince Richard's guy Norius watches Miza and realizes she's already making her move. He knows people are going to die and he's powerless to stop it. Everyone's gossiping that Eldon Sama is suddenly into horseback riding and sword fighting, and since he looks way more noble and the economy is actually doing better, people think he's finally making. They talk about how much the city has changed, where even fancy food is totally normal now and everyone seems way happier. And while one guy admits he usually hates cities, he actually feels at home here since this guy with the mug actually respects Eldon, but he's still stuck with Prince Richard's orders to trash the city. He's second-guessing it because the place is finally safe. This guy spots a rhino lady with some kids and wonders what they're doing out so late. But then he realizes they aren't even the same species, which just shows how insanely safe and chill this city is even in the middle of the night. Seeing all these different species just chilling together, he realized he couldn't fight the vibe anymore. The city's energy had totally won him over, and even with his big mission, he knew there was no turning back now. He reads the files and realizes someone is smuggling gear into the city, so he kicks his assistant out to wonder who's behind it and how they could actually take down the entire town. The tribe leader shows up to finish their deal and hand over part of the plane, saying they'll make it official later. But in the end, they're either starting their own nation or bowing down to Diaz. The elder confirmed everyone was on board except for Diaz and Aruna, checked the proof, and officially promoted him to the second candidate for the next chief. The elder is shaking things up, leading the expedition himself while putting you in charge of security because once the road is finished, a massive crowd is coming and the dragons are acting totally crazy, so we need. The elder lays out the plan with their new allies, promising the guards will jump in if things get ugly. And even though giving up land was a smart move, he warns everyone to stay alert. Eldon totally passed out from training too hard, but he's still trying to push through while his worried teammates beg him to just take a break and stop overdoing. Eldon is totally wiped out, but he keeps grinding because he knows he'll never catch up to Diaz if he stops now. Diaz lets out a sneeze, and suddenly everyone's asking if he's freezing, while the girls start teasing him and Aruna about warming them up until a super shy Aruna begs them to stop the jokes.